Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Let Us Head Fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Was Kidnapped by the Villains. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Deku had been gone for 3 months. 3 effing months where Katsuki had again and again failed to find him. 3 effing months where the fight played out in his head and he tried to find something. Anything he could have done to stop this. 3 effing months of minutes of sleep every night. 3 effing months without Izuku. Katsuki felt like he was dying. He knew his classmates could sympathize a little. Deku was the heart and soul of their group, but they didn't know him like Katsuki did. They didn't know that without Deku, they could never hope to be all that they could have been. Which is why when they tried to talk to him, to comfort him and tell him lies, he just turned away and kept his mouth shut. They didn't get it. They couldn't possibly get it. So Katsuki sat in his silence and his pain and devoted every second to getting Deku back. He filled pages of notebooks with theories and possibilities, just like Deku did. He went over that fight in his head a billion times a day, taking in the surroundings and quirks and any possible clue that could lead him to Deku. He stayed up late into the night and practiced different moves until he perfected them, too deep in his head to notice when the sun peeked over the horizon. He skipped meals to patrol the city, breaking out of his room so Aizawa wouldn't stop him. He barely heard it when people talked to him, and he certainly wasn't paying attention to lectures in school. When he got Deku back, when he was whole again, then he could go back to becoming a hero. Because what was the point of becoming a hero without Deku? Anyways, there would be no challenge, no reason to try, no reason at all. Through the fog in his head, Katsuki heard someone talking to him. He turned to see Kirishima and Mina standing next to his desk. He quickly glanced around the room, realizing that class had ended, then grabbed his notebook and stood from his chair. Bakugo, did you hear me? Kirishima asked, leaning over into Katsuki's sightline and waving his hand around. No, Katsuki answered curtly, pushing past them and heading for the door, ignoring their calls after him. If he left the campus now instead of going to the dorm first, he could avoid wasting time and get in a longer patrol. He could go back to the sewer system near where the fight took place and search for clues. There had to be something he hadn't noticed the past 32 times. Katsuki folded the thin notebook in his hand and shoved it into his pocket. He was still wearing his school uniform, but that didn't matter. Ever since the fight, he'd been wearing a smaller, portable version of his gauntlets at all times. Hatsu made them at his request, and he was able to hide them under the sleeves of his uniform jacket where his teachers and classmates couldn't see. They didn't have quite as much firepower, but they did damage and would be enough for a sneaky rescue. Because if he found those villains' hideout, there was no way in hell he was leaving without Deku. Izuku didn't know where he was, or who he was, or anything, really. Well, he did know a few things. He knew that the man in the bowler hat with the milky white eyes and spiky arms was the second most painful opponent out of them all. He knew the tall figure with the hood that released gas into the air made him feel sick and always laughed when he broke a bone. He knew the small man with the red glowing hands and red glowing horns didn't really care about his health, and only healed him so the others could hurt him again. And he knew the woman with the sharp teeth and sharp smile and sharp eyes and sharp words and sharp everything was in charge. And he knew he had to leave. So, he made a plan. He spent every second that he could searching for weaknesses in the attacks, weaknesses in the defenses of wherever he was being held. He didn't know much about himself or his quirk, but based on the attacker's reactions when he lost fights and the things he's overheard, it was a strong one. And for some reason, they wanted to know about it. And for some reason, something in his head screamed that he could not, under any circumstances, let that happen. The day of his escape, he went for the tall, hooded person first. As always, they were passed out by the entrance to the medical room, gas leaking out from under their cloak as they snored and giggled nonsense about violence. Izuku assumed this was a side effect of their quirk, but it could also be a side effect of them being a horrible person. It was almost funny how easy it was to steal from him. What kind of guard is unconscious at their post? He held his breath against the gas and carefully leaned down to snatch the ring of keys off their belt before shoving them in his blood-stained sweatpants pocket and hurrying into the medical office. He didn't know where he'd gotten the clothes he was wearing. He just knew that his captors wouldn't give him new ones, no matter how much he bled on them. After the man with the horns examined him and escorted him back to his cell, Izuku set phase 2 of his plan into motion. He knew his cell door locked on its own when it closed. And now that he had the keys, the captors wouldn't be able to get back in. He wanted to get out of here, wherever that may be, before the sharp lady came back and made him fight again. From what he could gather, the fights were tests of his quirk. They wouldn't stop hurting him until he used the quirk and fought back. Sometimes, on the worst days, he was told to do things he didn't know how to do, like use the black tendrils or fly, and he'd be unable to comply. Those days ended with the most blood. most pain, and most time under the glowing hands and horns. Focus, me. Shaking his head to get rid of the terror thoughts and focus himself on his mission, Izuku set his eyes on the impossibly high window in his cell. Its height led him to believe they were underground, and he had to jump up to it to achieve his escape. But, unbeknownst to his captors, Izuku had been practicing. He'd found that, if he really focused, he could channel whatever this power inside him was down to his legs and jump into the air. I can do this. Izuku crouched down and summoned the power in his legs, hearing the green lighting sizzle and crack quietly. Taking a deep breath, trying to calm the panicked beating of his heart, he jumped. He nearly whooped for joy as the floor whizzed away under him and he came closer and closer to the window until he remembered he still had to land. Shit. He threw himself at the window, hitting the solid wall and knocking the air out of him. His quirk stopped, and he panicked, scrambling his limbs over the wall as he started to slide down. Then, at the last second, he caught the window ledge with one hand and choked on a scream of pain. Everything hurt, forcing down more screams as his body cried out to stop. Izuku grabbed the ledge with his other hand and slowly pulled himself up. He didn't look down behind him, knowing if he did, he would definitely freak out and fall. He managed to yank himself up until his chest was above the window ledge and face was pressed up against the glass. There were bars on the other side of the window, but he was pretty sure this weird quirk of his could deal with that. He took another deep breath and activated his quirk, then punched the window as hard as he could, biting down on his lips so he didn't scream as the glass and metal cut his hand. He ignored the taste of blood as adrenaline shot through him. He was right. The metal bars broke away with one hit and skittered to a stop on the grass outside. The grass. Well, maybe calling it grass was an overstatement. It was really just patches of dead yellow stuff on gray-brown dirt. But Izuku hadn't seen outside since whenever he was captured. He hated that he remembered certain things, like grass, but not others, like his own effing name or how long it had been. The captors had called him Midoriya once, so he assumed that was the name. Not a full name, though. Izuku grinned, adrenaline and joy of freedom overcoming the immense pain, and scrambled through the window and out into the world. He tried his best to keep himself from dragging over the broken glass but couldn't avoid a few grazes. It didn't matter, though, because he was free. Free, almost, he reminded himself, jumping up from the ground and wiping the tears from his eyes. He could feel dirt and blood smear on his cheeks in their place, but he didn't care. He looked around, trying to get a bearing of his surroundings. There was lots of tightly packed dirt and more patched of dead grass. Looking up, he noticed a few warehouses in the distance that looked like they would topple over at the slightest gust of wind. Turning behind him, he saw another warehouse, this one slightly less broken down. The window he had climbed out of was a floor window, meaning he was right about being hidden underground. To his left was a chain-link fence, and Izuku could see the blinking lights of a city across a hill or two. He was suddenly hit with the impulsive need to run. So run he did. When Izuku came to again, he was slumped over on a bench. He felt like he was going to throw up. His head was spinning. His entire body was screaming. Crap, everything hurt so much. He couldn't count the number of places he was bleeding from. How did he get here? Did he black out while running? Probably. And now his adrenaline rush was gone, so he was feeling all the pain come back. He forced his eyes open enough to see and looked up. There was real, lush, green grass under his feet and trees around him. He almost started sobbing right then and there. A few feet in front of the bench was a gravel walking path, but no people. Izuku paused for a moment, confused. Then he saw a woman across from him and understood. She looked at him with wide, frightened eyes, then quickly turned away and headed the other direction. He must look like death, all covered in blood and dirt and bruises. But wouldn't people want to help him? He was a kid, after all. He didn't know how old a kid, but he felt like he wasn't much older than the teenage boy he saw walking down the path towards him. Wait, Izuku squinted at the boy, unsure of what he was feeling. Izuku tilted his head and leaned towards him a bit. There was a nagging tug at the back of his mind as he dragged his eyes over the spiky, ash-blonde hair and gray school uniform. He wanted to go to this boy. Did he know him? The boy was looking down at the ground, seemingly deep in thought, so Izuku couldn't quite see his face, though he doubted he would have recognized it anyways. But he just felt so familiar. And then the boy looked up and Izuku's eyes met crimson-red ones. And the tiny voice in the back of his mind became a scream. I know you. You're one who knows. Then, the boy's red eyes widened, and he started running at Izuku. Izuku's instincts were quicker than his mind, and he was on his shaky feet, activating his quirk and putting his bloody fists in front of his chest. Every muscle in his body was begging him to just die already, but he wasn't going to let this boy take him down without a fight. Maybe he knew this boy as an enemy, not a friend. Did he even have friends? Stay the hell away from me. He managed to yell, voice cracking and wobbly. I'm effing dangerous, and I'll kill you. He was literally shaking on his feet, and suddenly the boy in front of him skidded to a stop. Izuku didn't let his guard down. Yeah, back off. I don't care what you know. Izuku tried, not entirely aware of what he was saying. If this boy fought him, he was going to die. Shit, he might die just standing here. The world was spinning again, and the ground swayed out from under him. The last thing he heard was, Deku. He thought the voice reminded him of someone. Katsuki rushed to his side just in time as Deku toppled to the side, dropping to his knees to catch him and lower him to the ground slowly. His mind was racing. Deku was back, but something was obviously very, very wrong. For one, Deku was covered in blood. It was caked in his matted green curls. It dripped down his knuckles. It stained his ripped-up white shirt and gray sweatpants. It dried on his freckled cheeks and the corners of his mouth. It soaked through his torn shirt. His arms were painted in shades of black and blue under the splatters of blood and new scarring. He looked an inch away from death, and Katsuki choked on a sob. And he'd told Katsuki to stay away. He said he was dangerous, and he looked scared of him again. And that broke Katsuki's heart most of all. Deku knew how badly he'd failed. Deku blamed him for this, and he was right. Katsuki would have to deal with that later, though, because right now he had to get Deku to somewhere safe. He had to get him back to UA and the teachers. He had to be stronger now because he'd effing failed before. Holding back his stupid, weak tears, Katsuki put an arm under Deku's back and knees and lifted him up with a grunt. He was lighter than he used to be. Shit, how much food had he gotten? Going as fast as he could while being careful not to jostle Deku and worsen his wounds, he made his way back to school. By the time he arrived at front door of the teacher dorms, his uniform jacket was soaked with blood. Deku's blood. He kicked the door as hard as he could repetitively, becoming panicked. He needed a teacher here, and he needed to get Deku to Recovery Girl now. He almost started screaming when the door finally swung open, revealing a very grumpy Aizawa-sensei. Him. Bakugo. What the Aizawa-sensei's eyes suddenly widened as he realized what was in front of him, and Katsuki shoved past him and gently laid Deku on a couch. We need Recovery Girl, right effing now, he snapped. Aizawa-sensei blinked at him, and Katsuki nearly set off an explosion in his face. Aizawa, get her here now, he screamed. Aizawa jumped and ran out the door. As soon as he was out of view, Katsuki broke into sobs and dropped to his knees by the couch. His hands were bloodied. And when he noticed, he started crying even harder. He hadn't been there in time. He hadn't been able to save him. He failed him. And look what happened to him because of that. Katsuki choked on another cry and leaned over Deku's face, pressing their foreheads together like he used to when they were kids. Don't you dare effing die on me, nerd, he whispered, then broke into another round of sobs, tears falling on Deku's face and making tracks in the blood and grime. God, he was pathetic. I am so effing sorry. It was a useless apology, but he couldn't stop himself from saying it. Soon, he was being pulled back by Present Mike and Aizawa-sensei as Recovery Girl swooped in to start her work. He couldn't stop crying, so he turned back and shoved his face into Aizawa-sensei, gripping a fistful of his shirt in his bloodied hands and pulling him closer as he shook with tears. When Izuku woke up, he was staring at a cream-colored ceiling he didn't recognize. He immediately shut his eyes against the bright light, groaning. Shit, where was he? Immediately, his defenses were on high alert. He shot up from where he was laying down, a couch, and brought his arms up over his face. But something was different. He wasn't bleeding anymore. There were bandages on his hands, arms, chest, and legs, and when he moved his arms, they didn't hurt as much. It was more of a dull ache than the same sharp pain. It was similar to when the Horned Man healed him. Did they get him back? The panic overflowed in his chest and he turned to jump off the couch, only to find a sleeping person on the ground. He squinted and leaned over the side of the couch, still carefully aware of everything around him. The boy from earlier was there. The one with the ash-blonde hair and red eyes. The one he thought he knew. The one who maybe tried to attack him. What was he doing here? Did this boy kidnap him? The room didn't look like anything from before. Everything was brighter, and the couches were clean and blue, not covered in cigarette ash and beer stains. The coffee table a few feet away had a neat stack of magazines on it. And Izuku saw a picture of a grinning blonde man with huge red wings on the front of the top one. Izuku frowned. It didn't matter how nice this place looked. He could never be sure of his safety. He took another look around, searching for exits or possible traps. What seemed to be the front door was only a little way away from the couch Izuku was on, but the boy was still asleep on the floor beside him. Must not be a very good guard. Izuku would just have to sneak out quietly. He slid himself over the back of the couch carefully, landing softly on the cool tile floor. He glanced back at the boy, but there was no movement, so he took that as his cue to make a break for the door. Midoriya. Izuku froze, halfway to the door. They said his name. At least, what he thought was his name. How did they know his name? That means they had to be with the sharp lady. Izuku nearly threw up from fear, then steeled himself and activated his stupid quirk, turning to face a smiling man with bright yellow blonde hair and glasses. He didn't look like the rest of his captors, but that could easily be a ruse. Izuku had made it this far, and he wasn't going to give up now. He mustered up a glare. I'm not letting you a-holes take me back. he declared, voice shaking in a way he hated. Come on, he had to be stronger than that. The man didn't move. Izuku didn't understand. What? Force me to fight every day and now you just give up? He didn't know why he was egging him on. He should just run. Yeah, he really should just run. He slowly shuffled backwards towards the door as the man walked towards him. Midoriya, what are you talking about? The man asked, sounding almost genuine. But Izuku knew better. Izuku snarled at him. How dare he play innocent? Screw you, he yelled before turning around and bolting towards the door. Suddenly, an arm was around his waist and dragging him back. He shoved his elbow behind him with force, hitting whoever was behind him but not making them let go. Oi, Deku. What the hell? Izuku faltered, recognizing the voice as the one he heard before he passed out, the one that seemed familiar. When he turned, he was face to face with the blonde boy from before. For some reason, his panic lessened. He tilted his head and inspected the face of the boy, the nagging tug having returned. The boy was still holding him in place with an arm around his waist. Do I know you? He finally asked. The boy's red eyes went slightly wide and Izuku took his moment of surprise to twist out of his arms, but didn't run. Something inside was telling him to stay here. What? A boy responded. Izuku frowned, backing away a little. I feel like I know you. Do you work for the sharp lady? You feel the sharp lady. Deku, what the hell is going on? The boy snapped, glaring. Who the hell is Deku? Izuku shot back. The other boy's expression shattered, and his shoulders slowly dropped. You're Deku, he answered, sounding almost like he was pleading. Izuku glared at him. The only name I seem to have was Midoriya. I don't recall any Deku. Not that I remember anything else. Look, do you work for them or not? Work for who? The yellow-haired man asked gently, coming around to face Izuku. The blonde boy looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. The sharp lady, Izuku cried, throwing his hands up. Stop playing innocent and shit. If it wasn't her, then who hired you? The man put a hand out and started to approach him, so Izuku jolted back and brought up his fists again. The man quickly backed off. Midoriya, no one hired us. Do you remember anything from 3 months ago? Izuku scowled. I'm not playing mind games, okay. Since when do you guys do that? He spat. Aren't you just gonna beat the shit out of me again? The man frowned at him, looking sad. Oh god. Izuku ignored him, instead turning to the blonde boy next to him. He was staring at Izuku with an expression Izuku could only describe as devastation. Suddenly, the nagging tug became a full-on pull, and the voice was back to screaming in his head. I know you. You know. What do you know? He asked quietly. The boy blinked at him. Huh. Izuku moved towards him. I do know you, don't I? I know you. I trust you. I need to protect you. Izuku didn't even try arguing with the voice in his head. It was too strong. The boy opened his mouth like he was going to answer but didn't say anything. You're not with them, Izuku breathed, almost smiling. You're not, are you? Where am I, then? Who are you? He was addressing everything to the blonde boy, who was staring at him, dumbfounded. You're right, we're not with villains, the yellow-haired man answered for him. I'm Present Mike, one of your teachers. Izuku didn't look at him. But who are you? He asked the boy. Katsuki, the boy finally answered. And you know me? Izuku asked. Yeah, Katsuki confirmed. What's my name? Midoriya Izuku. Izuku frowned. Midoriya Izuku, he repeated, testing the feel of the words. It felt right. But what about Deku? Nickname, Katsuki explained. He sounded like everything he was saying was forced through tears. It made sense. If he knew this boy well enough to feel something through his amnesia, then they must have been close. Izuku forgetting him would probably hurt. Oh, Izuku looked up to meet the boy's red eyes. Look, Katsuki. Katsuki seemed to flinch at his own name. I don't. Izuku sighed. I don't know why, but for some reason I know that I know you. I guess. I'm sorry for not remembering. What? Katsuki snapped, suddenly not sounding so sad. Don't be stupid, it wasn't your effing fault. Izuku startled at the sudden change and took a step back, then paused. Did he get out okay? Before he knew why, he closed the distance between him and Katsuki and grabbed onto his shoulders, locking their eyes. Did you get out okay? He echoed the voice. Wait, what voice? Did he get out from what? What? Katsuki said, eyes wide. Izuku startled and let go of him, backing away. I'm sorry, I don't know why I did that. Did he think something? He did, right? Why did he say that? Before Katsuki could respond, the front door opened and a shaggy man with long black hair and all black clothes stepped into the building. Izuku yelped in surprise and immediately moved in front of Katsuki to block him from a new possible attacker. The man glanced at him and gave him a tiny, weird smile. Midoriya, you're awake. Izuku growled at him quietly and Katsuki put a hand on his shoulder. Deku, what are you doing? Protecting you, I think, Izuku explained. He wasn't sure why he did it either, it just felt like an instinct. He felt Katsuki stiffen behind him. Protect, I don't effing need protection. He snapped, pushing him lightly out of the way. I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on. Izuku whispered. Things keep happening and I can't control what I'm doing. Everything is so effing scary. Are you sure I'm not gonna have to fight again? The yellow-haired man, present Mike, walked over to the dark man's side and told him something quietly. The other man's face fell. Fight, Katsuki whispered back. What do you mean? Izuku was starting to panic as the two men whispered back and forth. Whatever they were talking about could not be good. They were going to spring something on him at any moment, and he wasn't so sure he could fight back right now. He grabbed Katsuki's arm and locked eyes with him, pleading to whatever god was out there that he could trust him. Please, I don't know why, but you're the only person I trust, so please tell me they're not going to hurt me anymore. Please, Katsuki, I can't take it. They're not going to hurt you, Katsuki said, the sincerest Izuku had heard him so far. I promise, nobody here is going to hurt you. Izuku immediately believed him with his whole heart. Okay, he said quietly. He suddenly felt very unstable on his feet and swayed a bit before falling against Katsuki. Good night. Katsuki's world was shattering. Deku didn't know him anymore. He didn't remember what happened, and he seemed so effing scared. What happened to him? What exactly did Katsuki's failure put him through? The terrified shaking in Deku's voice was almost physically painful. He felt like his heart had been splintered to pieces, and now somebody was taking each individual bit and smashing it to dust. Deku fell against him, murmuring something unintelligible and falling asleep almost on the spot. Katsuki quickly moved to hook his arms under Deku's, then lifted him up gently and laid him back on the couch. His green curls were still greasy and matted with the bits of dried blood recovery girl couldn't get out with the washcloth. His face was cleaner now, but his eyes still looked sunken with the dark bags. It felt wrong to look at. This wasn't Deku. Deku had bouncy green curls and a freckled baby face, and he had his sunny, bright smile. He didn't look so crushed. Suddenly, Deku shifted on the couch and his hand twitched. Something in his mind told Katsuki to grab the hand. So he did, interlacing his fingers with Deku's crooked, bandaged, scarred ones. He sighed quietly, the grief and regret weighing heavily in his chest. Bakugo, a quiet voice said from behind him. Aizawa-sensei. What? He responded, not turning away from Deku. Are you okay? I'm effing fine, he snapped. He didn't need pity for dealing with the consequences of his own mistakes. Can you tell us everything that happened, then? Katsuki huffed, letting go of Deku's hand briefly so he could turn around and sit on the floor, leaning against the couch. He immediately reached up and grabbed Deku's hand again. It was warm, and the heat let him know Deku was still alive. Like what? Aizawa-sensei and present Mike sat on the couch across from the coffee table, watching him. How about how you found him? Aizawa-sensei asked. I was walking around the park and found him on a bench, Katsuki answered, squeezing Deku's hand to push away the memories. For a split second, he thought Deku was a ghost, or a dead body. You just found him there. Katsuki nodded. Crazy nerd probably escaped on his own. And then what happened? Katsuki took a deep breath. I ran towards him, but he suddenly jumped up and activated his quirk. He looked ... like he thought I was going to attack him. He started yelling at me to go away, then passed out. I barely caught him and brought him straight back here. Why was there blood all over your shirt? Aizawa-sensei asked, frowning. He must have thought they'd been in a fight. Katsuki almost shivered and squeezed Deku's hand again. It wasn't mine. He ... he was bleeding a lot. I mean, from everywhere. I thought Katsuki squeezed his eyes shut to avoid crying. I thought he was effing dead. Bakugo, present Mike started. We are so sorry you had to go through that. But you brought him back. He's going to be okay. Except he doesn't effing remember anything. Katsuki yelled. Deku jolted slightly in his sleep and Katsuki quickly settled down. He said he thought he knew you. Present Mike said. Did he say anything else like that? He said. Katsuki paused to remember. He said that didn't know what was going on, but everything felt scary and he kept doing and saying things by accident. At one point he came up to me and asked if I got out okay, but after that he didn't seem to know what he was talking about. For a second, the sincerity in Deku's voice made Katsuki think he remembered, but he hadn't. And he also ... he also said he trusted me and made me promise no one was going to hurt him or make him fight here. Katsuki felt anger and guilt boil in his chest. I don't know what those F-ers did to him, but I'll kill them if I see them. For once, Aizawa-sensei didn't reprimand him. The teacher sighed wearily and rubbed his hands over his face. We should call his mother. He might not remember her, Katsuki said, even though he was sad to say it. Auntie and Co didn't deserve that. Not after all she'd already gone through with her son. It was a miracle the woman still let Deku out of her sight. Aizawa-sensei sighed again and stood from the couch. She still would want to know her son is okay. Maybe he can stay with her for the time being. Katsuki's heart clenched in panic at that suggestion. Then he chided himself for being selfish. She was his mother and he was her son. They deserved to be together. Deku would survive without him, and he would survive without Deku. He wasn't that effing pathetic. Aizawa-sensei left the room to go call Ko, and Katsuki turned back to a sleeping Izuku, resting his chin on the edge of the couch and watching his chest move up and down with each breath. As long as Deku was breathing, it would all be fine. Katsuki woke up to the sound of knocking on the door. He heard Aizawa-sensei walk across the room to answer it and slowly sat up, blinking to sleep away and looking around. He felt something in his hand and realized his fingers were still interlaced with Deku's. He almost smiled. Deku looked serene in his sleep, so unlike the fearful, jumpy person he'd been earlier. Katsuki could almost believe nothing had happened at all, if it weren't for the bandages covering nearly every inch of him. Somebody gasped behind him, and he turned to find Auntie and Co watching him and Deku with a hand on her chest, tears streaming down her face. "Hey, Auntie," he said carefully, letting go of Deku's hand and standing up. Suddenly, Katsuki felt warm arms wrap around him and squeeze him tightly. He stiffened, then awkwardly patted the tiny woman on the back to return her hug. "Thank you, Katsuki," she almost whispered, stepping away from the hug. There was the guilt again. He didn't deserve her thanks. It was his fault her son was captured in the first place. He didn't say anything, though, just stepped back a little to let her see Deku. She reached out to gently brush the hair off his forehead and knelt down to press a quick kiss to his cheek. "My baby boy," she murmured, "it's Mom. I love you so much." Deku stirred slightly in his sleep, shifting his head to the side with the hint of a peaceful smile on his lips. Katsuki's breath caught in his throat for a second, and Ko smiled back through her tears and caressed her son's cheek, kissing his forehead then standing up again. She turned her teary green eyes on Katsuki, and it struck him again how much Deku was like his mom. "Katsuki, Aizawa told me some things, but I would like to hear it from you if you could." She sounded so calm, and Katsuki knew it was because she was feeling the same as he had earlier. "As long as he's alive, as long as he's here, it'll be okay." Katsuki nodded. "Of course, Auntie. I can tell you everything I know." He sat down next to her on one of the couches and told her what he'd told his teachers earlier, only leaving out the parts about the excessive blood and thinking Deku was dead. She didn't need to hear that. After telling her about his promise to Deku that no one would hurt him, he was finished, and she looked pensive, her tears having nearly gone away. Then she looked to Katsuki and opened her arms for another hug. Katsuki gladly obliged, holding her as tightly as she held him. "Thank you for taking care of him, Katsuki," she said, sending another pang of guilt through his heart. They pulled out of the hug and Inko gave him a sad smile. "I don't know what I'd do without you." That made Katsuki nearly start crying. He didn't deserve this. He failed Deku. He failed Inko. Before he could bring himself to say any of that, Aizawa-sensei appeared behind the couch and took Inko's attention. "Ms. Midoriya, while your son has obviously sustained injuries, Recovery Girl healed him enough for him to go home with you if you would like. He might have to come back occasionally, but we don't want to keep him from you any longer." The unwelcome panic wormed its way back into Katsuki's chest. Even as Inko smiled at Aizawa-sensei, she turned back to Katsuki and gave him that sad, pensive look, then looked to her son. "Actually, Mr. Aizawa, I think my Izuku should stay at UA," Inko said. Both Aizawa-sensei and Katsuki blinked at her in surprise. "What? From what you and Katsuki have told me, Izuku would not take kindly to waking up in another strange place, especially separated from Katsuki again." Inko reached out to place a hand on Katsuki's arm, meeting his eyes with a warm, sorrowful look. "I know he trusts you, so I trust you. But, Auntie, what about you?" Katsuki knew that if he felt this panicked about leaving Deku, she must feel the same or worse. She sighed. "I will come visit as often as I can, and maybe you could stay here." Aizawa-sensei suddenly cut in. Both Inko and Katsuki gave him a confused look. "There's a spare room in the teacher's dorm. If you wanted to, you could move in temporarily so that you and Bakugo could stay close to Midoriya and Bakugo could continue his schooling." "Mr. Aizawa, I wouldn't want to intrude," Inko protested, but Aizawa-sensei waved a hand. "It's no intrusion, Mrs. Midoriya. We know how much you've done for your son, and how much he's done for us in turn. We would be happy to return the favor." Katsuki was slightly baffled. Aizawa-sensei was never this openly generous or polite. Inko smiled and started crying again. Yes, she and her son were very much alike. "Oh, that would be wonderful," she said, standing from the couch and going to press another kiss to her sleeping son's forehead. "Thank you so much, Mr. Aizawa." She bowed to him, and Aizawa-sensei bowed back. "It's nothing," he assured her. Inko quickly made her way to him and wrapped him in a hug. If Katsuki wasn't feeling so many other things at that moment, he might have laughed at Aizawa-sensei's reaction. He went stiff as a board and looked down at the tiny green-haired woman clutching him, then awkwardly gave her back a pat, not unlike Katsuki had. Inko pulled away and wiped her tears, sniffling. "Thank you so much, really. I'll go get some stuff from our home." She turned back one more time before leaving. "Katsuki, please remember to call your mother, or I will first." Katsuki stifled a groan. "Yes, Auntie." With another sniffle and smile, she was gone. Katsuki and Aizawa-sensei stood in silence for a bit, the only sound coming from Deku's steady breathing. "They are," Aizawa-sensei started to say, "very similar people." Katsuki nodded and looked down at Deku. "Always have been." I guess he had to get it somewhere. Aizawa-sensei shrugged. Bakugo, you should get some rest. Go back to your room, maybe. Katsuki shook his head aggressively. No, Aizawa-sensei sighed like he shouldn't have even tried. Well, at least try to sleep on one of the couches. I doubt he'll be up for a while. Katsuki didn't have it in him to protest, flopping down on the couch across from Deku so he could watch him breathing. He doesn't remember when he drifted off to sleep. Izuku woke up to the same cream-colored ceiling and breathed in deeply, feeling peaceful for the first time since he could remember. Though, to be fair, he couldn't remember that long. He sat up slowly and stretched out his aching, bandaged arms, yawning. How long did he sleep? He hadn't gotten much sleep when he was with the sharp lady, so he could have been out for who knows how long. Looking around, he noticed that he was still in the same room as earlier, with the clean blue couches and shiny coffee table and soft, bright light. The only difference was that now, instead of being on the floor, Katsuki was sitting on the couch across from him, staring at him with a book in his lap. Izuku blinked at him and cleared his throat awkwardly. Good morning. Katsuki quirked up an eyebrow. It's 1 in the afternoon. Oh, Izuku rolled his shoulders back and forward again, trying to get a crick out of his upper back. Crap, everything felt so creaky. A fight would be a struggle. How long did I sleep? Almost 2 days, Katsuki answered. Izuku gaped at him. 2 days. Shit. Katsuki frowned at him. You're swearing a lot. Everyone swore, Izuku explained. Why should I stop here? Oh no, it's rude, isn't it? I'm going to get in trouble. Shit. No. Darn it. Gah. Izuku was starting to panic ramble now. What were punishments like here? Back with Sharp Lady. It meant an extra round with the man with spiky arms. Izuku felt the blood rush from his face. I'm sorry. I don't want to get in trouble. Please don't get me in trouble. I can't. Suddenly, Katsuki was right in front of him. Hey, shut up. You're not gonna effing get in trouble. Izuku blinked at him, then smiled and let out a tiny laugh. It felt weird. Okay, Katsuki. He saw Katsuki flinch again slightly at his own name, but didn't mention it. I only mentioned it because you didn't swear ... before, Katsuki finished awkwardly. Ah, I see, Izuku said. I will try to get back to my angelic self. Nah, you can keep saying F. Less boring that way, Katsuki said, sounding like he was trying to joke but struggling a bit. Izuku appreciated the effort. Hardy har, he deadpanned. Don't worry, I learned plenty swears from the drunkard a whole. The who? Ah, Izuku said, realizing Katsuki didn't know all his captors. One of the people that held me captive, or whatever, was a guy who always had this creepy cloak on with a hood that covered his face, and he always seemed kind of drunk. I think it had something to do with his quirk, because he released this weird gas that always made me feel loopy and sick. He swore a lot. He didn't understand how being around anyone else made him clam up. But being around Katsuki made him feel like a bottle of shaken-up sparkling cider with the cork popped off. The words just spewed out. He couldn't shut up. He suddenly heard Katsuki growl, a low, quiet sound in his throat. He turned to stare. What? Katsuki glared at the wall behind him. I remember that guy. In my head he's the loopy effer I'm going to murder. You remember him? What do you mean? Katsuki looked slightly surprised, then shook his head. Never mind, I'll tell you all that later. Your mom is here, by the way. My ... mom. Katsuki nodded. Here, Izuku felt weird. What was his mother like? Could he trust her? He hoped so. Mothers were people who loved you. Right. She's staying here for a while. Izuku frowned. I have a couple questions about that. Katsuki leaned back against the coffee table. Go ahead. Okay, where exactly is here? Izuku asked first. In general, we're at UA High School, where both you and I are in second year, studying to be heroes. More specifically, we're in the teachers' dorms. Izuku shook his head, not sure if he heard that right. Heroes? Like, a memory suddenly struck him, like All Might. He grinned at the remembered name. Hey, I remembered that. All Might is a hero, right? Katsuki watched him with what might have been a smile. He was a hero. He's retired now and teaches at UA. Oh, okay. Izuku smiled again, still happy about remembering something. Next question. Why is my mother staying here? To stay with you. With me. So, am I staying here too? She ... Katsuki trailed off, looking at the ground. She assumed you'd want to stay with me, but if you don't. Oh, I definitely do, Izuku answered quickly. I have no idea why, but the idea of being away from you makes me so scared I want to die. Literally everyone else could be a effing villain for all I know. Katsuki glanced back up, looking a little surprised. Oh, well, there aren't any villains at UA, I can promise you that. Right, Izuku said, mostly to himself. You promised that I'd be safe. Yeah, and I'm always effing good on my promises, Katsuki declared. Izuku smiled at him for no reason at all. So, does that mean I'm going to hero school with you? That'll be interesting. I've only been around villains. Only if you want to. Where you go, I go, Izuku said firmly. The voice in his head was practically screaming at him to not let Katsuki go anywhere without him, and he was going to listen. Oh, Katsuki said again. Our classmates will be happy to see you. Izuku frowned, confused for a second until he remembered that Katsuki said he went to UA, too. I don't remember any of them. Katsuki shrugged. Maybe you will when you see them. Maybe, Izuku agreed, not really believing it. Am I going to see my mom? Do you want to? Izuku thought on that. He wasn't really sure, but if Katsuki was there, it would all be fine. If she wants to see me, then okay. Katsuki pushed himself to his feet. Okay, I'll go get her. Stay here. Won't move a muscle, too scared. Izuku told him truthfully. Katsuki disappeared up the stairs and came back a few minutes later with a small woman holding onto his arm. She had long, dark green hair that made Izuku reach up and pull on a strand of his own hair to see the color. He realized with a start he had a very blurry image of what he looked like. Then woman smiled at him, and he saw that she was crying. He instinctively shrunk back into the arm of the couch and stared at her, feeling like a cornered animal. He felt a small pull towards this woman, but something was telling him he couldn't trust her completely. She doesn't know. The woman stepped towards him and he drew in a sharp breath, trying to stop the panic. Izuku, she said softly. Hello, he squeaked. Are you a? Katsuki said my mom was here. Is that you? The woman started crying harder. Yes, honey, I'm your mother. Oh, he said, guilt washing over him at her broken expression. I kind of think I know you, he tried. I'm sorry, honey, it's okay. It's not your fault, she assured him, wiping the tears from her cheeks and stepping towards him. He forced himself not to jolt away. Can I touch you? Izuku swallowed nervously and let himself focus on the pull he felt towards the woman instead of the fear, then slowly held his hands out. She took his hands in hers gently, rubbing her thumbs over the tops of the bandages and not looking away from his face. Unable to keep meeting her teary gaze, he dropped his eyes to their hands. I punched a window, he told her, feeling the need to explain the bandaged hands, to get free. But it's okay, my hands don't hurt anymore. I'm glad they don't hurt. Izuku. Something caught on his heart when he heard her say his name, and he looked up at her, tilting his head. I love you, Mom. I'm so sorry. Mom, Izuku started to say, then cut himself off, jolting back and shaking his head. The woman was no longer holding his hands. He called her Mom. Why? He was going to say something else, wasn't he? I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on. I know that I know you, but he stopped, unable to explain. This doesn't make any sense. He curled up on the couch, pressing his forehead into his knees. I hate this. He felt a hand on his back and jerked away before looking up to see Katsuki's red eyes and relaxing again. I'm so sorry, he choked out through tears, looking up at the woman. I'm trying to remember, but it's all gone. I have this feeling that I know you, but there's nothing there. Oh, honey, the woman, his mother, said, leaning towards him and brushing a tear off his cheek. It's okay, I still love you. You're my son. Izuku nodded, grabbing her arm. And you are ... my mom. Mom, my mom named Inko, his mother provided. He nodded again. My mother Inko. Your name is Inko. And his name is Katsuki, and the other man is Present Mike, and I am Izuku, he said, like saying it aloud would make him remember. It didn't, but it did calm him down a bit. Then he startled, unexplainable panic rising again. Wait, what's the other guy? He cried, breathing faster, the scruffy man ... with the black hair, who is he? That's Aizawa-sensei, our teacher, Katsuki explained, and the hero Eraserhead. Aizawa-sensei, Eraserhead, Izuku repeated. Hero, so, he's safe. Very safe, his mother assured him. He cares about you a lot. He's scary, Izuku admitted. His hair looks like the drunkard's cloak, all creepy and covering his face. The drunkard? His mother asked quietly. Izuku just nodded. So Katsuki explained, one of the villains. He gave them names. Izuku kept nodding, struggling to focus on the conversation and grabbing onto his next train of thought. Yes, names. Drunkard, Red Horn Man, Venom, Spiky Arms, Sharp Lady. I hate them. Before he knew it, he was shouting. I hate them. Katsuki squeezed him tighter, grounding him a bit. Hey, it's okay. They're not here. Izuku leaned into him, trying to slow his breathing, and reaching up to grab his mother's hands. Right, not here. Here I have my mom, Inko, and my friend, Katsuki, and myself, Izuku. The names calmed him again and he sniffled, realizing he'd been crying. Sorry. No, darling, don't apologize, his mother said, squeezing his hands. It must have been scary. It's okay to be scared still. Izuku swallowed more thick tears. I am very scared, he admitted. Everything is scary. His mother leaned in to hug him while Katsuki squeezed his shoulders tighter. It's okay, Izuku, she assured him softly. Katsuki, Mr. Aizawa, Mr. Present Mike, and I are all here to keep you safe. And I am going to keep you safe, too, he said, listening to the voice in his head. Because I'm supposed to. I know that. I don't know many things, but I know that. When she pulled away, his mother was smiling. Now that sounds a lot like my Izuku. Really? She nodded, and Izuku felt Katsuki let him out of his hold. He felt colder without his warmth close by. It sure effing does, Katsuki said, but you're not protecting anybody until you heal. I had to fight plenty of people feeling worse than this, Izuku told them. Their faces fell. What? Had to fight? His mother echoed, voice shaking. Izuku curled in on himself a bit. I don't know why they made me do it. He felt the blood drain from his face, flashes of memories passing by, blurred by blood and tears. Hey, it's fine, Katsuki said, snapping him out of it. We can talk about that later. Izuku nodded and dropped his head onto Katsuki's shoulder, sighing. Yes, honey, you don't have to tell us anything until you want to, his mother said, but I think right now you should get cleaned up. Can I have new clothes? He asked, hugging himself against the cool air on his bare skin. Katsuki nodded. Sure, I can go to your dorm and… No, Izuku yelped, grabbing his arm before he could stand. Don't go. Katsuki looked at him, shocked for a moment, then patted his hand and settled back on the floor. I can go, his mother suggested. Katsuki patted his sides like there should be pockets there, then made a small O with his mouth. Oh, I don't have my keys anymore, they were in my… They locked the dorms during the school day, so you won't be able to get in. I'll ask Mr. Aizawa for a key, Izuku's mother said, squeezing Izuku's hands one more time before backing away. Katsuki nodded. Right, Deku's room is second floor, second down on the left, Katsuki told her. She nodded and went back up the stairs. After a few minutes, she came back down with a ring of keys and headed out the door, waving. Be right back, boys, she called as she went. After a moment, the dark-haired man descended the stairs, but something was different. All his black hair was pulled back into a messy bun behind his head, and Izuku felt a lot less frightened of him. Still frightened, but less so. There was a small scar under his eye. From hero work, maybe. That's Aizawa-sensei, right? He whispered to Katsuki beside him. Yep, Katsuki whispered back. Hey, old man, Katsuki said, louder this time. Izuku frowned. Old man, Aizawa-sensei grumbled at them. Bakugo loves his nicknames. Bakugo, my last name, Katsuki told him. Izuku nodded. Bakugo Katsuki. He tested. It felt right, if not a little off, like he was missing a name. Bakugo Katsuki and Midoriya Izuku. That's 2 full names. How about Midoriya Inko? Izuku's eyes widened slightly and he smiled. 3 full names. That's 3 more than I knew a few days ago. Aizawa-sensei gave him a strange look that made him shrink back, anxious. Aizawa Shoda. There's 4, Aizawa-sensei said eventually. Aizawa Shoda, Izuku said carefully. Shuta, he tried, stretching it out. That's a lot of names. I should start a collection. Well, our classmates would add 18 names, Katsuki said. That might be too many to remember. Hey, problem child, where's your shirt? Aizawa-sensei said. Izuku blinked up at him. Me. Oh, right, Aizawa-sensei was his teacher. What did I do for that name? A lot of stuff, Aizawa-sensei said, sitting down on one of the blue couches. Anyways, your shirt. Izuku pointed to the balled-up shirt a few feet away from the couch. They gave it to me. So, I took it off. They gave me the pants, too. Let's keep those on until your mother gets back, Aizawa-sensei said coolly. Izuku flushed, heart still fluttering with fear. Yes, sir. He stared at the man for a second longer. Do you ever get drunk? Aizawa-sensei blinked at him in surprise. Huh, do you ever get drunk? Izuku asked again. Or do? Drugs? I don't ever do drugs, and I don't drink very often. Aizawa-sensei answered slowly. Izuku let out a calming breath. That's good. You're not like him, he said quietly, thinking of drunkard. Katsuki says you're a hero, is that right? Aizawa-sensei nodded. Why? Why what? Why are you a hero? Izuku clarified. Aizawa-sensei was quiet for a second. Because I want to help people, keep everyone safe. Izuku nodded, slowly becoming more convinced that this man wasn't as scary as he seemed. Drunkard did not want to keep anyone safe. And why are you a teacher? Similar reasons. Helping the new generation of heroes train to save more people and making sure they stay on track. You keep them safe, too, Izuku said, smiling softly. Aizawa-sensei's face fell and Katsuki drew in a sharp breath beside Izuku. What? You're one of his students, Deku, Katsuki said quietly, sounding almost bitter. Yeah, Izuku said, looking between the two of them, but what does that owe? He was one of Aizawa-sensei's students, and he had arguably not been kept safe. I'm sorry. What? Aizawa-sensei and Katsuki snapped at the same time. Deku, stop effing apologizing. It wasn't your fault, Katsuki said harshly. But I don't remember you. I'm causing you pain. Aizawa-sensei cut him off. Midoriya, none of this is on you. It was a team mission. Team mission, Izuku echoed, confused. You were captured on a mission, Aizawa-sensei explained. "Oh," Izuku said softly, hugging his knees to his chest. Can I hear about it later?" "Not now. I want to learn more names before," he excused. He didn't know why he was putting it off. Maybe he wanted to remember something positive first. Maybe he was scared it wouldn't help him remember at all. "We can tell you whenever you want, kid," Aizawa-sensei assured him. Suddenly, someone burst through the doors and shut them quickly again, and Izuku jumped from his seat and screamed at the shock. He nearly toppled over before Katsuki pushed him up, and he realized it was his mother standing in front of the doors, panting. Not a villain. His heart slowed in his chest. "I'm so sorry, Izuku," his mother gasped. "Didn't mean to scare you." "Ms. Midoriya, why are you running?" Aizawa-sensei asked, standing. Izuku's heart rate spiked again and he started shaking his hands, panicking and ready for a fight. Why else would his mother be running? "It was nothing bad, I promise," she said, rushing to Izuku's side to lay a soothing hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, I'm totally safe." Izuku nodded. "Okay, I was running because I was trying to avoid your classmates. They saw me coming out of the dorms, and I wanted to try and keep you quiet for a little longer, but I think they saw me," Inko explained, holding out a stack of folded-up clothes. "But I got your clothes, so let's go into the bathroom and get you cleaned up." "Wait, the class doesn't know yet?" Katsuki asked, frowning at Aizawa-sensei. If they knew, they would want to see him, and he was still asleep. "Though I'm sure they suspected something was up because you were gone, too." Izuku gave Katsuki a look. "You were gone." Katsuki nodded. "I stayed with you. Promised I'd protect you, right?" Izuku smiled at him. "Right." Whoever Katsuki was to Izuku, he was with him. There was a pounding knock on the door, and he jumped up and screamed again, clinging to Katsuki. Katsuki wrapped an arm around his shoulder and glared at the door. "Who the F is that?" "Aizawa-sensei." A voice called from outside. "Why is Ms. Midoriya here?" "Did they find Midoriya?" Another voice called. Izuku felt his breath get shallow and he squeezed Katsuki tighter against him, starting to activate his quirk as defense. Strangers looking for him, most likely to force him to do something. "Shit," Katsuki swore. "Deku, it's okay, they're just our shitty classmates." Izuku was breathing too quick to respond, heart racing in his chest. His quirk was still going, surrounding him in green lighting and static electricity. They were coming for him. Maybe it was the villains outside. His consciousness started to blur as more people yelled and knocked on the door, and suddenly he was being swept off his feet and carried up the stairs. He saw his mother following him and realized Katsuki was the one carrying him. He still couldn't deactivate the quirk, but his heart stopped racing so fast. Katsuki's warmth was comforting. Soon, he was being set down on a plush bath mat next to a toilet, and Katsuki's hands were on his shoulders. He met the crimson eyes, and his heart calmed even more. "Deku, are you okay?" The green lighting started to dissipate and Izuku nodded. "Yes, Bakugo Katsuki," he said, using the full name to calm himself again. He remembered that. He remembered something. He looked up to his mother. "And also my mom and co," he said, saying the last part almost as one word rather than three. His mother knelt down beside Katsuki. "Do you remember showers?" Izuku searched his brain for that, then nodded, deciding it fit in the arbitrary category of things Izuku remembered. His mother nodded and smiled at him, then moved past him to switch on the shower behind him. Katsuki stood and held out a hand to help him to his feet, which he took. Out of the corner of his eyes, he caught a flash of green. When he turned, he couldn't stifle a gasp. An image of himself and Katsuki was reflected back to him on the wall's mirror, and he took a hesitant step towards it. He looked like an alternate universe version of the image of himself in his head. His hair was many different shades of green, all greasy and matted on top of his head. There was a bandage on his freckled, bruised cheek, and his arms were covered almost all the way in more bandages. He blinked at himself, staring into his own green eyes. They were sallow, with dark circles underneath, but when he smiled a bit, his eyes brightened slightly. He reached up to poke his own slightly crooked nose, crinkling it up then smoothing it out. "What are you doing?" Katsuki asked, looking at him in the mirror. "I look different than I thought I did," Izuku explained. Katsuki frowned, and his mother joined them in front of the mirror. "You'll look better when you wash yourself off," his mother said, patting him on the shoulder. "The bandages make it difficult, but I can help wash everything that's not bandaged if you don't mind." Izuku nodded slowly. "You're my mom and co. That means I trust you." He turned to look at Katsuki. "I'll be right on the other side of the door the whole time," Katsuki assured him. Izuku nodded again, then Katsuki quietly left the room. After his mother helped him wash out his hair while leaning over the shower, he stripped the bloodied pants off and tossed them to the side, not missing his mother's worried look at the stains. She then gently washed all the non-bandaged skin, which was not a lot, with a soft washcloth. He flinched a couple times, but eventually settled. There was still a nagging at the back of his mind that he shouldn't trust this woman, but he tried to ignore it. There was also a nagging that he knew her, so he focused on that. Soon enough, his mother was done and handed him the clean clothes to change into. They smelled weird, but nice, and felt comfortable when he put them on. It was just a simple blue t-shirt and light gray sweatpants, similar to what he'd worn before, but he felt so much safer in these. He opened the bathroom door. Katsuki nearly fell backwards on top of him. Izuku quickly jumped away as Katsuki stumbled back into the room, waving his arms around to catch his balance. "Shit," he yelled, managing to get on his feet. "Were you leaning on the door?" Izuku asked. Katsuki grumbled, looking the tiniest bit embarrassed. Izuku couldn't help it. He giggled. It felt good to laugh, like a bit of joy in his chest was bubbling right out to share with the world. Katsuki and his mother were staring at him again. "What?" His mother squeezed his shoulder. "It's really good to hear you laugh again, sweetie." "Oh," he said dumbly, "okay." He paused for a moment, watching Katsuki watching him. Are the scary loud people still outside? Now it was Katsuki's turn to laugh. His laugh was nice, a little rough and scratchy, but still light and happy. "I think Aizawa-sensei chased him off." Izuku smiled and nodded, then turned back to the mirror. He still looked like a mess, but he was closer to that image in his head. His hair was no longer flat and tangled on his head. Instead, it fluffed up in crazy green curls. When he reached up a bandaged hand to touch it lightly, it felt soft on his fingers. His face looked a little brighter, too, after his mother washed off any leftover grime. His green eyes looked less dead to the world. He picked at the bandage on his cheek, but Katsuki slapped his hand away. "Leave the bandages, Deku," he said flatly. "Recovery girl will be pissed if you take him off." "Who's recovery girl?" "School nurse. She's got a healing quirk." Izuku's eyes went wide and he backed away from the mirror, mind full of flashes of red hands and horns. "Healing quirk," he echoed quietly. "Yeah, what's wrong?" Izuku stared at the bandages on his hands. "Red horns had a healing quirk," he whispered. "He only healed me so they could keep fighting me." He suddenly found himself tearing at the bandages on his hands. He had to get them off before they hurt him again. He had to stop healing. It would be better to keep hurting. Then eventually it would all just end, right? The healer put them on, and healers never had no outside motives. He had to get the bandages off. He had to. "Deku," a voice called. Two hands enclosed his, stopping his frantic clawing at his hands and arms. He tried to pull away but was held fast. "No," he yelled desperately, struggling more. "I'm not going to heal. I'd rather die." His quirk activated again, and he kicked his feet around as he tried to escape the arms that squeezed around him tightly. He couldn't heal. He couldn't, because then he'd have to go back. There would be more blood and hurt, and he would think he could finally just stop, and then he'd be dragged under the glowing red hands and it would all happen again. He started thrashing wildly, getting an arm free and hitting the person holding him in the face. They stumbled back but didn't let him go, and he started sobbing, feeling like the walls were closing in around him. "Please," he begged, "please, I can't do it again." "Deku, it's me," the captor said, meeting his eyes. Izuku saw the crimson red and froze. "You're not going to be hurt again. I promised you that already." Izuku stared at him, quirk falling away. "Katsuki," he whispered. The boy nodded, still holding him tightly. Izuku started crying harder and buried his face against Katsuki's neck. I thought you were." "I'm sorry." Katsuki set him back down to the ground but didn't let go. "I told you to stop apologizing." "It's okay." Izuku nodded against his neck, sniffling and letting the tears fall freely. Katsuki was going to murder a few people at some point. First up was whoever the hell Red Horns was. Next up was Sharp Lady. Drunkard could be third. And the rest of them, too. What the F had they done to Deku to make him act like this? When he started trying to get his bandages off, Katsuki doesn't think he's ever seen more fear in his eyes. It was like he was facing All for One and Shigaraki again. After a few minutes, Deku stopped crying and leaned away, so Katsuki let him go. He reached up to wipe his face as he sniffled, then sighed and leaned against the wall behind him, sliding down to the floor. He started, but Katsuki stopped him before he could say it. "No, apologies," he repeated. Deku sniffled and looked up at him. Auntie Inko moved around Katsuki and dropped down on front of her son, grabbing his hands. "Izuku, honey, are you okay?" Deku nodded. "Yes, I'm okay. I thought I was back for a second. Yeah." Katsuki nodded in approval at the aborted apology. If anyone should be apologizing here, it would be him. But Deku didn't know about the mission, so he wouldn't understand yet. "So, recovery girl, school nurse, is she a hero, too?" "Yeah," Katsuki answered. Maybe knowing these people were heroes helped Deku trust them more, or at least not be so afraid. "She's a great hero, and she's helped you out a lot." Deku said to the floor. "That's good." "Izuku, honey, how about we get off the bathroom floor and go talk to Mr. Aizawa?" Auntie Inko suggested, getting to her feet and holding out a hand to help her son. He nodded again and allowed himself to be helped up. The three of them made their way back downstairs to the couches, and Deku sat right next to Katsuki, leaning into him as his eyes darted around the room like he was searching for threats. "Is everything all right, Midoriya?" Aizawa-sensei asked. Deku startled, then calmed, pressing further into Katsuki. Katsuki relented, lifting his arm to let Deku lean all the way into his side and wrapping his arm around his shoulders. He had no idea why Deku felt like he was the safe one here, but he was glad he could help. "Yes, sir, I'm okay now," Deku said. Aizawa-sensei inspected him for a second, then leaned back on the couch. Seeing Aizawa-sensei with his hair back was weird, but Katsuki guessed it was because Inko had told him about Drunkard. "So, we need to talk," he said, addressing Katsuki, Deku, and Inko. "It has become clear that Midoriya and Bakugo cannot be separated." Deku's head shot up at this and he nodded. "I think I would die." Katsuki's heart fluttered in his chest and Aizawa-sensei gave Deku a concerned look. "I would not like that either," Katsuki admitted. "If Deku was away, who knows what could happen to him?" "Right," Aizawa-sensei said, watching them with an unreadable expression before turning his attention to Auntie Inko. "Ms. Midoriya, you have decided to stay in the teacher dorms for a while to be with your son." Inko nodded. "Which means this is up to Bakugo and Midoriya now." "What is?" Deku asked. "If Bakugo wanted to go back to his classes, you would be coming with him. Are you up for that?" Deku looked a little scared, then got that determined glint in his eye Katsuki recognized. He'd had it since they were kids. It made his heart flutter again. "I can handle it," Deku said decidedly. "Katsuki will be there, and I can collect more names." Apparently, the name collecting was going to be a thing now. Katsuki wished he would collect the one name Katsuki wanted to hear, but he felt like that would lead to a whole lot of other stuff he didn't have the time to unpack. "You sure?" Katsuki asked, still worried. Deku turned the determined look onto him. "Yes, I want to meet the shitty, loud classmates." Katsuki couldn't help a laugh at that, and Deku smiled like he was proud of his little tease. Katsuki really hoped Deku swore in front of their class at some point. Their reactions would be effing priceless. "Sounds like a plan, Deku." He and Deku slept on the couches again that night, not wanting to go back to the dorms and deal with their classmates just yet. It would be better at school, when Aizawa-sensei could help out. When Katsuki woke up in the morning, he saw Deku sitting up on his couch, staring out the window by the front door. Katsuki glanced out of it, but only saw the end of a sunrise over the campus. "Deku, what are you looking at?" he croaked, sitting up and rubbing his eyes. "The sun," Deku breathed. And when Katsuki turned to look, there was tear going down his cheek. "Sunrises are ... the prettiest thing I've ever seen." Katsuki blinked at him for a second, then wrapped himself in his blanket and went to sit by him on his couch. "Have you seen one before?" Deku shook his head. "Not that I clearly remember. We were underground." That made Katsuki want to ask questions, figure out what Deku knew about the villain's hideout and quirks, but he pushed the thoughts out of his mind. All in due time. Deku's happiness was most important right now. "I like sunrises, too," he said quietly, "though I'm partial to sunsets." Katsuki might have been an early to rise person, but that didn't mean he was a morning person. He was always tired as F in the mornings, just forced himself not to be. He loved staying up a little later when he could to watch the sun set all the way. Deku twisted around to look at him and Katsuki choked on a breath. He was smiling again, freckled cheeks dimpled and shining like they used to despite the square bandage, and his wild green hair was even messier than usual. His emerald eyes sparkled. "You'll have to show me one sometime, then," he chirped. Katsuki could only nod, unable to speak. Deku's stomach rumbled and he looked down with a frown. "What else do you eat here?" "Before yesterday, I'd only had dry mashed potatoes and stale bread. Sometimes there was a mushy apple or two." Deku stuck his tongue out in disgust. Katsuki wanted to throw up at that. That was all Deku ate for 3 months. F it, he was making this nerd some effing pancakes. He slid off the couch, holding the blanket around his shoulders like a cape, and made his way to the kitchen, beckoning Deku to follow. When he arrived at kitchen, he turned to see Deku also dragged his blanket along, and F if that wasn't cute. He pointed to a chair at the kitchen counter. "Sit," he ordered. Deku gave him a confused look but complied. "I am going to make you some good-ass breakfast, and then we will eat like kings," he explained. Deku smiled again. "You know how to cook?" he asked. "Hell yeah," Katsuki confirmed, turning around to gather his ingredients. There was no way Aizawa-sensei could scold him for this, even though it was the teacher's kitchen. This was Deku he was doing it for. "Did I know how to cook?" Katsuki scoffed. "I tried to teach you and you set an egg on fire while trying to fry it." The memory was a cherished one. "Well, how?" Katsuki turned to see Deku staring down at his bandaged hands in confusion. He laughed again. "I have no effing idea, but the class banned you from the kitchen after that." "Makes sense." Katsuki finished collecting the ingredients and started measuring them out, having memorized the recipe by now. It was his old hag of a mother's favorite. He got to whisking the batter together, then went on a search for a griddle, feeling Deku's eyes on him the whole time. It was a familiar, comforting feeling. He finally found a griddle in the back of the pantry and let out a little victory whoop, holding it up like a prize. "That's to cook them on, right?" Deku asked. Because you're making pancakes. Katsuki nodded and smiled, glad he was remembering something. He turned the stove on and let the griddle heat up. I hate that I remember things like that, Deku mumbled. Katsuki turned to give him a look. What do you mean? It's good that you remember things. Deku huffed and rested his chin on the counter. Yeah, but I remember things like pancake griddles or how to program Snake into a calculator, but not my own effing mother. Katsuki gave him an awkward pat on the head, loving the way the soft green curls felt against his hand. That sucks, Deku. It was all he knew to say. He was shitty at comforting people. That was Kirishima or Deku's job, not his. Even with his hero training for it, it was weird. Comforting a person in shock was different than this. Deku huffed and he turned back to butter the griddle and spoon pancake batter onto it, finding comfort in the sizzling sound. After a bit, Deku hummed behind him, and Katsuki found him with his chin resting on his hands, elbows propped up on the counter, smiling with his eyes closed. He looked effing serene. Smells good. Better than mashed effing potatoes. Deku opened his eyes and made disgusted face. I never want to eat potatoes again. Katsuki flipped the pancakes over. I assure you I can make potatoes into things that will blow your nerdy mind. You're just that good, Deku said. I'm just that effing good. Katsuki agreed with a cocky grin, relishing in the instant of normalcy. Do I get pancakes? Katsuki whirled around to find Present Mike staring at him, his bright hair up in a messy bun, sunglasses replaced by normal glasses, wearing a baggy yellow band t-shirt, red plaid pajama pants, and house slippers. The normalcy shattered. This was so effing weird. He would never be able to look at his English teacher the same. He heard Deku squeak in surprise and saw him jolt back a bit. No, Deku. This is Present Mike, remember? Teacher and hero, Katsuki reminded him. Deku didn't look convinced. Katsuki got an idea and turned back to his teacher, who looked nervous. Tell him your name. Present Mike furrowed his brows. What? Tell him your name, Katsuki repeated, gesturing to a skittish Deku with his spatula. Yamada Hisashi, Present Mike finally said. There you go, Katsuki told Deku. New name for the collection. Yamada Hisashi, Deku repeated slowly, relaxing slightly in his seat. Katsuki almost breathed a sigh of relief. It worked. You are a hero. Why are you a hero? He was using the same questions as he did on Aizawa-sensei. Because I want to give back to the world all it has given to me, Present Mike answered, a lot more eloquently than Katsuki had been expecting from a man who goes around yelling yeah at teenagers a few hours a day. And so I can help others. Deku nodded and almost fully relaxed back into his seat. Okay, Yamada Hisashi. He beamed at Katsuki, making his heart flutter. That's 5 full names. You are quickly becoming a name expert, Katsuki deadpanned, returning to his pancakes. He moved the last few from the griddle to a plate, then grabbed 2 more plates to fix for him and Deku. There, teachers can have the rest. Save some for Inko. He moved to the other side of the counter to sit by Deku and Present Mike excitedly fixed himself a plate. He made breakfast for his teachers now. This was very strange. He shook his head and slid Deku his plate, and the 2 of them got to eating. Deku's eyes went wide as saucers. Holy shit, Katsuki. This is so much better than stale potatoes. He chirped excitedly and loudly, making Present Mike give him a weird look. Yeah, happy Deku. You bet your ass it is. Now effing eat before they get stale too. Deku quickly obliged, inhaling the pancakes like they were well, like they were his first good meal in 3 months. They were both finished before Inko and Aizawa-sensei came downstairs, talking about something quietly. Aizawa-sensei had his hair up again. Good morning, Inko mom, Deku said brightly, startling Inko. She then smiled at him, just as bright. Good morning, honey, she sang back. You're in a good mood this morning. Katsuki made pancakes, Deku declared happily. They are very good and much better than stale potatoes and moldy apples. Inko gave her son a worried look but smiled again, then turned her smile to Katsuki. Well, thank you, Katsuki. Katsuki shrugged, jerked a thumb towards the pancake plate by the stove. There's more for all you adults if you want it. I feel weird eating food my students made in my kitchen without my knowledge, Aizawa-sensei said, frowning as Inko went to collect her food. Don't be, Shota, Present Mike called from his seat at one of the tables. These are really good. Aizawa-sensei rolled an eyes, and Katsuki was again stuck by how effing weird this all was. He was part of his teachers' home lives today. What the F? Deku bumped their shoulders to get his attention. Hey, can I be unbanned from the kitchen? Why? Because I want to learn how to make pancakes. Katsuki made an exaggerated thinking face, tapping his finger on his chin. I will have to consult the council. The council? Me, Sato, Shoji, and Tsuyu, Katsuki listed. The only people in our class who actually know how to cook. You'll meet them later, and this council will decide that fate of my kitchen ban. Yes, Katsuki answered seriously, feeling ridiculous yet happy. And if they decide to leave the egg behind and welcome you back, we'll see if you can manage some effing pancakes. Tell them the egg is my life's greatest failure and regret. and I will look back on it in all future cooking endeavors to remind myself what I once was. Katsuki snorted a laugh. He missed this. I'll be sure to bring it up, nerd. What the hell are you two going on about? Aizawa-sensei asked flatly. Katsuki gave him an equally flat look. Wow, sensei. What happened to no effing swearing? Aizawa-sensei glared at him. Katsuki, Deku whispered beside him. You can say F to teacher. Do it, Katsuki said, grinning. Deku poked his head around to look at Aizawa-sensei, then hid back behind Katsuki. Nope, he's still too scary. Aizawa-sensei frowned at that. And Katsuki realized he'd probably been worried about scaring Deku since Inko told him about his hair being a reminder of drunkard. Katsuki huffed and turned around to Deku. He's not going to hurt you, Deku, he assured him. You sure? Why would I effing lie to you? Deku thought for a second, then nodded. Okay, not going to hurt me. Wait, yeah. Aizawa Shota, my teacher. He poked his head out to look at Katsuki again. You don't effing scare me. He quickly jerked back to hid behind Katsuki, ducking his head as he giggled. This is fine. I am not scared shitless right now. Katsuki ruffled his hair. Another win for him. Congrats, you cussed out a teacher. Aren't you not supposed to do that? Who cares? Aizawa-sensei huffed behind them. You are corrupting him, Bakugo. Hey, Deku protested. The villains corrupted me. Katsuki is helping. Yeah, I'm effing helping, Katsuki agreed, smirking at his teacher. A little while later, Katsuki, Deku, and Aizawa-sensei were standing outside of the door to their classroom, listening to their classmates' chaotic chatter inside. Deku was tapping his foot nervously and held onto Katsuki's arm. He was wearing a school uniform, but no jacket or tie because they freaked him out. He thought they were too tight. Not wearing them meant his arm bandages were in full view, and Katsuki hated looking at them. Deku was always too bandaged. Idiot couldn't stop hurting himself. I'm going to go inside and explain some things. Then come get you two when they've calmed down, okay? Aizawa-sensei said. Got it, Katsuki agreed as Deku nodded. Aizawa-sensei sighed and slipped through the door. The chatter finally silenced. Good morning, class, Aizawa-sensei said. Katsuki and Deku could still hear him through the door. I have some things to tell you right now, and it is of utmost importance that you listen and obey the rules I set for this. Aizawa-sensei let out a weary sigh, no doubt readying himself to silence a flurry of questions. The rumors are true, midoriya had been found. That was all he had to say before the chatter erupted again, and Deku squeezed Katsuki's arm so tight he wouldn't be surprised to find fingerprints later. You okay? Katsuki asked him quietly. They're your friends, right? Yeah, they're my friends. Katsuki didn't exactly say that out loud a lot, but he guessed it was true. Hard not to be friends with people you put your life on the line for, and who did the same for you. So, you trust them all? Absolutely. None of them are going to hurt you. Deku nodded slowly. Okay, yes, this will be good. More names. Yup, more names. All the names, Katsuki tried awkwardly. He was just hoping he wouldn't F up this comforting shit so much he made things worse. Wait, F that. He could comfort people. Keep Deku calm. It couldn't be that hard. How many, again? 18. That'll be 23 names, Deku said, sounding a little crazed. Yeah, he mumbled quietly about names and numbers for a while, and Katsuki just let him, hoping it would chill him out. He didn't listen to the rest of what Aizawa-sensei said. But soon enough, the door slid open and their teacher poked his head out. You ready? Deku made a little eep, then nodded. Totally ready. I have Katsuki, and I'll get some names, he said, practically talking to himself. Okay, Katsuki. Comforting presence. Okay, Aizawa-sensei said, sliding the door all the way open. Katsuki started walking in, Deku dragging slightly behind him. They turned to face the class at the front of the room, and Katsuki pulled Deku forward with his arm. Every classmate was staring at him wide eyes. Idiots needed to chill out. What am I supposed to say again? Deku squeaked quietly. A hello would be a start, Katsuki told him. Deku nodded. Hello, he said quietly. He raised his voice. I mean, hello. I am midoriya Izuku. Wait, you already know that, don't you? I didn't know until a few days ago, because Katsuki told me. I know 5 people's names now. And with that, he was off to Ramble Town. One of them is my mom. My mom is Inko and she's really nice. I also know Aizawa-sensei's name, which is good even though he's kind of scary. Katsuki says he's not going to hurt me. And I don't think he will, but you can never be too sure, right? You know how it is. Oh, I also know Present Mike's name. He ate some of those pancakes that Katsuki made which were really good and way better than stale bread. And wait, did I really set an egg on fire or did Katsuki make that up? He said I have to. Katsuki lightly elbowed him to make him stop, figuring that was long enough. Nerd, stop rambling. Deku jumped and looked back out at their classmates. Yes, sorry, I am very, very scared right now. Are you sure they aren't going to attack me? Katsuki heart twisted again with guilt. They're not going to. Why would we ever attack you? Mina suddenly cut in. Deku jumped again and his eyes went wide as he turned to look at her. "You're our friend." Their classmates chimed in with agreements and Deku slowly started to back away. "Shit." Katsuki turned to shield him from the class and lowered his voice. "Are you okay?" "Goddamn idiot classmates. Did they not effing listen to Aizawa?" Deku had wide eyes and was staring at the ground. "They don't know," he whispered, "which means they'll want to know." "Know what, Deku?" Deku looked up at him, seeming desperate. "They all want to know, and I don't even know." "No, know what?" "Deku, what are you talking about?" Sharp Lady wanted to know, Deku said in a whisper, fear dripping into his voice. "But I can't tell them." Katsuki had no idea what he was talking about, but Deku needed to calm down. He put his hands on Deku's shoulders and squeezed once to get his attention, then made his voice the calmest he could get it. "Deku, they're not going to make you tell them anything. They are our friends, remember? I trust them." Deku looked up at him with wide, fearful green eyes. "Promise." "I promise." Deku let out a long breath, relaxing, and Katsuki almost sighed in relief. Maybe it wasn't a good idea to come here, but Deku had been sure he could do it. Katsuki would just have to keep him grounded. He could be a effing calming presence, he reminded himself. "Okay, they are my friends," Deku said to himself quietly. Katsuki trusts them. "Want to collect their names?" Katsuki asked awkwardly. The names always seemed to chill him out. Deku gave him a tiny smile and nodded, so Katsuki backed away and let him see the class again. Deku cleared his throat and shifted on his feet, looking nervous but not as terrified. Nervous was fine. Deku was always nervous. "Can I learn everyone's names?" he asked, suddenly louder. The class just stared at him, confused. "Of effing course." Katsuki huffed. He was fed up already. "Hey, effers, tell him your names. Starting with you," he said, pointing to Aoyama in the first seat. Slowly, each class member told Deku their full names and Deku repeated it once, like he was testing how it felt. Maybe he thought if he said them out loud, he'd remember these people from before. Sadly, it didn't seem to be working, but Deku was gripping his arm with less force now. They finished with Yaoyorozu in the back of the room. Deku turned to give Katsuki a nervous smile. "That's 23 now. 23 people who are not going to attack me." Katsuki nodded in agreement. "No attackers." Deku swallowed and Katsuki noticed him start to pick at the bandages on his wrists, so Katsuki slapped his hand away. "Stop effing doing that." If Deku took off the bandages, he could start bleeding again. Deku jolted like he hadn't realized what he was doing. There was the guilt again. Sorry," he said. Then, he suddenly looked up, and Katsuki saw him zero in on Uraraka in the back of the classroom with that look in his eye. The same look he had before he asked Katsuki if he got out okay and called his mother Mom. Deku let go of Katsuki's arm and started moving towards her quickly. "Did you?" Deku froze halfway down the aisle to Uraraka, who was watching him with tears in her eyes. Katsuki heard him take a sharp inhale before turning on his heel and hurrying back to the front of the room. "I'm sorry, I don't know what that was. What am I doing?" That practically confirmed Katsuki's theory. Uraraka had been on the mission where Deku was captured. So had Katsuki, and his mother was his mother. All three were important parts of his life and last memories before his kidnapping. And for some reason he seemed to be getting flashes of memory of them. But it wasn't effing enough. Katsuki wanted to yell and punch a wall, but he just stood still and let Deku press his face into his shoulder. He couldn't blow up now. Deku yelled suddenly, stepping back with a huff. He turned back to the class with tears in his eyes. "Shoot, I am so sorry. I don't." "Stop effing apologizing, Deku," Katsuki snapped. Of course, the nerd would still be like this, always blaming himself for things he couldn't control. He was too effing nice. Deku looked between Katsuki and the class, wiping the tears with the bandages on his hands. "But I want to remember and don't want to be afraid of them but I am, and I hate it. I hate being so effing scared of everything." He sounded so effing desperate and broken it hurt. Deku started glowing green, lighting crackling around him. Katsuki startled and moved towards him slowly. Deku's quirk also seemed to be out of his control, always activating when he was afraid. It was like he was an animal fighting for constant survival. Katsuki's jaw still ached from when Deku punched him in the bathroom. But he'd do it again if he had to. Shit, comfort him. He grabbed Deku's glowing hands like Auntie and Co did, squeezing once. "That's comforting, right? It makes sense to be effing scared, Deku," he said carefully, trying to sound as much like Deku or Kirishima as he could. "Remember what your mom said. Everyone here cares about you." The green lighting started dissipating. "Come on, Deku. And I made that promise. And you never break a effing promise." Deku finished, the green of One for All almost totally gone now. Katsuki snorted a laugh. "That's effing right. Okie dokie," Deku said in a way that was so like his old self that Katsuki wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. Aizawa-sensei came beside them and placed a hand on each boy's shoulder. "I think that's enough introductions for today. How about you go take your seats?" he said. Deku nodded and let Katsuki lead him to his desk. At the last moment, Katsuki grabbed the chair from Deku's desk and moved it to beside his. Then they both sat down. Today was not the day for Deku to sit behind where he couldn't see him. Aizawa-sensei took the podium at the front of the class. I expect all of you to respect Midoriya's boundaries, which means no questions without his permission, and keeping his space in mind. Aizawa-sensei glared out at the class, just as intimidating as he was when his hair wasn't up in a ponytail. Yes, sir, the class mumbled back. Effing a holes. The first half of the school day after Izuku's introduction was relatively quiet. His heart was racing in his chest the whole time. But Katsuki was next to him, so he told himself he had to stop being so scared. If something happens, you protect him. It was nice to see Yamada-sensei, or Present Mike, as the teacher for English class, and he felt a little less panicked with him. He did look very weird in his hero costume, though, his hair all gelled up like a banana on his head. He reminded Izuku of a tropical bird, and he was very loud. But it was okay, because he just repeated Yamada Hazashi, hero in his head the whole time. Heroes protect people. He was surrounded by people who would have fought his captors, not him. When he first saw his classmates, his fear was overwhelming everything. These were all people with strong quirks he didn't know, and none of them knew. They could all force him to fight at any moment. But then he saw one girl, with brown hair and pink cheeks, Uraraka Ochako, and he felt the tug again. Less strong, but still very much there, and he moved towards her without meaning to. He's thought something about her. He wanted to ask her something. Why did he keep doing that? He kept thinking about it all day, even as Katsuki pulled him to the teacher's lounge to have lunch. Apparently, he was supposed to meet someone. That scared him even more. He had already met 18 new, frightening people today. He wasn't looking forward to one more. But he steeled himself in front of the door all the same, holding on to Katsuki's arm as the other boy knocked. Aizawa-sensei answered. The more Izuku saw him with his hair back, the less scary he became. His heart rate didn't immediately spike at the sight, at least. Come on in, Aizawa-sensei told them, backing away from the door to let them inside, then shutting it behind them. Izuku did a quick sweep of the room, searching for traps, things that could be used to hurt him or Katsuki, and exit. There was only the door behind them to get out, but in an emergency, they could possibly jump out the floor-to-ceiling windows and not break any bones if they landed carefully. There was a coffee pot on a tiny kitchen counter, and Izuku immediately registered that as a threat, boiling liquid, hot glass that could be shattered. Mostly, he looked for anything sharp. He felt a poke on his shoulder and turned to see Katsuki watching him survey the room. It's a teacher's lounge, not a torture chamber, Deku. Stop looking for weapons. Shit, was he that obvious? Maybe Katsuki just knew him well enough to tell. You don't know that. They had knives in the bathroom, and everything that can be weaponized will be weaponized eventually. He told Katsuki somberly. That was something he learned the hard, painful way. The least he could do was tell Katsuki now before he had to learn too. He felt Katsuki stiffen, and turned to see him looking like he'd been punched in the face but was trying not to let people know how much it hurt. New person coming through, Aizawa-sensei warned behind them as a tall blonde man with sunken eyes walked into the room from an attached office. Izuku yelped in surprise and his body readied for a fight. But then he felt another tug. I know you. You know. Izuku started to relax, but the voice wasn't done. But you didn't tell me everything. He tensed again. The tall man moved towards him, but he didn't back down. Who are you? He snapped. The man froze, sunken blue eyes widening as he stepped back. I am. He trailed off like even he didn't know. Deku, that's All Might, Katsuki answered for him. Izuku frowned and tilted his head. The All Might he remembered was decidedly not this. This man was skinny and sallow, while All Might in Izuku's head was huge and strong and bright. Are you sure? Since when do I effing lie to you? Right, Izuku said, once again glad he had Katsuki. He still didn't know why he trusted him so much, but it felt good not to be scared out of his mind by at least one person. So, All Might. He squinted at the skinny man, feeling the tug again. Have we met before? All Might's blue eyes widened again. Yes, we have, young Midoriya. The way All Might said his name tugged at the itch in his mind even more. What's your real name? He tried. Yagi Tashinori, All Might answered. Izuku paused for a second. Yagi Tashinori, he echoed, feeling it out. It didn't feel familiar. I don't call you that, do I? All Might shook his head. No, though I have given you permission. Yagi Tashinori, Izuku said again. It felt wrong. Yeah, I'll stick with All Might. Katsuki laughed beside him. And the sound made Izuku smile and relax the tiniest bit. What do you want? All Might looked startled by his question. I just wanted to see that you were okay. You are one of my students, after all. Izuku nodded slowly, still not fully trusting this man. He didn't feel as scared, maybe, just on guard. Would you like to eat? All Might asked, gesturing to the table and couches behind him. It was a similar setup to the teacher's dorm. Depends, Izuku answered, looking to Katsuki. Will there be more pancakes? Katsuki scoffed and rolled his eyes. No, there are other foods besides effing pancakes. I know that, Izuku protested. He huffed at Katsuki. No apples or potatoes. Katsuki nodded. Sure, no apples or potatoes. What is wrong with apples and potatoes? All Might asked. Izuku made a face, almost gagging. Everything. All Might gave him a look. Okay, he said, turning back to the small kitchen. When he came back, he laid a few Tupperwares of food out on the coffee table and sat down on the couch. Izuku nervously sat on the couch across from him, pressing into Katsuki's side. Thankfully, Katsuki pressed back. They ate in silence for the most part, and Izuku was too busy scarfing down his food to pay attention whenever someone spoke. He couldn't stop himself from searching the room every so often, taking stock of possible weapons again, but stayed in his seat the whole time. When he finished eating, he felt a little sick, and dropped his head onto Katsuki's shoulder. Oog, he groaned. I think I ate too fast. Idiot, Katsuki said without venom. Don't throw up on me. Maybe I will out of spite. Izuku shot back quietly, still leaning on his shoulder. How effing dare you, Katsuki deadpanned. Izuku giggled a bit and sat up, suddenly having to go to the bathroom. Is there a bathroom here? He asked. All Might pointed him towards the door he'd come through, and Izuku went to do his business. When he came back, Katsuki was glaring at All Might, who looked tired and slightly sheepish. Panic started in his chest. What happened? Katsuki looked to him and the glare left. Nothing. We're fine. Izuku forced himself to untense, eyes darting around the room to count possible weapons and exits again. He'd counted a few more in the bathroom, including the toilet plunger. Deku, stop, Katsuki said, once again surprising him with how he could practically read his thoughts. I'd rather not, he said honestly. There's not going to be a fight. Nobody's going to attack you, Katsuki told him again. No matter how many times he said that, Izuku couldn't quite believe it. Not that he thought Katsuki was lying, but because he thought there was no way Katsuki could be sure of any of it. Attacks could come from any direction at any moment from any person. They often tried to jump him to see if he would activate the powers he didn't know he had. He didn't say any of this, though, just moved back to the couch and leaned into Katsuki. Why do you think you will be attacked, young midoriya? All Might asked. The name and title tugged at his brain again, so he decided to tell the truth. Everyone wants to attack me, he said quietly. They want me to fight back, but I never do it right. He squeezed his eyes shut against memories of bloody battles and the pain. God, the pain. So much pain. It hurt so badly. And he just wanted it all to end, but it never did. Izuku jolted when he felt Katsuki slap his hand and realized he started picking at the bandages again. Sorry, he apologized, still feeling a little out of it. He glanced over at All Might, who was watching him with concern. I missed you. I'm sorry. I missed you, Izuku said, again not recognizing the words coming from his mouth. He lurched back, eyes widening at the same time All Might's did. Shit, sorry. I didn't. Why do I keep saying this stuff? He felt like something important had just slipped through his hands. He frantically searched through his mind, but only came up empty. Again, he groaned and buried his head in his hands. Where did it go? Where did what go? Katsuki asked him. Izuku looked up at him and held out his hands desperately, like Katsuki could give the important thing back. The thoughts. I had them and now they're gone. Tears brimmed in his eyes as his breath shallowed. I can't. It was right there and now it's gone. There's nothing. Where does it go, Katsuki? I don't know, Deku, Katsuki said, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. But it'll come back eventually. Izuku turned and buried his face in Katsuki's shoulder, crying harder. He felt so helpless and small and scared, and he hated it. He wanted to know what was going on. He wanted to remember things. He wanted to be able to love the people that loved him. I love them too. Eventually, he was able to stop the crying and pulled away from Katsuki, wiping his nose and sniffling. I'm sorry, he mumbled. Katsuki glared at him. I told you stop it with the apologies, Deku. Izuku sniffled again. I know. It's just so frustrating. Like trying to hold sand. Katsuki gave him a confused look, so he held out his hands, cupped together. See, it's like, sometimes there's a bunch of sand dumped in my hands, but before I can even figure out that it's sand, it's all fallen through my fingers and got washed down a drain pipe. He probably wasn't making any sense, but he was desperate to explain. He wanted them to know that he was trying. And then I'm sitting there all confused because I forgot what sand was. But I know I really wanted it. Do you think it would help if we gave you sand? Katsuki asked, trying to fit the metaphor. Izuku frowned and thought about that. Maybe. It couldn't hurt to try, right? How about only a little bit of sand? Katsuki suggested. Izuku nodded, so Katsuki sat up straighter and pursed his lips. Something small. Okay, you're friends with Uraraka. Good friends, I mean. Izuku took that in. It felt right. He remembered the tug he felt when he saw Uraraka in class earlier, the sudden need to make sure she was okay before the sand fell away. He nodded again. That makes sense, I think. It does. Yeah, Izuku said slowly. When I saw her, I just had this thought that I knew her a bit. Maybe I can remember the people that I'm closest to the most. That would mean I was closest to Katsuki, and then Uraraka or my mother. But he stopped mumbling and turned to face All Might. I also had a sand moment with you. That means you were more than a teacher. He squinted at the tall, skinny man on the couch. What were you to me? Katsuki and Uraraka were friends. Inko was my mom. What about you? It didn't make sense. Why would he feel connected to this teacher but scared of the others? All Might was your mentor, Katsuki said. You and young Bakugo are very important students to me. All Might said like he wasn't sure how much he could say. I've mentored you both on both hero and personal levels. Izuku sat back on the couch and mulled over the words. That made it all make a little more sense. If, for whatever reason, he and All Might were closer than a normal teacher and student, then of course he'd feel some kind of pull with him like he did with his friends or family. But it all still felt off. This isn't sand, he mumbled. What? Katsuki asked. This isn't sand, he repeated louder. It's something, but I'm not holding the sand. The sand is mine. This is a ... You guys are building a puzzle for me. You're showing me the piece and then putting it in ... and I can see that yes, that piece goes there, but I never could have put it there on my own. Does that make sense? Katsuki paused for a second, then spoke. Yeah, it does. So I feel like being told these things is useless, Izuku admitted. I want to know them, but I want to know them. I want to build the puzzle or hold the sand myself. Otherwise ... it's all fake. We would never lie to you, young Midoriya, All Might said. Izuku shook his head. That doesn't matter. It's still not my puzzle if you put it together for me. So, what? We just tell you nothing. Katsuki shouted angrily. Wait for you to hold the effing sand. Izuku retreated back into the couch at the sudden outburst, activating his quirk. He wasn't scared yet, but he was nervous. He growled quietly in the back of his throat, feeling like a dog backed into a corner. He didn't want to fight Katsuki or anybody, but he would if he had to. Katsuki turned and his eyes widened. Wait, shit. Deku, I didn't. He trailed off, but Izuku could see genuine regret in his eyes. He calmed and let himself relax again, the green lighting disappearing. It's not your fault. I wish I could effing remember. Izuku finished sadly. I wish that too, Katsuki. But it's not like I can just. Izuku snapped his fingers to make his point. I know that, Katsuki snapped. But I just effing. He didn't finish again, running hand over his face with an exasperated groan. Shit, Deku, I want it for you. I want to build you the effing puzzle and make it all okay, but I know that won't work. Then help me find my own pieces, Izuku suggested softly. He didn't think he'd be able to anything of this without Katsuki. Katsuki looked at him, almost sad, then nodded. I'll help you find your effing puzzle pieces or your sand or whatever. Izuku couldn't help a smile. Thanks, Katsuki. He noticed Katsuki's jaw clench and then relax again. He wanted to ask about the name thing, but after his whole spiel about finding his own pieces, it would be hypocritical. This feels familiar, All Might mumbled. Katsuki glared at him. Weird. The rest of the school day passed by without much happening, except Izuku stopping each teacher to ask their name and why they became a hero. He felt his classmates looking at him the whole class and even made eye contact with a few of them, but Katsuki always growled to get them to leave him alone. When they left the school building at the end of the day, Katsuki pulled him away from the stream of students coming outside and behind a tree. What? He asked. Well, usually after school I go back to the student dorms, Katsuki explained. My room is there, and so is yours. But all the effing extras, I mean classmates, are there too. And if they see you, they will want to talk. Izuku thought for a moment. Can I go see my mom first? Then we can go to the dorms. You sure? Izuku steeled himself, feeling challenged. Yeah, of course. I can deal with the extras. Katsuki laughed again. Izuku was quickly becoming fond of the sound, and led him back to the teacher dorms. As they went, Izuku kept close to him, trying to hide himself from all the students milling about campus while searching everywhere for potential hiding places or weapons. He eventually lost track of how many he counted around the 60th threat, and that didn't include the students. He let out a breath he didn't know he was holding when the doors to the teacher dorms swung shut behind him. He stepped forward into the foyer, about to search for his mother, when he suddenly heard a voice. I see you and I. The voice called excitedly. In a sudden blur of motion, a heavy weight slammed into his chest and he stumbled backwards with a screech of surprise. Before he could register what had hit him, Katsuki swooped in and pulled the thing, a little girl, off of him and held her close. She bounced up and down in his arms, her long white hair swinging back and forth in its ponytail. She had wide red eyes that reminded Izuku of Katsuki and a huge, beaming grin. She reached out towards him again. Izunai, she called to him excitedly. Izuku was frozen where he stood, heart racing. I know you. I care about you. I need to protect you. There was no fear of this girl, only surprise at her sudden appearance. Did he have a little sister? Why didn't someone say something? Iri-chan, he heard Katsuki say, getting the attention of the little girl. Good to see you again. Is Mirio-senpai with you? The little girl, Iri, shook her head. Mirio-nai is at work. Tamaki is playing with me today. Mirio-nai. This girl had another brother. Did that mean Izuku had two siblings he wasn't told about? His head started spinning. What the hell? Suddenly, a man, boy, he couldn't have been that much older than Katsuki, rushed down the stairs, panting. Izuku startled and backed into the door, but Iri smiled at the new guy and held out her hands to him. Tamaki, she said happily. Tamaki made Izuku feel no tug in his brain, which terrified him. But Iri trusted him, so he couldn't be that bad. Tamaki made his way over to them, still panting, and took Iri from Katsuki's arms. I am so sorry, he apologized to Izuku, then turned to Iri. Please don't run off like that, Iri-chan. But Izunai is back, she protested. Izuku opened his mouth to try and speak but didn't know what to say. Katsuki came to his side, leaning over to speak to him quietly. That's Iri-chan. She's not your real little sister. Oh, that kind of made more sense. I'm not scared of her at all. He smiled a bit and waved at the girl as she waved at him from over Tamaki's shoulder as he took her to a couch. That's good. She's a pretty long, complicated story, but you know, puzzle pieces. I won't tell you if you don't want me to. Izuku watched the girl bounce up and down on the couch as Tamaki tried to calm her down, looking like he was about to pass out from the stress. Izuku couldn't help but notice she had scars covering her arms and the parts of her legs he could see under her yellow dress, and a small horn on her left side. The sight made his heart jump with the memory of Red Horn, but he settled quickly. This was a child I love. Izuku grinned at the sudden thought. I love her, he whispered happily. I think this is a puzzle piece you can give me. Iri was another tug at his brain, but this one was different. There was nowhere he sighed. He'd only felt that with Katsuki. Katsuki nodded and pulled him into the kitchen, out of earshot of the bubbly child and her babysitter. Look, I'll tell you the bare basics, okay? Got it, Izuku agreed. Katsuki went on to tell him about how Iri was held captive by a Yakuza group that used her body to make quirk-stealing bullets. Her quirk was called Rewind, and she could revert an individual's body to its previous state, and the power was connected her horn. He and someone named Mirio-senpai had been sent on a mission to save her and succeeded. He and Iri had grown close over the years, and she thought of him and Mirio-senpai as her older brothers. Tamaki was one of Mirio's friends, and he was also on the mission to save Iri. When they first saved her, her power was out of her control and she could kill if she used it. But with practice, she was quickly gaining more and more control. When Katsuki finished, Izuku felt like he was going to throw up. Who does that kind of thing to a child? He slumped over on the kitchen counter. Shit, poor Iri-chan. It didn't feel like enough to say. She's a lot happier now, thanks to you and everyone else, Deku, Katsuki told him. She wouldn't stop crying when you went missing. That made Izuku's heart twist with guilt. I guess I should go talk to her. Only if you want to. I want to, Izuku assured him, pushing himself off the counter and making his way back to the main room. Iri met him halfway, holding the hand of Tamaki and looking somber. Izunai, she said quietly. I forgot that you don't remember anything. I was so excited to see you again. I'm sorry for scaring you. Izuku startled and knelt down to be Iri's height. Hey, Iri-chan, it's okay, he assured her. I don't remember a lot, that's true, but I remember that I love you. Iri looked up at him with wide eyes and a wobbly smile. Really? Of course, Iri-chan, he said softly, then held out his arms. Hug. She let go of Tamaki's hand and slammed into again, wrapping her arms around his neck and making him lean back a bit before regaining his balance and hugging her back. Her small hands gripped the collar of his shirt and he heard her sniffle. I love you too, Izunai, she whispered as she cried. He stroked the top of her head instinctively, and it made both of them calm down. Eventually, Iri let go and backed away. She gave him a determined look, puffing her cheeks in jest. I'm going to help Izunai, she declared. Izuku titled his head, confused. You are? Iri nodded seriously. Aizawa dad said I could. Tamaki leaned down to give her a pat on the head, then looked at Izuku nervously. Izuku backed away from him a bit. Actually, Tamaki said, Aizawa-sensei said she might be able to help you. You should talk to him about it. I can help Izunai. Iri whined in protest, stomping her foot. I will give him his brain back. Katsuki laughed behind Izuku. Izuku turned to glare at him shortly, then looked back to Iri, still a bit confused. Okay, Iri-chan. Thank you. She beamed at him proudly, then let Tamaki take her hand again. Let's go back upstairs. Iri-chan, your dad will be back soon, he told her. She nodded and waved to Izuku before turning and allowing herself to be led back up the stairs. Izuku waved back and stood up, then turned to look at Katsuki. What did she mean? He asked. Her effing quirk, Deku, Katsuki said flatly. Rewind. Izuku gasped slightly. Oh, so, she could maybe rewind my brain back to a non-amnesiac state. Would that mean I forget the past 3 months? Or can she only heal physical injuries? Technically, the connections in my brains that form memories would be physical, but Katsuki cut him off by flicking his forehead. Holy shit, you're still such a nerd, Katsuki said, sounding amused and almost affectionate. Izuku stuck his tongue out at him, then remembered why they had come in the first place. Can we go see Inko Mom now? He asked. Katsuki shrugged. Sure, if she's here. They went upstairs and found that his mother was in fact there. And Izuku spent some time with her telling her about his day and reciting all the names he's learned. He also told her about Eri, which made her smile. He eventually got around to the puzzles and sand, and she agreed with him, though she looked a little sad. She assured him she would do whatever he thought was best. Now, Izuku was standing in front of the Class 2 dorm rooms, taking deep breaths to stop himself from panicking. Katsuki let him hold his hand, and he squeezed it to remind himself that Katsuki was here with him. Ready for the effing circus, Deku? Katsuki asked. Izuku laughed. Katsuki seemed so grumpy all the time, he couldn't help but find it funny. Born ready. No one is born ready for these a-holes, Katsuki grumbled before pushing the door open and pulling him inside. Every head turned to stare, and Izuku froze again. They were all staring. They were watching him, waiting. When would they attack? He had to be. Go back to your shit, dumbasses, Katsuki snapped, breaking Izuku out of his spiral. The classmate startled and turned away, but he saw a few people continue to glance at him quickly. He unfroze himself and followed Katsuki forward through the dorm, stewing in the uncomfortable silence and his own fear. He had to stop being so afraid of these people. He suddenly stopped, letting go of Katsuki's hand and turning to face his classmates. Deku, Katsuki asked behind him, but he ignored him. Izuku took a deep breath, then turned to the first classmate he saw, a girl with a sleek black ponytail, studying at the head of a long table. Yaoyorozu Momo, he said. Her eyes widened, then she nodded and smiled. The panic lessened ever so slightly. He turned to the girl next to Yaoyorozu, who had short purple hair and headphone jacks growing from her earlobes. Jiro Kyoka. The girl nodded, and the panic loosened its grip on his chest even more. He went around the rest of the room, reciting everyone's full names he learned in class that morning, calming a bit more when they smiled and nodded in confirmation. He knew these people. He knew their names. They're all puzzle pieces, he muttered under his breath, then smiled. 18 puzzle pieces. He just needed to figure out where they all fit. Are you done now, Deku? Katsuki asked behind him. Izuku turned to meet his eyes with a flat look he stole from Aizawa-sensei. Reaffirming, Bakugo Katsuki. Katsuki rolled his eyes and Izuku heard a couple gasps from behind him. He turned to frown at his class. What? It's because Angel Deku swore again, Katsuki explained, and Izuku looked back to see that he was grinning. Did you do this, Bakugo? Uraraka asked, sounding scandalized. Nope, Katsuki and Izuku said at the same time. Everyone swears where I came from, Izuku explained, then scowled at nothing in particular. Especially effing drunkard. Katsuki barked a laugh and Izuku's heart fluttered at the sound. Yeah, F drunkard. F drunkard, Izuku repeated with vigor, clenching his fists. Uraraka blinked at them in surprise. Who's drunkard? One of the villains, Izuku explained, trying not to back away from her. He always wore this dumb cloak and thought it was way too funny when I broke another bone. What? Uraraka squeaked, sounding horrified. Izuku didn't notice her tone, too focused on the hot anger boiling over in his chest. He effing laughed, every time. I wanted to punch him, but he'd just make his dumb gas and knock me out before I got the chance. Oh, they broke your bones. A boy with spiky red hair, Kirishima, suddenly yelled, jumping up from his seat. Izuku's heart rate spiked back to racing and he stumbled back. And then he saw Kirishima's teeth. His pointed, sharp teeth. Like hers, he screamed, his quirk shooting through him and surrounding him with bright green light as he brought his fists up and readied for a fight. F off, he yelled, hoping to avoid a direct attack. Kirishima's eyes widened and he quickly dropped back into his seat. Katsuki's hand was heavy on Izuku's shoulder. Deku, chill. He wasn't attacking. Izuku didn't relax. He has teeth like hers, he whispered. He started breathing faster, vision losing focus. Were they related? The same quirk. The spy. Deku, I don't know who you're talking about, but I promise Kirishima is one of the least villainous people here. Izuku wanted to believe him, but he grabbed Katsuki's arm and looked up to meet his eyes. Do his teeth grow? No, Katsuki answered, looking at him strangely. Izuku let out a breath, quirk starting to deactivate. Not the same. He let go of Katsuki's arm and shuffled to the side so he could see Kirishima again. The red-haired boy was watching him, looking concerned and fearful. That was a very not sharp lady expression. Izuku took another deep breath and straightened up, still glowing with green lighting. You, Kirishima, do you use your teeth in battle? Kirishima blinked at him, then shook his head. No, I don't think I've ever done that. I'm more of a defensive guy. Izuku let out another calming breath and the last bits of lighting disappeared. Okay, good. You're not like her. Instinctively, his hand moved to brush over his left forearm where the puncture wounds used to be. He shuddered slightly. What was he doing? They were gone. He was here now. He was safe. Katsuki promised that. These people are his puzzle pieces, his friends. He had to stop being so untrusting of them. In a sudden burst of courage, Izuku quickly made his way to Kirishima's table and slammed his hands down on top of it, leaning towards him. Kirishima startled but didn't lean away. He had red eyes, too. Izuku focused on Kirishima's face, trying to slow his racing heart. He took a deep breath, then mustered up the most normal smile he could. "Hello, Kirishima," he said, keeping his voice just barely steady. Kirishima looked lost, then grinned at him. "Hey, Midoriya." Izuku drew in a sharp breath at the shark-toothed smile, but forced himself to stay there. His smile was nothing like hers. His smile was wide and happy, not thin and sharp and full of his pain. Izuku smiled for real, taking his hands off the table and backing away. "You're not like her at all," he said happily. "Yeah, okay. Deku, are you good?" Katsuki asked, coming up behind him. Izuku turned and smiled wider at his friend. "Yup, I am 99% sure he's not going to bite me." "What?" Kirishima spluttered. "No, I would never bite you." Izuku ducked his head, ashamed at how insulted Kirishima seemed. "Sorry, it's just you, well, you have teeth like her, and she." Izuku trailed off, thinking of Sharp Lady looming above him during one of their rare fights, a twisted mess of razor-sharp metal shooting at him from all directions. He swallowed his fear and squeezed his fists closed. It wasn't as much biting as it was stabbing, he finished quietly. He heard Katsuki growl beside him. "Is that who effing Sharp Lady is?" Izuku nodded. "I am going to kill that beach," Katsuki snarled. Izuku jumped up and grabbed his arms, making him look at him. "No," he said harshly. "No, don't go after her, please. I can't." He was starting to hyperventilate now. "If she got her hands on you, I don't shit. She would." He started shaking on his feet, mouth tasting like blood. "She would tear him to pieces. I can effing handle her, Deku." Katsuki snapped. Izuku's arms started burning with pain and he felt like he was choking on the taste of blood. He couldn't speak. All he could do was fall into Katsuki and squeeze his arms, trying to beg as his mind was filled with images of red-stained blurs. "Please don't go. I can't do it without you." Suddenly, Katsuki was in front of him and he realized he was kneeling on the ground, choking on his own breath. He felt like his lungs were being crushed. "Deku," Katsuki yelled, voice filtering through miles of hazy water. "I won't do anything yet, okay? I take it back." Izuku looked up at him, meeting his eyes and trying to speak but finding himself unable. Katsuki heard his unspoken question anyways. "I promise." Izuku drew in a sudden, rough breath, then doubled over and coughed violently. His breathing was quick and ragged, but eventually started to slow. He hugged himself tightly, folding over and pressing his forehead to the cool ground, shaking with his sobs. "It's okay. Katsuki would be okay. Kaken will be okay." Izuku could barely hear the voice in his whirlwind of other thoughts, but he felt the sand slipping through the cracks. Crap, what did he think? There was a name. Whose name? There was a name. He yelled out in exasperation, hitting his head against the floor as he was left with only that feeling again. The feeling that he had remembered something important, but now it was gone. He sat up, sniffling and still hugging himself, then met Katsuki's ruby red eyes. "The sand is gone again," he said quietly, hiccuping on another bout of tears. "I had something, but it's gone again." Katsuki didn't say anything, just pulled him in for a hug as they both knelt on the floor. Izuku didn't move to hug back, but he leaned his head into Katsuki's shoulder and breathed in deeply. He smelled like burnt sugar and plain soap, and for some reason it was very familiar and immediately calming. "Shit," he whispered when he finally stopped crying. "I did it again." He kept breaking down like this. He had to pull himself together or he'd never fix his puzzle. "It's fine, Deku, I get it," Katsuki mumbled into his hair. "That one was my fault." Izuku sniffled again and forced himself to speak clearly. "You're going to fight them, then I want to be there, too." He put a hand over Katsuki's mouth before he could protest, glaring at him. "I'm effing serious. And you're going to let me write down everything I remember and make a real plan. They may all be idiots, but they're idiots that all but killed me multiple times a day," he said, serious and somber. He wasn't letting Katsuki or anybody go into that hideout unprepared. Katsuki pried Izuku's hand off his mouth, also glaring. "Fine, you have to promise." "I already did." "Do it again." Katsuki huffed. "I effing promise." "And you never break a effing promise," Izuku reminded him. Katsuki rolled his eyes, then got to his feet and held out a hand for Izuku. Izuku let him pull him to his feet, then turned to glare at all their classmates. "That goes for all of you," he ordered. "I don't know you that well, and you honestly all kind of scare the hell out of me, but I do know I want you alive and safe." He looked around at all the students, each of which nodded at him. He settled after that, letting his shoulders droop forward. "You know," he said, "they really were just a bunch of idiots. Violent idiots, but still idiots. Want to know how I got out?" Izuku laughed weirdly, looking down at his hands. "I stole a drunk guy's keys and punched through a window with my bare hands, then just ran away." He laughed again, unable to control the giggles. Maybe he was losing it for real this time. "I had to jump up the wall to get to the window, but it was really that easy. Maybe that makes me the idiot for not doing it earlier." Izuku sighed, head spinning in a way that was very confusing. He felt his eyelids grow heavy and flutter closed, so he stumbled backwards, bumping into Katsuki. "I'm going to pass out now," he slurred, before doing just that. Katsuki grunted and bent his knees to catch Deku as he went limp against him, chin dropping to his chest and sliding sideways. He muttered, hoisting him up. "That's the second effing time." He managed to hold Deku up long enough to get the nerd on his back. And thankfully Deku was conscious enough to sling his arms over Katsuki's shoulders. He shifted his weight around a bit, then looked back to find all his classmates staring at him with concern plastered over their faces. "Wait, no, not him. Deku, I'm taking him upstairs," he told them as a courtesy before whisking Deku into the elevator and pressing the door close button, shutting the metal doors on his classmate. That all went just as well as he thought it would. Which is to say it went like shit. And of course, his pride and anger had fed him over with the whole sharp lady thing. He should have kept his mouth shut or told Deku he was going to be careful right after he'd warned him. But when he saw the pure fear in Deku's normally bright green eyes, watching how they went dark and Deku started shaking, he lost it for a second. He would make good on his promise and not doing anything rash, but he couldn't contain the rage boiling in his chest. As soon as he reached his room and laid Deku gently on the bed, he turned around and kicked his wall as hard as he could, stifling a yell of anger. He had to pull himself together. He counted to 10 in his head, remembering the instructions of the school therapist and taking measured breaths. When he finally felt calmer, he made his way over to the side of the bed and stared down at Deku. His dark green hair was splayed out over the pillow and he had that same serene expression as before, almost smiling, his chest moving up and down in slow breaths. Katsuki sighed, feeling the guilt and warmth mix and tighten in his chest, then moved to slowly take Deku's shoes off and throw them to the ground. Stupid nerd got dirt in his bed. With another lingering look at Deku, Katsuki turned away and shed his uniform jacket, then kicked his boots off. He hung the jacket on the hanger on his door, then slumped down at his desk to start his homework. He eventually realized it didn't matter what subject he tried or how long he sat there staring at it. All his mind could focus on was the light, airy sound of Deku breathing behind him. He felt like crying, and he felt like blowing something up and screaming. Pathetic. This was all such a effing mess. If he had just been a better hero, better friend, or just better, then Deku wouldn't have to go through this. He wouldn't jump at every new sound or get freaked out by Kirishima, for FS sake, and he wouldn't be struggling with a sand sifter memory. He would be his normal, Deku self, happy and peppy at all times, with his bouncy green curls and insufferable, never-ending smile. He and Katsuki would spend their days at school competing and teasing each other, then spend their hours after school sparring or talking with All Might. Deku would be practicing his dual quirk wielding, and Katsuki would get to yell at him about it and hear him get all determined and shit. Aizawa-sensei would scold them for being problem children and Katsuki would laugh as Deku apologized and scolded him too. They would have those weird moments of peace as they watched the sunset after sparring, shoulders pressed together as they held each other up. Deku would be happy, and Katsuki wouldn't be so effing broken anymore. Katsuki almost started crying, but forced the tears back down. He was being such a baby. He stood from his desk and made his way back to the side of the bed, watching Deku sleep. It would all be effing fine. Deku was alive, and he'd put his puzzle together, and Uri would be able to help him, and then he'd be back. Yeah, Katsuki sighed heavily again, giving up on his homework and deciding to make himself a makeshift bed on the floor. But when he leaned over to grab a pillow from his bed, Deku mumbled something and reached up a hand to grab his arm and start pulling him down. Katsuki's eyes widened and he tried to pull back, but Deku's grip was strong, even in his sleep. "Katsukak," Deku started, then dissolved into more incoherent muttering and snores. Katsuki's heart still skipped a beat, and he stopped trying to pull away. Instead, he grabbed the corner of his blanket and pulled it down, yanking it out from under Deku slowly until he could pull it back up over him, slipping in beside him before he did. Deku let go of his arm but turned towards him, breathing in through his nose and bringing back the hint of a smile. Katsuki wanted to move towards him but didn't, too worried that he'd push him away. The last time they shared a bed was when they were 6, and a lot had changed since then. So instead, he lay his head on his pillow and turned on his side to watch Deku. Eventually, he drifted off to sleep. When Katsuki woke up, his shoulder was pins and needle under the weight of something. He craned his neck to the side and got a face full of dark green and a nose full of green apple shampoo. He blinked in surprise, then realized there was also an arm laid across his chest. A bandaged, freckled arm. Apparently, sleeping Deku had no qualms about acting like they were 6 years old anymore. Deku stirred slightly, nuzzling his head further towards Katsuki's neck and making his heart stutter and breath catch. Deku hadn't been this close to him when they weren't sparring since forever, but it all felt so natural and familiar. Katsuki couldn't help a small smile as he dropped his head back onto his pillow, blinking up at his ceiling. His room was bright enough for him to say it was morning, but he wasn't sure what time. Hopefully, he hadn't slept through any classes. He'd already missed more school in the past week than he had in his entire academic career, besides being hospitalized in the, war. He heard a murmur from beside him and felt Deku shift, the arm on his chest moving slightly. Katsuki briefly wondered if he should wake Deku up. And then suddenly there was a shriek and Deku was jolting backwards. Katsuki rolled over quickly and grabbed Deku's arm before he fell off the bed. "Shit, Deku, chill," he said, meeting the green eyes. Deku was staring at him with panic on his face. Then he squinted at him. Katsuki pulled Deku back fully onto the bed, heart panging at the name. He'd thought last night that maybe ... but apparently not. "Yeah, it's just me." He let go of Deku's arm and sat up in the bed. "You okay?" Deku nodded and sat up, stretching his arms out and yawning. All Katsuki could do was stare at him, slightly breathless. Morning Deku had wild bedhead and crinkled up his nose as he yawned and blinked the sleep from his eyes, rubbing his freckled cheeks and sighing. "Yes, sorry about that. Forgot where I was for a moment," Deku said, looking around the room. "Where exactly am I, though?" "My dorm room," Katsuki explained, feeling nervous for some reason. "You, pulled me into bed with you while you were still asleep." Deku blinked at him, then frowned. "Oh, sorry." Katsuki glared. "Stop it. And it's fine, I don't mind sharing." Deku smiled at him and his heart skipped another beat. "Okie dokie, Katsuki. So close to normal." Deku turned back to look out on his balcony. "Aw, man, I missed the sunrise. We can watch the sunset tonight," Katsuki suggested, heart fluttering in a nervous way he hated. "Oh, yeah," Deku chirped, beaming. "That'll be nice." "Yeah," Katsuki said quietly, staring at him. They sat in silence for a moment before Deku cleared his throat and startled Katsuki back into his right mind. "What time is it?" "The clock is right effing there," Katsuki told him, pointing the clock above his bed. It was almost 8 a.m., which meant they had less than an hour before the first class of the day. Didn't see that," Deku said, looking to the clock. His eyes widened. "Gah, don't we have to be at school soon?" "Relax, Deku. We live on campus, remember?" Deku gave him a look. "Oh right, how could I forget? I have such a wonderful memory." He deadpanned. Katsuki rolled his eyes at the familiar yet rare Deku sarcasm, then slid off his bed. "Let's go get breakfast before we leave." He glanced down at his crinkled uniform shirt and pants, smoothing them out and deciding he didn't care enough to change. He heard Deku jump off the bed behind him and pointed to his beat-up red shoes on the ground. "Take your shoes down with you." Deku nodded, still looking partially asleep, and they both grabbed their shoes before padding out into the hallway in their socks. They stood in silence in the elevator, and Deku nearly fell asleep on him again before Katsuki elbowed him awake. When they entered the common room, again every head turned to look at them. Only this time, Deku didn't stiffen or grab onto him, only looked out at their classmate with the look in his eye, the one that meant he was assessing a situation for threats. He pursed his lips, then looked back to Katsuki, seemingly having determined no immediate reason to worry. That was good. Katsuki made his way to the shoe cubbies by the door, shoving his boots in his then pointing to Deku's. "Put your shoes in there," he ordered. Deku complied. Then Katsuki led him into the kitchen. He felt like he was being followed by a cute, sleepy, skittish bunny. "Are you making pancakes again?" Deku asked, voice light. "No, Deku, I'm not making you pancakes every effing morning." "Well, you have to make me something. Unless I've been unbanned from the kitchen," Deku said, propping his elbows up on the counter and resting his chin on his hands. "Maybe I'll just let you starve," Katsuki shot back. "You wouldn't dare," Deku answered, just above a mumble. Katsuki grabbed an apple from the bowl of fruit and held it out to Deku with a smirk. "How about this?" Deku's eyes widened and he gagged. "Oh my god, I hate you. How could you even?" Deku cut himself off with another gag, shrinking away from the apple like it was steaming dog shit and sticking his tongue out. Katsuki barked a laugh and tossed the apple to his other hand, then took a bite. "Wow, that's the good shit," he said, making exaggerated noises of delight. Deku always had the stupid way about him that made Katsuki act like a ridiculous kid again. Deku glared at him. "Imagine it was moldy and full of worms, Katsuki. Imagine eating a squiggly worm in a mushy, moldy apple from the ground. Then we can effing talk." Katsuki couldn't stop his own gag at the suggestion, but stared at the apple in his hand with distaste. "Okay, fine, you ruined it," he said, tossing the partially eaten apple in the garbage. "Gross as F." "No, what's gross as F is me eating a worm." "Katsuki, a worm. Do you want to know what it tasted like? Or the texture?" "It was slimy, but the apple was so gross it was just as slimy, so." You have made your effing point, Katsuki yelled, making a face. He felt like he was about to throw up in his mouth. A effing worm. Effing hell, Deku. Disgusting. I'm not even hungry anymore. I am, Deku said with a smug smile. Little shit. You should give me all your food. No, Katsuki answered, glaring at him. Excuse me, Midoriya, a voice said from behind Deku, making him jump and spin around. Tsuyu blinked in surprise and took a couple steps back. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. No, you Asui Tsuyu, right? Deku squeaked, pressing back into the kitchen counter. Katsuki made his way around to stand next to him, hoping his presence would make him less jumpy. Better make a good impression, Deku, he joked, trying to calm him. She's on the council. Deku screwed his face up to think for a second. Then his eyes widened with realization and he smiled. Oh yeah. Tsuyu smiled and poked her cheek. You told him about that. I wanted to be unbanned so Katsuki could teach me how to make pancakes, Deku said, still pressing himself into the counter. Well, Tsuyu said, we will have to discuss it, Kiro. Deku gave her a nervous smile and nodded. Okay, he whispered. Tsuyu held out a plate towards him and he jolted a bit, staring down at it. I just came over to offer you the rest of the food I made. Deku stared down at the plate of rice and dried seaweed with wide eyes, furrowing his brows. He was assessing threats again. Deku, she's not effing poisoning you. And there aren't knives under the effing rice or some shit, Katsuki told him. Deku looked up at him, surprised, and Tsuyu gave him a confused look. Yes, Deku said slowly, because she is my friend. Katsuki nodded. Yeah, so take the effing food. Deku hesitantly reached out and let Tsuyu pass him the plate, narrowing his eyes at it, then smiling up at Tsuyu. Thank you, Asui. Call me Tsu, Kiro, Tsuyu told him. Deku looked startled for a second, then blushed and nodded. Thank you, Tsu. She smiled at him, then returned to her seat at the table with the rest of Deku's friends, who immediately swarmed towards her, probably asking how it went. Katsuki felt a little guilty. Why should he, of all people, get Deku's trust instead of his real friends? Deku hummed, making him turn to see Deku leaning over the counter with a mouthful of rice. This is also better than stale potatoes, he said, slightly muffled through the food in his mouth. Katsuki made a face and flicked his forehead. Don't effing talk with food in your mouth, Deku. Sorry, Katsuki, Deku said, spitting little bits of rice everywhere. Katsuki jolted away and glared at him. Disgusting nerd. He used to have some effing manners. Deku smirked at him in a way that let Katsuki know he was messing with him, then turned back to inhale the rest of his food. Katsuki looked away in mild disgust, yet happy that he was eating food someone else gave him, then went to the kitchen to make some breakfast of his own. The rest of the day until lunch was more or less normal if Katsuki ignored that Deku was silent for the entirety of classes and rarely let go of his arm. They ate lunch in the teacher's lounge again, not wanting to deal with the entire school in the cafeteria, and Aizawa-sensei and All Might joined them. Deku watched everyone with suspicion the whole day, but there were no more outbursts of quirk usage or tears. But then came the last class of that day, quirk training at Ground Beta. The students of Tua were going to be paired up in teams and fight against another team. Team A would be heroes, whose goal was to save the hostage dummies in one of the buildings, and Team B was the villains, who tried to stop them. Katsuki was itching to get out there and blast his classmates to Kingdom Come, but there was Deku to worry about. Deku, who would probably freak out if he saw his classmate fighting each other. Deku, who he couldn't be separated from for what he had to admit was both their sakes. There was a constant, annoying whisper at the back of his brain that as he let Deku go for too long, he'd never see him again. Aizawa-sensei pulled them aside outside of the locker rooms where other students were getting ready. Knowing this, he explained the exercise, then just stared at them. The ponytail was still so strange, and the class had definitely mentioned it, but Aizawa-sensei refused to give them any answer. What do you want to do? Aizawa-sensei asked. Looking between the two of them, Katsuki looked to Deku. He effing hated it, but he'd do whatever the nerd wanted to do, even if they meant holding off combat training for a while. So, it's like a fake battle? Deku asked, frowning at the ground and scuffing his shoe against the gravel. Yes, Aizawa-sensei answered. If anyone gets hurt, we stop immediately. Katsuki could think of 100 times he'd been crushed, punched, kicked, or worse, and the exercises had gone on without a care, but maybe Deku meant a temporary rule change. Deku looked up at Aizawa-sensei, expression unreadable. Katsuki hated that he was seemingly able to hide his emotions now. Deku used to be an open book. I would be attacked and have to fight back, but not for real? Deku asked. Well, no, Aizawa-sensei said. You're in no condition to participate. You would be with me and the other teachers, watching. Deku straightened up at that, his eyes widening. Watching Katsuki fight without me? No way. It was pretty much the exact reaction Katsuki was expecting. Aizawa-sensei sighed at him. Then maybe you and Bakugo will have to sit out. Katsuki tried to quell his disappointment for Deku's sake and nodded. Fine. No, Deku protested, surprising Katsuki and Aizawa-sensei. What was he doing? I can do the thing too. What the F, Deku? Katsuki snapped, glaring at him. Absolutely not. Deku had a panic attack and passed out just yesterday because he saw Kirishima's teeth. There was no way he could handle a fight, nor was he healed enough to. I agree with Bakugo, Aizawa-sensei said for probably the first and last time. As I said, you are in no condition. Deku cut him off with an irritated huff. Look, I've been thinking about this, and I think, Deku put his hands up, igniting one for all's green lighting around them. I need to do something like this. Why the hell would you need that? Katsuki snapped again. That made no effing sense. Our classmates attacking you is what you're so afraid of in the first place. Exactly, Deku said, the lighting now surrounding his entire arms, which is why I need to do it. I'm so afraid that I'll be forced into another fight at any moment and they'll try to kill me or something. But if I go into the fight willingly, and then they don't kill me, which I really hope they won't, then I'll be less afraid. He dropped his hands down and looked up at Katsuki, looking sad and lost. I have to prove that they aren't like them. And something about the idea of battling with you, he gestured to Katsuki. By my side, it feels like a puzzle piece, you know. I'm not as scared about it because I know you'll have my back, right? That's what we do. We're a team, I think. Katsuki stared at him, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Waiting for Deku to suddenly jump away and start apologizing and forgetting everything he said. But Deku doesn't move, just keeps his emerald eyes locked on Katsuki, almost like he's pleading. Are you? Katsuki started, heart beating fast. Is this sand or did you actually think that? He had to be sure, because if Deku really just said that, really just remembered something like that, then maybe things weren't as hopeless as he thought. Deku gave him a small smile. No sand. I think it's a puzzle piece. Did I? Oh, put it in the right place. Katsuki felt his heart soar, and before he could stop himself, he grabbed Deku's arm and yanked him into a hug, breathing in the familiar scent of green apple shampoo and mint. Deku jolted in his arms, then relaxed and grabbed the back of his shirt. Holy shit, he remembered. He remembered me. Us. Whatever the F we are, he remembered it. After a moment, Katsuki came back to himself and quickly detached himself from the hug, but was unable to wipe the smile from his face. Deku's eyes were brimming with tears, and he wiped them away as he sniffled. Yeah, that was the right effing spot, nerd, Katsuki told him. Deku beamed at him, making his heart flutter. What the F happened? Deku shrugged. I'm not sure. I kind of just said it before I thought it, and it felt right as soon as I did. We're a team. Best effing team around. Katsuki agreed proudly, his chest warm. He declined to mention the rivalry part of their team's situation. Yeah, you specialize in being a pain in my ass, Aizawa-sensei deadpanned, making them look at him. Deku frowned and Katsuki couldn't help but laugh. And I'm guessing there's no talking you out of this now. Deku got the determined glint in his eyes and grinned. Nope, I am scared out of my mind, but I started my puzzle so I'm gonna keep going. Aizawa-sensei sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. I have no idea what you're talking about, problem child. But I'm glad you seem. He looked Deku up and down, kind of normal. I am going to take that as a compliment, Deku said, smiling. Katsuki itched to fight suddenly exploded, and he grabbed Deku and started dragging him towards the locker rooms, becoming impatient. Let's go blast our effing classmates. Deku jogged a bit to come up beside him, and Katsuki let go of his arm. Hey, Katsuki, what even is your quirk? Oh, right, Deku didn't know anymore. My sweat has nitroglycerin in it, he explained, and I can set it off as explosions from my hands. That is really cool. Scary, but cool. Katsuki turned back to give him a smug grin as he opened the locker room doors. Yeah, it is. Wait till you see the costume. Deku's eyes widened and he gasped. Do I have a costume? Obviously. All of their classmates seemed to have already finished changing and gotten out to ground beta, which meant they were alone. Katsuki made his way to his and Deku's lockers, opening both up. For some reason, he knew the code to Deku's locker. They were next to each other, so he guessed he'd watched him put it in enough. Katsuki pulled out both of the costume cases and set them down on the benches. Here, that's yours. Be right back. He turned back to his locker to grab his gauntlets, then went to a different section of the room behind a locker wall to change. Deku remembered the so-called Wonder Duo. That's what All Might refused to stop calling them. Kind of, at least. Did that mean he'd remember more things? Wait, did he even know how to use his quirk anymore? He did mention breaking bones. And if he was back to that level, he shouldn't be doing this. Katsuki huffed as he slid on his second boot, then strapped the heavy gauntlets on his arms, admiring them a bit. They were seriously cool as F. He made his way back to where Deku was, meaning to ask him about his quirk, but found Deku staring down in confusion at his metal shoe bracers. He had the rest of the costume on correctly, and thankfully hadn't pulled up the stupid bunny ear hood. Katsuki wanted to burn it every time he saw it. Okay, I got the leg things, Deku said, probably hearing Katsuki come in. But what the hell are these for? They go over your effing shoes, Deku, Katsuki scoffed. Deku looked up at him, confused, then his eyes widened again. Well, you were right. That costume is epic. Katsuki felt pride swell in his chest, having finally mostly got over the anger he got when Deku used to compliment him. Of effing course it is. Now put your shitty shoe guards on and let's go. Deku frowned down at the metal guards, confused again, but sat down on the bench and started to put them on. Why do I need these? Okay, so he didn't remember that. You kick shit a lot, Katsuki explained. That helps make the kicks harder and not destroy your shoes. Deku's mouth made an O and his eyes widened in realization. Oh, yeah, I always tried kicking, but I didn't know why. It usually dealt some damage, but it hurt me, too. He stood up, stomping his feet once and sending a reverberating clank through the empty room. These'll help a lot. What exactly do you remember about fighting? Katsuki finally asked. And your quirk? Deku faltered, tensing like the question was a threat, then looked at him and relaxed a bit. Well, the fighting all seems to be muscle memory and instincts. Sometimes I did things but didn't know why, like the kicking. I could usually hold my own for quite a while. And my quirk? He trailed off, looking suddenly scared. Why do you want to know? Katsuki frowned at him. What was that reaction? I want to know what you know, Deku. You can trust me. I know everything that you knew about it. I'm probably the only person that does. Deku squinted at him, then his mouth fell open slightly. Oh my god, he breathed. What? Deku shook his head. Never mind, I'll tell you later. I have to think through some things. And I don't want you telling me puzzle piece stuff. Katsuki felt annoyance and anger tighten in his chest but forced himself to soothe it out. Deku wasn't trying to hide shit. He was doing it for a good reason. Okay, so what do you know? Well, Deku huffed, pinching his brows together and puffing his cheeks in his adorable funny thinking face. Not that much, honestly. I know how to turn it on and off. I know I can raise and lower the power level. The higher it is, the more it can hurt me and others. And I know that I can focus it in different parts of my body. I also think I have some secondary quirks I don't know how to access, because the villains kept telling me to use black snake things, they called it, or flying, black whip and float. Shit, he couldn't use them anymore. That it? Katsuki asked, trying to keep the panic from his voice. Deku needed to rediscover those parts of One for All. He hadn't been able to control the unlocking in the past, so who knows how long it would take to do it again. Shit, Deku nodded. I think so. Do I actually have other quirks? Wouldn't that be giving you puzzle pieces? Katsuki said, though he wanted to tell him. Deku deflated and frowned. Oh, right. You'll figure it out, Katsuki assured them both. Deku had to figure it out. The fate of the hero's world was literally dependent on it. No big deal. Now let's get effing going. I haven't gotten to do this in way too long. Please don't say you're a violent fighter, Deku said, sounding serious. Katsuki turned to look at him, then decided to be honest. People say I'm aggressive, but I don't hurt people for fun. Deku narrowed his eyes at him, then shrugged. I trust you, so I can deal. Deku grinned and put his fists up. Let's beat their asses. Katsuki returned the grin. Race you. And with that, he turned and bolted out the door as Deku yelped behind him. For a moment, running through the school campus towards ground beta with Deku on his heels, he could pretend nothing had ever happened. He turned a corner and skidded to a stop in front of his classmates. Then suddenly Deku slammed into him from behind, sending him stumbling forwards. Gah, what the F, Deku? Deku held out his hands and jumped backwards. Sorry, I didn't know we were going to stop here. Deku, you've got your costume on, Uraraka said, sounding confused but happy. Deku's eyes widened at being addressed. Then he stepped forward and pressed into Katsuki's side like he did when he was nervous. Yup, I am doing whatever the hell you guys are doing today. He swung his arm around in a light punch and made a tiny explosion sound effect. Damn it, why was he still so cute? Katsuki's gonna show me how he blows shit up. And I'm going to kick things, I think. You seem raring to go, Aizawa-sensei said, appearing behind the students and startling them all as they turned to look. Yes, sir, Deku said. I used to fight every day and well, I don't exactly miss it, but it feels weird to sit around all day. Sure, Aizawa-sensei looked out at his students, then clicked a remote and turned on the screen behind him. These are the teams for today's exercise. Get with your partners. As Aizawa-sensei explained the exercise to his classmates, Katsuki scanned the list on the screen. He and Deku were a team, going up against Uraraka and Tsuyu. Aizawa-sensei must have picked two of Deku's closest friends on purpose. As a bonus, he'd already spoken to them both and started trusting them. We'll be starting in 5 minutes, Aizawa-sensei said, finishing his explanation. First up is Kaminari, Ashido, Kirishima, and Shinso. Bakugo, Midoriya, Uraraka, and Asui are next. The class broke off into groups to plan, but Tsuyu and Uraraka made their way across the room to Katsuki and Deku. He felt Deku stiffen next to him. Hello, Uraraka chirped, smiling at him. So, we're going to be against each other. Deku nodded. I thought you might want to know our quirks, unless you remember. Deku shook his head. No, I don't remember. I'd like it if you told me, though. Sure, Uraraka answered. My quirk is called zero gravity. When I touch something with all 5 fingers, it floats. Watch. She tapped Tsuyu on the shoulder, making the other girl start floating into the air, though she didn't seem to mind. Uraraka steepled her fingers and Tsuyu dropped back to the floor. Whoa, that's pretty cool, Deku said, a hint of his starry-eyed expression coming back. Thank you. My quirk is called Frog, Tsuyu said. It means I can do anything a frog can do, like jump really high or grab things with my tongue. That is also cool. Deku smiled at them. And neither of you will be stabbing me. Great. The last part sounded a little crazed as Deku took in a shaky breath and Tsuyu and Uraraka gave him shocked looks. No stabbing, Uraraka assured him slowly. Deku nodded again, his eyes a little unfocused in a way that made Katsuki nervous. This was all definitely scaring the hell out of Deku. But he had said he'd do it because he trusted that Katsuki was going to have his back. He trusted that they would be a team. So, Katsuki had to be that for him. Come on, Deku, he said, clapping Deku on the back and startling him back into focus. Let's go plan some shit. Right, Deku said, straightening up. I can do plans. I like making plans. Deku frowned a bit. Though, I have yet to make one that does not end with me all beat up. Well, if that didn't sound like normal Deku, then what the hell did? Katsuki almost laughed before he remembered how Deku looked when he found him on the park bench. That was apparently the end product of a Deku plan gone right. So what the hell did the latest Deku plans gone wrong look like? Then maybe I should be in charge of the plan, Katsuki said. Deku snorted a laugh, then gave the girls a small wave before following Katsuki to a more private corner of the room. After the nerd stopped glancing around the room anxiously and actually started paying attention to Katsuki's attempts at planning, he was off on his wild tangents and mumbles, running through every scenario and different possibility, just like he always did. It was immensely comforting to watch and take part in, though Katsuki wouldn't have said that to anyone. And if some of Katsuki's input was stolen from Deku's notebooks he may or may not have found and read through these past 3 months, no one needed to know. They finally settled on what Katsuki thought was a solid plan to save the hostages from the other team just before the buzzer went off, signaling the end of the first round. Shinso and Kirishima had won because Kaminari had been dumb enough to let his crush brainwash him, and telling Deku and Katsuki to get to their starting places. Deku's determined look barely wavered when he saw their classmates return, covered in grime and some bruises, but happily joking and talking with each other. And he easily fell into step beside Katsuki as they made their way to the street in front of the hostage building. Uraraka and Tsuyu were already inside the building, readying themselves to play the villains and guard their dummies. Katsuki turned to say something to Deku, some teasing insult or possibly encouragement, but promptly forgot all words when his eyes found Deku's profile. A smile that could be called a smirk formed on his lips, with his determined emerald eyes trained on the building ahead. Then, he turned to face Katsuki, small smirk breaking into his full let's do this grin, and Katsuki's heart hiccuped in his chest. Let's save some people and blast some villains, Katsuki. The use of his given name just barely snapped him out of his weird mind F. Holy shit, what was wrong with him? They were about to start a training exercise, one where Deku was relying on him to have his back. He had to focus on the exercise, not goddamn Deku and his weirdly weird face. Better keep up, nerd, he managed, right before another buzzer blared, starting their round. He and Deku made their way into the building, getting to work on sweeping each floor to find the other team. It might have been more time efficient to split up to perform this initial task, but neither boy's anxiety was going to allow that, even in a training exercise. They finally found the other team and the actual fighting that Katsuki had been craving began. As usual, Uraraka and Tsuyu proved to be formidable opponents, and it was a feeling that Katsuki had begun to relish. The entire time, though, Katsuki had his attention split between whatever classmate he was struggling against and the incessant worry to check on Deku. He effing hated it, but he couldn't stop it. It was seemingly useless, though, because Deku was more than taking care of himself. He didn't fight quite as well as he used to, but what he lacked in precision and practice he was making up for with something different, something almost ruthless, and something that Katsuki wasn't so sure he liked. Not ruthless in the way Katsuki was, or even in the way Deku himself used to be. That was the ruthlessness of a person determined to win and save. This Deku was ruthless like he was fighting for his survival. Shit, Deku and Katsuki managed to defeat the other team and located their hostages before time was up, thankfully. And they were declared the winners when the buzzer went off. Their plan worked, but Katsuki's usual elation and pride when he won something was tamped down by a nasty feeling in the pit of his stomach. A nasty feeling he got when he thought about the dark look in Deku's eyes during the simulation, the panic and fear packed into his every move. He was fighting like a man who wasn't sure he'd stay alive to see the end. What happened to make him fight like that? And for the 100th time, Katsuki caught himself thinking, what did my failures put him through? Izuku felt crazy with anxiety and pride. He did it. He did the exercise, fought his classmates, and came out the other end not only still able to stand, but having won. With Katsuki, and absolutely no one was hurt beyond repair, and no one was yelling at or threatening him. He and Katsuki were a team. They worked together like a team. Izuku had never felt calmer, yet still giddy. It was the kind of giddy he got coming down from an panic adrenaline rush. Hopefully, he wasn't going to pass out when he finally hit the bottom. We did it, Katsuki, he chirped happily, turning to his teammate as they walked back to their classmates. He could immediately tell something was wrong. Katsuki was watching him, expression ridden with concern and analysis. What? Katsuki pursed his lips, then sighed and turned away. Nothing, just glad you're okay. Me too, Izuku said, the giddiness overriding his worry about Katsuki. For now, at least, I was in a fight and look at me, still standing on my own 2 feet. He tapped his metal-clad sneakers against the road to drive home his point, smiling. Deku, Katsuki said, calm and serious. I need you to realize that outcome was not one you should have doubted in a situation like this. Izuku faltered, his gait slowing. It's not. I didn't ... What do you mean? Katsuki sighed again. I feel like you have this interpretation of the world that's honestly a really effed up one. Not that that's your fault, he added quickly, but I don't think I should keep allowing you to have that effed up view, you know. It's not even puzzle pieces. Then what is it? Izuku didn't doubt his worldview was skewed from Katsuki's. But was it really that off? It's the way you think about things, Deku. For example, someone not stabbing you, or your classmates not beating you half to death are not things you celebrate. They are normal, expected things. Oh, Izuku mulled that over for a second. He guessed it made sense. Friends weren't supposed to hurt you. Normal people weren't supposed to hurt other people for fun. And the effing searching for possible weapons thing. Also effed up. I suppose that's a survival instinct, huh? Izuku mumbled. He wasn't sure he'd ever be able to stop doing that. The knowledge that random things could be used as weapons had literally saved him from near death in the past. I just ... You don't have to fight to survive anymore, Deku. Deku turned to look at Katsuki's profile as they walked side by side. Katsuki looked broken. Deku felt dark. Unwelcome anger snake its way into his chest and squeeze around his heart. Maybe you don't, he hissed. What did he know? Nothing, was the answer. Katsuki knew nothing of how the world worked, or how cruel people could really be. He had never been treated worse than a dog in a fighting ring. He had never been battered and bruised and bloodied until he couldn't think about anything but pain, every single day without end. He didn't know what that was like. He didn't understand what it was like to crave death and survival in equal measure yet be given neither. Deku, Katsuki sounded as broken as he looked. Izuku ignored him, marching ahead to the walled-off area where the rest of the class was waiting. Katsuki didn't understand. Izuku had to make him understand. He had to. He kept ignoring Katsuki's calls after him, speeding up and pushing past his classmates until he made it to the middle of the pseudo room. He came to a stop there, sweeping the room for everything he could find, including the students. Soon, Katsuki pushed into the room after him and stopped in front of him. Deku, 47, Izuku interrupted, meeting Katsuki's regretful look with flat calculation. And that's a first sweep. Out of 47. There are 29 I can use for myself. The other 18 are the students. Katsuki blinked at him, opening his mouth to speak, but Izuku cut him off again. Number 1. Aizawa-sensei's remote. Izuku proceeded to go down the list of counted weapons and every possible use he could think of for them, as well as how they could injure someone. Some of them had even been used on him or by him before. He laid out the information from his mind in excruciating detail, trying to quell his intense need to make Katsuki understand. He did have to fight to survive. Everyone had to fight survive. If Katsuki didn't know that, what could happen to him? Do you get it now? He pleaded. Everything, everywhere, everyone. You say this place isn't like that, but it is. There are always weapons, Katsuki. The only difference is the people that wield them, or the people that don't. Katsuki's eyes were full of sincerity and devastation. Izuku swallowed thick tears in his throat. He didn't get it. Deku, Izuku, not everyone in this world is cruel like that. You aren't. Katsuki gestured back at their classmates, who were watching them silently. They aren't. Deku felt the anger tighten in his chest, but it loosened when he met Katsuki's desperate eyes. Maybe I don't get it, he realized. He steeled himself against the rage and fear, ignoring the panic screaming in his head that this was a horrible idea, and wrapped a hand around the metal rail on the wall, activating his quirk and ripping it off before he could stop himself. The bar wrenched off the wall with a deafening creak, only breaking off on one end. Izuku grabbed another end with his other hand, activating the quirk through his whole body, and snapped the length of metal off over his knee. It was sharp on both ends, and he swung it around to face the rest of his class. What the? Prove it, Izuku said, his voice unnervingly cool, even to himself. He was freaking out on the inside as he marched up the nearest classmate behind Katsuki and shoved the jagged metal bar into their hands. He remembered the boy's name as Ida Tenya. Once Izuku was sure he was holding the bar. He stepped back a few steps and watched him. Ida looked shocked and unsure what to do with the weapon. Deku, Katsuki said quietly behind him, seeming cautious, like Izuku was about to go crazy at any second. You have a weapon now. I don't, Izuku told Ida, ignoring Katsuki. Attack me, he invited, holding his arms out. If he had said that spiky arms, or drunkard, or any of them, they would have been on him in seconds. They didn't even need an invite for that. Ida's eyes widened behind his glasses and he dropped the weapon to the ground. It landed with a resounding, metallic bang. I would never do that, midoriya. The angry knot around his heart started to loosen. Any one of you, he called louder. I am giving you permission to attack me. No, I'm asking you to. The knot unraveled faster when not a single classmate moved. Suddenly, a boy with floaty lavender hair pushed past Ida and stopped with the weapon at his feet, and Izuku's heart rate rocketed. Then, they boy, Shinso Hitoshi, Izuku remembered, glared down at the bar ... and kicked it hard. It skittered across the floor and bumped into Izuku's shoes. The clangs of metal were the only sound, echoing in the silence that followed. Izuku nearly collapsed with relief. Scratch that, he did collapse, stumbling back in the wall and sliding down until he crumpled to a ball on the ground. He titled his head back against the concrete wall, staring up at the cloudy blue sky. He felt like a weight had been lifted off his chest. One of many, but it was a huge one. Katsuki was right. Not them. They weren't like that. He felt like sobbing and he felt like cheering and he just felt way too much to handle right now. He was wrong. He had never been happier to be wrong. Deku, are you okay? Katsuki asked quietly, sitting next to him. Izuku titled his head to look at his friend and gave him a small smile. Never better, Katsuki. Do you mind telling me what the hell that was? I needed to prove it. Prove what? You said they weren't those kinds of people. And they aren't. Izuku sighed and dropped his head on Katsuki's shoulder, suddenly weary. Adrenaline drop. He bit back to instinct to apologize, knowing Katsuki would just snap at him to stop it. No, they aren't. They're good people. You're good people too, Izuku said, noticing that Katsuki hadn't mentioned himself in all this. Katsuki was quiet. Izuku knew the class was watching them, or at least able to, but he felt like they were alone. Like I've said, I don't know many things, Katsuki, but I know that. I've known that since I saw you in the park. Katsuki still didn't respond, and Izuku didn't look up to study his face. If he wanted to say something, he would say it. Izuku's eyelids felt heavy and started to droop as an exhausted weight settled deep into his bones. He'd been at a high level of constant panic this whole time, hadn't he? He'd been running on that fear, and now it was gone, taking all his energy with it. Katsuki, he murmured, trying to keep his mouth and eyes open long enough to tell him all this. Sorry about this, was the one thing he managed before he was out cold. His last thought was that Katsuki would be mad about the apology. When he came back to consciousness, it took Herculean effort to blink his heavy eyes open to the blurry world. A few more blinks, and the ceiling above him came into clearer view. He squinted up at it, then got distracted by a tiny, rough sigh from beside him. He turned his head, realizing that he was in the same bed as yesterday. Sure enough, Katsuki was next to him, his arm under Izuku's neck. Izuku felt their feet tangled together under the blanket. For a few moments, he let himself just lay there, matching his breaths to Katsuki's deep, slow ones. Katsuki's breathed rather loud in his sleep. Izuku noticed, almost snoring but not quite. It was more a soft, gruff sigh with every exhale. It could have easily lulled Izuku back to sleep, especially with the exhaustion still seeping into his every muscle. But before he drifted off again, Katsuki stirred, shifting and turning on his side to face Izuku. He opened his eyes slowly, squinting in the light that shone through the windows. The ruby red glinted in the soft sunlight. Hello, Izuku mumbled. You effing passed out again, is how Katsuki returned the greeting. I'm starting to think you just want me to carry you places. That's not true, Izuku whined quietly, too sleepy to raise his voice above a mumble. Maybe I like the fact that every time I pass out, I wake up next to you. He's too tired to filter what he's saying, so the thought slips out. He doesn't take it back. He meant it. Katsuki blinked at him in surprise, looking a little more awake and pink in the face, then rolled his eyes. You could do that without passing out first, Deku. Izuku felt something warm bubble in his chest and he snuggled in closer to Katsuki, bringing their faces inches apart. I'll keep that in mind. Katsuki's breath was warm on his face, but it also stunk. He crinkled up his nose and stuck his tongue out, though he didn't lean away. You have morning breath. Katsuki stared at him for another moment, with a soft look he only seemed to have away from everyone else. Then, without warning, he puffed his cheeks and blew a stream of air right at Izuku's nose. The warm, stagnant breath overwhelmed him and Izuku gagged and jolted back, rolling over and shoving his face in a pillow. Gross. He heard Katsuki laugh next to him and smiled into the pillow. Yeah, he really liked Katsuki's laugh, even if it was in a hole with gross morning breath. Your breath isn't much better, nerd. I haven't brushed my teeth in 3 months. Izuku groaned into the pillow. Not my fault. 3 months. Disgusting. The mattress shifted and Izuku felt the weight of Katsuki next to him pull away. He wanted to yank him back. Come on, Deku, get up. No. Izuku groaned into the pillow. Tired. Every part of his body was sinking into the mattress. Suddenly, the blanket was stripped away, and he was exposed to the cold air of the room. He yelped and flipped over on his back, hugging himself with bandaged arms. Katsuki smirked down at him from beside the bed. You slept for 12 effing hours, Deku. That was justified. Izuku moaned, wishing he could have the blanket back. How so? I think it's a good development, Izuku said, tilting his head to smile at his friend. I realized that I've been running on panicked adrenaline for way too long. But now, a huge chunk of that fear is gone. I'm glad it's gone. But it was also providing a lot of my energy, he explained sleepily. It's gone, Katsuki repeated. Izuku nodded and sat up on the bed, pulling his legs up to his chest and resting his chin on his knees. Not all of it. But, I don't know. I feel like, even though I can't trust them with everything, I can trust them not to attack me. I still want to stick around you, though. Maybe for more than a few reasons. So, our classmates aren't gonna scare the shit out of you anymore. Izuku shrugged his shoulder. I told them to attack me. They didn't. So, yeah, I don't think they'll scare me so much anymore. Katsuki smiled at him, a totally different smile than the one he had before training yesterday. One way to find out for sure, Deku. No, Izuku groaned, moving to flop back onto the bed. But Katsuki caught his arm before he could and dragged him off the mattress, forcing him to his feet. He immediately slumped into Katsuki's side like a rag doll. Come on, nerd. It's Saturday. Brunch time. Does that mean pancakes? Izuku mumbled into Katsuki's shoulder. Katsuki pushed him back. If you can stand on your own 2 effing feet, then fine. Izuku beamed and straightened himself upright. He would push through the muscle exhaustion for syrup. Deal. When the elevator's doors dinged open, and Izuku padded into the common area behind Katsuki, he braced himself for the feelings. He waited for his body to tense up as his classmates turned to watch him and waited for his heart to start racing. But none of that happened. He scanned the faces of each classmate in the area as they ate at long tables and lounged on blue couches. And he felt nothing but peace. Not a single one of them attacked him. When he found the face of Shinso, the lavender-haired boy who not only hadn't attacked him, but had given him his weapon back, he couldn't help but smile. He jogged a bit to catch up with Katsuki on their way to the kitchen and beamed at him. There's nothing. He hadn't even realized how scared he'd been until he wasn't anymore. It was freeing not to be. Katsuki returned his smile. Great. Izuku sat on the other side of the kitchen counter and enjoyed a while of watching Katsuki move about the kitchen and make breakfast. He did it so naturally, the same way he fought so naturally. Izuku had almost gotten distracted more than a few times yesterday just gaping at how good Katsuki was. He fought with precision and calculation, his movements smooth and practiced, and he looked cool as hell doing it. He felt another tug when he looked at Katsuki recently, but not one in his mind. It was one in his heart. He was still trying to figure out what it meant. He'd come to another realization yesterday, one he'd almost forgotten until now. A realization about the knowing feeling. Katsuki asked about his quirk, and when he got defensive, Katsuki said, "You can trust me, I know everything that you knew about it." Katsuki knew something about his quirk that the villains captured him for. What did he know? How did he know? Was he the only one that did? And did that have something to do with the new tugging feeling? Izuku's hands itched for a notebook and pen. There was too many thoughts racing through his mind. His head was overflowing. He'd never get anywhere if he didn't empty his brain out somewhere so he could organize his thoughts. Katsuki turned from the griddle and raised an eyebrow at him. Do you have some paper and a pen I could use? Katsuki looked amused at this request, for some reason, but he shrugged. I'm sure someone here does. I can go look. No, Izuku blurted, standing from his chair. I can ask them. Katsuki gave him a look. Then a tiny smile and nod. Izuku took a deep breath. This was fine. It was just asking for a pen. It was a good thing to start with, right? Small, simple, not a battle to the death. All good. He made his way over to the table where Shinso was sitting next to Uraraka and Tsuyu. Ada and boy Izuku remembered as Todoroki were also there. He'd interacted with 4 out of 5 of them. Uraraka and Tsuyu hadn't hurt him badly in the training exercise. Ada refused the weapon, and Shinso had given it back. They were probably the 4 he trusted most out of his classmates. Todoroki was a wild card here, but the others seemed to like him, so that was good. He could do this. As soon as he approached the table, Uraraka noticed him, and within seconds every one of them was staring at him. His body tensed up, but not like it did before a fight. He was anxious because random cool people were staring at him, and now he had to talk to them. Hey, Deku, Uraraka chirped, smiling at him like he was a cornered rabbit she was trying to calm down. He felt like that, so it was appropriate. Do you need something? Yes, Izuku answered, suddenly remembering why he'd come over here. Do any of you have a pencil or paper I could borrow? Well, not borrow. Use. I'll give the pencil back, though. Not the paper. What was that? That was weird, was what it was. Duh. I don't think I have that right now. Uraraka said, frowning. Here, said a monotone voice Izuku didn't recognize. He startled for a second, then noticed that Todoroki had ducked under the table and was now holding out a pen and a few sheets of lined paper. Is a pen okay, Midoriya? Izuku cleared his throat awkwardly and nodded. Okay. Apparently social interaction was always this scary, even without the threat of being attacked. He grabbed the pen and paper from Todoroki and bowed his head a bit. Thank you, Todoroki, he said before whirling around and scurrying back to the kitchen. He dropped his forehead onto the counter when he got there, letting out a long breath. He was so bad at this. Deku, I liked it better when I thought they were gonna kill me. Izuku groaned, still pressing his forehead into the table. Why? Katsuki poked him in the shoulder, making him look up. Because at least then the anxiety made sense. Katsuki snorted, reaching out to ruffle his hair. Izuku liked it when he did that. What did you need the shit for? Izuku's mind started racing again, like the floodgates of his social anxiety that had been blocking them momentarily open. Puzzle, he said, uncapping the pen and starting to write. Katsuki moved back to making breakfast as Izuku scribbled out his thoughts. Knowing, he wrote that at the top of the page and underlined it a few times for good measure. Then, who knows? Katsuki, All Might. Who doesn't? Everyone else. What do they know, not know? My quirk. Greater than Katsuki said he knew everything that I knew about my quirk. Greater than the villains wanted to know about my quirk. Why they captured me. That's why I had to fight. Greater than, but Katsuki already knows. So I could trust him not to force it out of me. Maybe my subconscious memory is trying to protect me. But why would only Katsuki and All Might know about my quirk? What is there to know? Katsuki said I did have secondary quirks, so my quirk is powerful. Maybe that's why. Wouldn't my classmates know I had those, though? Izuku frowned down at the notes. This still didn't make sense. Was it really about his quirk, or was he missing something? And if it was about his quirk, why? If not, what else? He wrote down these questions too, frowning deeper. There were too many question marks written down for a page where he was supposed to be finding answers. He decided to try a different train of thought, because the current one was going nowhere. He flipped the paper over and wrote a new title. Katsuki. Bakugo Katsuki. My friend. I trust him. He knows. We're a team. Knows things about my quirk. Greater than, probably more than I do. Two tugs, heart and mind. I need to protect him, but he said he doesn't want me to. Or doesn't need me to ... Not afraid of him at all. Only other person like that is Eri. I love Eri, and I'm not afraid of her. Are those things cause and effect? No, because I love my mom probably, but I'm still scared of her. Not a lot, but still. Katsuki and I had to be close before, right? Especially if we were a team, like he said. Are we close because he knows, or does he know because we're close? Izuku tapped the pen against the paper a few times, exasperated. Still no puzzle pieces, only hints and questions. Wait, there was one more thing. Moving back up the top of the page where he'd written Katsuki's full name, he added another question. Bakugo Katsuki, is there a name missing? Every time he said Katsuki's full name, he felt like it was unfished. A nickname, perhaps. Is the missing name a puzzle piece? Or maybe my quirk is one. Izuku stared at the scatterbrained notes for a second, then groaned. Okay, so he had two possibilities, but absolutely no ideas on how to get from the ideas to the actual memories. He couldn't just ask Katsuki if he had some secret name, nor could he ask about his quirk. That would be letting Katsuki give him the pieces again. It wasn't real that way. Suddenly, he felt a presence next to him and snatched the paper up, pressing it into his chest as Katsuki sat down in the neighboring seat and slid a plate across the table. Izuku's mouth almost started watering from how good it looked. He was starving. Figure anything out. Izuku sighed, then shrugged. We'll see. At the most optimistic he had in him to be. After eating breakfast, Izuku was still totally exhausted, so he returned to Katsuki's room to take a nap while Katsuki did schoolwork. Unfortunately for him, he only got about an hour and a half before Katsuki dragged him back out of the bed to go see Recovery Girl so she could check his wounds and change his bandages. It was the first time he'd be seeing her while conscious, and he had to say, she was nothing like Red Horns. The sloppy kisses made that very obvious. Katsuki didn't even try to hide his cackling at Izuku's disgusted expense. Not to mention that Recovery Girl was a whole lot kinder than Red Horns. It was nice, kind of gross and very uncomfortable, but nice. After the checkup, they went to visit Mom and Eri. Then Izuku spent the rest of the day in Katsuki's bed, drifting in and out of sleep. Apparently, a side effect of Recovery Girl's quirk was that it sapped the energy out of those it was used on too much. He had been healed enough that the bandages now only covered his knuckles, which had apparently been broken during his escape, his forearms, and his chest and sections of his stomach. All that was left on the exposed skin were small bruises or abrasions. And of course, the mess of scars. He found himself wondering again, during a short period of being half awake, what exactly had happened to his left arm that left that huge red scar. Izuku finally woke up almost all the way an unknown number of hours later, rubbing the sleep from his eyes to find Katsuki sitting on the floor by the bed, reading something. Katsuki had been there every time he woke up. Did he stay in his room all day because of Izuku? Izuku was glad for that, but he also felt a bit guilty about it. Katsuki had to have other friends. Didn't they want to see him? He turned away from Katsuki's spiky blonde hair poking over the edge of the bed to the glass doors leading out to a small balcony. The sun was low in the sky. It must have been getting late. Wait, Katsuki promised to show him the sunset, and he'd slept through it every time since then. But he was awake now. Katsuki, he chirped, leaning over the side of the bed above Katsuki. He was reading some manga Izuku couldn't see clearly enough to read. Katsuki shut the book and looked up at him. The sun's setting soon. You said we should watch it. You sure you're not gonna effing fall asleep again? I just slept for pretty much an entire day, so I think I can stay up for a few hours. Alright then, Katsuki conceded, tucking the book into the top drawer of his bedside table before standing up and motioning for Izuku to get off the bed. Katsuki grabbed a hoodie off the back of his desk chair and slipped it on. Izuku frowned. Is it gonna be cold? Katsuki looked at him, then moved to shuffle around in his drawers for a second before tossing another hoodie back at him. It was black, just like most of Katsuki's clothes. In fact, practically the only color Izuku had ever seen him wear was his school uniform and his hero costume. Izuku put on the hoodie. It was warm, super soft, and smelled like Katsuki. Interesting. Izuku was never taking it off. Come on, idiot. We gotta hurry, Katsuki said, tugging on the hoodie's sleeve and pulling him towards the door. Izuku followed him out into the hallway and towards the elevators. But the sun is still up. We have a bit of a walk first. Izuku groaned quietly, but Katsuki just gave him a look. Fine, as long as he got to hang out with Katsuki and see the sunset, he could deal with a walk. When they left the dorms and got outside, Izuku was glad for the hoodie, feeling the chilled evening air on his cheeks and shoving his hands into the hoodie's pocket to keep them warm. For a while, the only sound was the crunching of their feet over the gravel path as Izuku followed Katsuki to wherever he was leading him. The sky was slowly turning an orangish color, casting soft, warm light across the school grounds. Izuku could pick out singular strands of backlit grass as the plants fluttered in the slight breeze, and the colors and lights were mesmerizing. He got caught up in it, not noticing where he was until Katsuki's footsteps stopped ahead of him and he found himself on top of a grassy hilltop behind the gyms. In front of them, the hill dropped off into a steeper decline, and Izuku could look out over a small forest tucked into the busy city. Looking up, above the city, was a breathtaking, clear view of the sky. Sit, Katsuki ordered, tugging on the sleeve of Izuku's hoodie again. Izuku complied, not looking away from the stunning mix of colors in front of him. The glowing circle of white light that was the sun dipped slightly under the tree-lined horizon, surrounded by a watercolor painting of oranges, reds, and pinks. The sky above melted from deep blue to a soft purple, dripping into cotton candy clouds that were illuminated from below with the dazzling oranges and reds Izuku couldn't help but attribute to Katsuki. He doesn't know how long he sat there, entranced by the picture before him, but he eventually realized the sun had sunk well over halfway under the trees. His cheeks felt wet and cold, and he reached up to rub the unexpected tears away with his palms. He sniffled, laughing a bit at his own easy crying, then turned to see how Katsuki was enjoying the view. To his surprise, Katsuki was watching him, not the sunset. Izuku met his eyes, his crimson-soaked eyes that were a sunset unto themselves. Izuku found himself just as enamored by Katsuki's eyes as he was with the sun-seeped world around them. But something heavy weighed on his chest, not letting him fully take in the second sun in front of him. Katsuki was someone to him. His mother was someone to him. All Might was someone to him. Hiroraka, and Tsuyu, and Shinso, and Todoroki, and Ida were all someone to him. Awry, his classmates, his teachers, but he didn't know what. His puzzle was still unfinished, and every time he tried to work on it, it was like grasping for straws that weren't even there. The wind picked up a bit, biting at his wet cheeks as the tears started again. Katsuki's eyes widened, but before he could say anything, Izuku reached out to grab his hoodie and yanked them towards each other, burying his face in Katsuki's chest. After a moment, Katsuki's arms wrapped around his back, hugging him back as the tears streamed silently down Izuku's cheeks. This feeling wasn't anything like the fear he'd gotten so used to. Fear and anxiety were fast, jumpy, electric, and shocking. They made him jittery and tense. This was being slowly crushed. It was all-consuming, heavy, grave. He'd lost something he couldn't even name, and he mourned for it. A few more moments passed before he mustered up the strength to pull away from Katsuki's chest and look him in his sunset eyes. When he finally spoke, the words felt jumbled on his tongue and far too heavy, but he shoved them out anyway. What if I never remember? The look in Katsuki's eyes tells Izuku everything he needs to know. It's the same grief in his own chest reflected back at him. Izuku feels his heart drop and the crushing weight becomes somehow heavier. He was hurting other people. He was hurting Katsuki, and there wasn't anything he could do about it. But then, the look in the ruby red changes. Instead of sorrow, there is quiet determination as Katsuki breathes in deeply, softly, in the silent evening. Then I guess we'll have to stick around to make some new effing memories, Izuku. Even better ones. Katsuki words are like pickaxes against the heavy stone of his sadness, and the light that seeps through the cracks they make. He can't stop the torrent of new tears now, and he doesn't try. Then I guess we'll have to make some new effing memories, Izuku. Even better ones. As soon as he said it, it's like Deku shattered. He was practically sobbing now, grass-green eyes blurred with thick tears. The determination hardened in Katsuki's chest, and he pulled Deku into another hug. If Deku didn't ever remember, it would undoubtedly break him. But broken things could be fixed, and Katsuki was never one to give up when shit got tough. Whatever happened to him didn't matter as long as Izuku was still here. He would be able to put himself back together, if only to keep having Izuku by his side. What was that All Might said? Only if you lift each other up can you hope to become true heroes. He would hold out his hand, just like Deku had done all those years ago, and he would lift Deku out of whatever past he'd forgotten and help him make some bright effing future Katsuki hoped he could be a part of. God damn it, Katsuki was so effing weak for midoriya Izuku, and he'd be effing strong for him, too. They stayed like that, kneeling in the grass with Deku wrapped in Katsuki's arms, until the sun had set fully and darkness settled over the city. At some point, Deku shifted in his hold and pulled away, and Katsuki let him. The night made Deku look somehow brighter in comparison. Soft, ethereal moonlight surrounded him, like he was the source. Watching Deku watch the sunset made him realize that Deku looked like an angel. Maybe he was one. It would make more sense than a normal human being somehow being this, making him feel this. Katsuki sighed quietly, laying back in the grass to stare up at the sky. He couldn't see very many stars, thanks to stupid light pollution. But he took it in anyways. He reached beside him to tug on Deku's sleeve, wanting him to lay back, too. Deku complied, resting his head in the grass next to Katsuki's, slightly diagonal. It felt so much like childhood it physically hurt. Being with Deku hurt, but he wouldn't give up the pain for the world. Effing weak beach he was. How could being around Deku feel like the hardest and the easiest thing in the world at the same time? Katsuki find himself starting to count the scattered stars he can see, imagining they're Deku's freckles. His freckles are the stars, and his eyes are the lush plants, and his hair is the forest, and everything about him is some miracle from Mother Nature herself. Even his scars, Katsuki thinks, are the world's most beautiful canyons and ravines and mountain ranges. He'd been pushing away whatever this was for months now. Maybe years, but right then, lying next to Deku with nothing but the dark navy sky to keep their company. He can't stop it. He has to stop it, though. He can't follow that train of thought to its destination. He's not ready to break yet. Not while he still has some semblance of hope, even a tiny flicker in a hailstorm. Any foothold he had, no matter how thin. He had accepted the possibility that he could fall, and made peace with how it would be if he did, but that didn't mean he was effing jumping. So while his body and heart screamed out for him to reach over and interlace his fingers with Deku's and let himself think, let himself feel, he crushes the screams and kicks them to the back of his brain, then forces himself to stand. He swallows thickly, praying he won't sound hoarse before reaching out a hand in invitation to Deku and telling him, come on, extras will get worried about you or some shit. They could have been out there for hours for all he knew. Deku grabbed his hand and let Katsuki pull him to his feet, but when he let go, neither of them moved. Katsuki, if you apologize right now, Deku, I swear to God, Katsuki threatens quietly. Deku lets out a wet laugh and wipes tears from his cheeks. I was going to say thank you. Katsuki swallowed the lump in his throat. He didn't deserve Deku's gratitude, or anything about him, really. But that just meant he'd have to work for it like he did everything else. He'd been working for it. Fine, he managed. Let's get going. Deku fell into step easily beside him. Katsuki wondered when he'd moved from being always behind to always beside. They were quiet until they rounded a corner and saw the dorms up ahead. I can't decide. Katsuki glanced to the side. Deku looked pensive. What, sunsets or sunrises? Katsuki turned back ahead of them, musing over that for a second. Why not both? I like that. Katsuki could hear the smile in Deku's voice. But that didn't stop his heart from fluttering when he saw it. He immediately felt just a bit lighter. Deku was smiling again. They reached the top of the steps and Katsuki pulled open the doors, only to be immediately assaulted by way too much yelling from way too many people. Okay, so maybe they'd been gone for a bit too long without telling anyone. But for FS sake, was this really a necessary reaction? From what he could see, every single classmate was up and waiting for them. There were so many people talking at once that all he could hear were a couple shouts of Bakugo, midoriya, Deku, and worried. Deku pressed into his side, his shoulders inching up to his ears, obviously overwhelmed. F these a-holes. Hey, he shouted at the top of his lungs, glaring. Shut the F up. We're fine. Finally, they quieted down and Uraraka marched out in front like she was leader of the Deku Protection Squad. For all he effing knew, she could be. Where did you go? It was one of the few times he heard Uraraka sound actually pissed off. Outside, Katsuki snapped. Chill. Wait, no. He had to be nicer here. He did just drag Deku off to who knows where after he'd gone missing for 3 months. We didn't leave campus or anything. We were safe. Sorry, Deku said quietly. I wanted to see the sunset. Uraraka's gaze shifted over to him, and the anger melted off her face. Katsuki felt slightly offended, but he understood. It's okay, Deku, she said. You just worried us. Deku shrugged. I had Katsuki. Something swells in Katsuki's chest again. Deku has him. Yeah, Deku has him. Whatever that effing meant. Uraraka purses her lips, glancing between them. Katsuki can practically hear her thoughts. Why him? I ask myself that same effing question. Round face, he shot back in his head. Okay but just tell someone next time. Katsuki wants to lash out at her. Yell that they don't need effing babysitting and how dare she think he'd ever let anything happen to Deku again, but he clenches his fists and bites his tongue. Not the time. Okay, we will, Deku answers for them both. Sorry, he sounds so weary. And when Katsuki looks over at him, he's barely keeping his eyes open. Oh, hell no, Deku was not falling asleep on his feet again. Are you seriously about to fall asleep again after sleeping the entire day? Deku yawned slowly. Yes. Katsuki rolled his eyes and tugged on Deku's sleeve again, the sleeve of his own hoodie that Deku is wearing, pulling him towards the elevator behind their classmate. Come on, I'm not carrying you to bed for the 4th effing time. Boo, Deku murmured, stumbling a bit as their classmates parted to allow them through. Katsuki wished they'd all stop effing staring. As soon as they got into Katsuki's room, Deku kicked off his slippers and collapsed face down on the bed. Katsuki yanked on his ankle. Nope, not yet, Deku. Deku groaned into the pillow, so Katsuki grabbed his other ankle and started pulling him off the bed. He yelped and tried to flip over and Katsuki let him go. He sat up on the bed, pouting at him. Why? He moaned. Katsuki pushed him off the bed all the way, then pulled the blanket back. There. He didn't want to have to maneuver Deku's dumb heavy body under the comforter again. In an instant, Deku dove back into the bed and curled up on his side. Katsuki's heart squeezed in his chest. This hurt. And Katsuki had to be some kind of masochist, because he slipped under the blanket next to Deku. He hardly had it in him to care that he'd been wearing the same clothes since yesterday. Emotions were effing exhausting. How did Deku do this every day? He could tell by Deku's slow breaths that he'd fallen asleep almost immediately. His freckled cheek was squished against the pillow, lips parted slightly, with dark green hair falling over his eyes. He looked peaceful. Katsuki felt tears start to brim, but he squeezed his eyes shut to keep them inside. No crying. He could effing do this. Pull yourself together, Katsuki. He needed to. Then next week passed without anything interesting or new, which is both relief and a curse. Nothing was changing with Deku. He didn't even have another sand moment. There was just nothing. At least he seemed happy enough. Katsuki even heard him mumbling sometimes in class, a sound he would have never guessed he'd find comforting and calming instead of annoying. Deku was muttering right now, twiddling a pen cap between his fingers as he scribbled more notes out in the new notebook Katsuki had found for him. Katsuki had no idea what he wrote in it, except for the fact that he'd taped the loose sheet of paper he'd used for puzzle pieces onto the front page. The school day had ended a few minutes ago, and most of their classmates had all filtered out by now, but Aizawa-sensei had asked Deku and Katsuki to stay after. Finally, the last classmate stopped talking to Aizawa-sensei and left, and Katsuki's teacher made his way over to them. Katsuki nudged Deku with his elbow to make him pay attention. Deku squeaked quietly and dropped the pen cap, then grabbed it again and clicked it onto his pen, shutting the notebook and looking up. His curls bounced with the movement and his eyes were wide with innocent questioning, a tiny, hapless smile playing across his lips. Katsuki wanted to blow something up or bang his head into the desk. Thanks for staying. You too, Aizawa-sensei said, a blessed distraction. I need to discuss something very important with you, about Midoriya's condition. It's what Katsuki had been expecting. He was growing impatient. What about it? He snapped. Well, as you might know, we've been trying to find out if Yuri's quirk could be any help. But there are a few problems. Deku's legs started bouncing nervously under the table, and Katsuki resisted the urge to reach out and put a hand on his thigh. The first major one, Aizawa-sensei continued, is that we don't know exactly why you lost your memory. It could have been brain damage in a fight, or it could have been a quirk. Deku said quietly. Would Yuri-chan be able to reverse the effects of a quirk? As of right now, we don't know. Possibly not. Deku's shoulders slumped at the same time Katsuki's heart dropped. But Aizawa-sensei cut in. It all depends on how the quirk works. Every quirk has a scientific explanation. They're mutations, not magic. Wait, Deku said, looking up with wider eyes. So if it was a memory loss quirk, there's a possibility it worked by changing something physically about my brain, as in the way I store memories. Then it would be the same situation either way. Of course, Deku was this quick about it. Katsuki could practically see the gears turning in his head as he slipped into muttering. That would mean Eri-chan could possibly reverse whatever physical changes happened in my brain. But changing the structure of my brain again would risk me losing more memories or wiping the past few months altogether. He stopped, looking up at Aizawa-sensei and tilting his head. Aizawa-sensei, has Eri-chan used her quirk on a person before? Quite a few times. And did it do anything to their memories? No. Deku huffed and leaned back in the chair, pressing his knuckles against his mouth as he scrunched up his face and thought. Okay, that could be good or bad for me. On one hand, it wouldn't erase any memories, but does that mean she could give them back in the first place? Eri-chan's quirk is to rewind a body back to its original state. And your brain is a part of your body, so it should work. But people form new connections in their brain all the time, so wouldn't the quirk break those? Unless it has some special targeting ability. This was sounding less and less likely with the more things the nerd said. Has Eri-chan ever been able to use her quirk on one specific part of someone's body before? Deku asked, suddenly at normal speaking volume again. Aizawa-sensei was quiet for a moment. Yes, actually. Deku smiled, and Katsuki's heart jumped. That might mean she'd been targeting parts of people's bodies this whole time, leaving their brains alone. And that meant it could work in reverse, just focusing on Deku's mind. How so? Hisashi dropped a wine bottle on his foot and broke a few toes. Katsuki stifled a snort at the sudden shift in topic and the image of present Mike dropping the bottle, probably yelling so loud he shook whatever building he was in. Katsuki could tell Aizawa-sensei was equally amused at the memory, and Eri insisted on healing them for him. She ended up being able to fix them one at a time. Deku broke into a grin, but Katsuki beat him to the punch. That means she's been targeting everything but someone's brain by accident this whole effing time. Which means she can target Deku's brain and fix it. Yes, Deku chirped happily. Katsuki was effing elated. The tiny ledge of hope was a little bit bigger now. He could stand on it instead of balance precariously. But then, Deku's face fell. That seems like a lot of pressure to put on a child, though. Aizawa-sensei stared down at them. Eri's a good kid. She'd do anything to help you after what you've done for her. She's also one of the strongest kids I've ever met. I think she can handle at least trying, as long as she knows it might not work. Man, Aizawa was one proud father. For good reason. Right, it's all just theory. Oh, yeah. Katsuki's heart dropped again, elation falling away. It was still just hope, in the end, out of his control. But Katsuki couldn't spend time focusing on shit that was out of his control. He'd just have to tuck that hope carefully into the back of his mind. And at least knowing it was there could keep him going through all this stupid effing hurt. So, do we have to test things now? Deku asked. I've been helping Eri with her quirk training for a while now. I'm sure Hisashi and I can figure something out. You two shouldn't worry yourselves about it too much. What? Don't worry ourselves, Katsuki repeated, voice rising with pent-up feelings that were coming out as anger. He slammed his fists down on the table and stood, sending his chair screeching back. Don't worry ourselves. That's all I've been effing doing the past weeks, and now you're saying I should just sit back and effing chill, right when something could change. Let someone else handle this. This was effing Deku they were talking about. Like hell was he leaving that out of his hands if he could help it. But Aizawa-sensei was glaring him down, a faint red glint in his dark eyes. Katsuki huffed violently at him, meeting the glare with his own. He refused to do nothing. A hand wrapped around his forearm, tugging a bit. Katsuki, it's okay. No, it's not effing. The rest of his denial dies on his lips as he whirls around to face Deku's soft, weary green eyes. It's all just possibilities, right? He said, voice wavering slightly in a way that made Katsuki's heart twinge. So, for now, we focus on the new stuff. Katsuki messed up. He was supposed to be the one encouraging Deku to move forward, to not hold on to what they've lost but shit, he just thought they, like the lost memories, were his, too. This wasn't effing about him. He had to stop making this shit about himself. He huffed again and slumped back into his chair, crossing his arms over his chest after Deku let go of him. He clenched his jaw and kept glaring at Aizawa-sensei. Any other shit we need to know? No, you may go. Thank you, sir, Deku said, then effing bowed as he stood up. How can he not be pissed about this? Shit, no. Focus, Katsuki. On him, not you. You are stronger than some effing emotions and shit. He took a deep breath and followed Deku out of the school, heading for the teacher dorms to talk to his mom like every day. Eri wasn't there, probably out with Mirio. The guy had graduated last year and still found enough time to hang out with his sister. Yuri seemed to have that way with people. Katsuki hated kids, but he had to admit she'd wormed her way into even his black heart. Every time they went to talk with Auntie and Co., Katsuki found himself sitting off to the side as Deku rambled on and on about every little effing thing. Inko would just listen to him, smiling brightly at her son the whole time and rambling just as much when she got the chance. Katsuki often wondered if Deku had gotten any traits from his shitty dad, because he was pretty much a copy-paste of his mom in terms of mannerisms and even looks. The only things Katsuki could find were the freckles and the curly hair, and that was the kind of shit he thought about now. Goddamn Deku and his effing mannerisms. What was happening to him? Izuku was completely overwhelmed. There was a chance he could get his memories back. A real, tangible chance. And what in the world was he supposed to think about that? Happy. He was finally going to stop feeling like he was hurting everyone around him. He could finally have a finished puzzle. He would have answers to all his questions. He should be happy. He should be elated. But what if it didn't work? What if he was someone he didn't want to be? What if his past self hated who he'd become? What if he'd changed too much? Was he even the person who had those memories anymore? He felt like he was thinking about two different people. One was himself, fed up and scared and broken, and the other was whatever person people like Katsuki and Uraraka were friends with. Some guy who earned the love of someone like Inko or Iri. Some guy who probably wasn't scared of his quirk or felt like he couldn't breathe at the sight of a knife. Some different guy that everyone wanted him to be, and would expect him to be if he got the memories back. What if he couldn't be that person? What if he couldn't be Midoriya Izuku? What if? The uncertainty was crushing him, suffocating him, and he needed to find an out, a break from it all. He needed some kind of distraction before he collapsed in on himself. So, of course, he went to Katsuki. Katsuki, he asked as they walked from the teachers' dorms to the students. Yeah, what do you what do you do when your brain won't shut up about things you don't want to think about? Katsuki glanced over at him, red eyes showing just barely through his blonde bangs. He looked like he was thinking about it carefully. Try and distract myself. Why? Izuku sighed, then tapped his temple. My brain is trying to suffocate me. Want to talk about it? That's what. Katsuki trails off, then looks back at the path below them. People always say to do. Izuku didn't answer. He doesn't want to talk about it. But maybe he does. Or maybe he should. There was just too much going on in his head he couldn't think straight. Suddenly, Katsuki's footsteps stop and he turns to see that Katsuki is standing still, watching him. He stops walking too. Katsuki pursed his lips, looking down at his shoes then back up to Izuku's eyes. Someone who's really good at this stuff has told me that you shouldn't bottle shit up. Because if you do it eventually all comes bursting out in you. Katsuki looked back down at the ground, voice heavy with a meaning Izuku didn't understand. You end up doing things you might regret. Katsuki sounded like he was speaking from experience. Maybe talking would empty his brain out or something. But to Katsuki, what was he supposed to say? He feels a hand on his shoulder and realizes that Katsuki had closed the distance between them, and also that he was crying. He looked up to meet Katsuki's red sunset eyes, full of concern and warmth, and the dam comes crashing down. I feel like I should be happy about this, but I'm just so scared, Katsuki. I'm scared because what if it doesn't work? And worse, what if it does? And he cut himself off with a choked sob, thick tears running down his face and dripping onto his shirt. And I'm not him anymore. What if I'm not this this person that everyone is trying to bring back and I'm still just me? Because whoever he is, this guy you all want me to be, he's he's someone that made all of you like him, so he has to be something and I'm nothing. Can these you're not nothing. What? Izuku sniffled and tried to wipe tears from his eyes, and Katsuki was staring at him with such intensity his breath caught in his throat. You're not nothing, Katsuki repeated, and whoever you are him. But Izuku doesn't know what to say to that. Do you think I'm waiting for you to turn back into some perfect person? Some effer who gets everything right all the time? Hell no. I'm not even waiting for you to turn back into someone else. Katsuki takes a step closer to Izuku, sunset eyes overwhelming him. The only thing I want is for you to be happy, Izuku. Whatever that means. Even if it means you don't want those memories back. I already told you, we can make better things in the future. Katsuki's eyes are full of a heavy, indescribable feeling. No version of you ever was or ever will be nothing. Izuku, you're the furthest from nothing a person can get. It was everything Izuku wasn't expecting to hear, but everything he needed to. The tug in his heart was warm in his chest and his tears were hot on his face, and he was suddenly wrapped up in sturdy arms. For the millionth time, he buried his face in Katsuki's chest and sobbed. I love you, Kaken. Name, love, the name, the name, a name, sand, the sand is gone again. What did he think? He forgot again. He can't handle this anymore. He dug his fingers into Katsuki's back, like maybe if he's close enough the words will come back to him. The memories will return. Like maybe he won't be so lost. Katsuki wants him to be happy. He doesn't know how. The only thing he knows is that whatever happy may be, it'll be with Katsuki by his side. Izuku doesn't know much, but he knows that. Don't go, he whispered into Katsuki's chest, barely audible even to himself. I won't. I promise. I'm always effing good on my promises. Izuku sniffled, tried to swallow his tears, pulling away and looking up at Katsuki. There were tears brimming in his crimson eyes, a few dripping onto his cheeks. He hadn't seen Katsuki cry before, no matter how many times he himself did. The sight made his heart twist. I'm sorry. Katsuki glared at him. Stop it. Stop effing saying that. He sounded angry. At Izuku. The hell are you even apologizing for? Making you cry, not being strong enough, forgetting, hurting you. The list goes on and on. Everything. You're an idiot. You know that. A effing idiot. Katsuki pulled him closer, leaning down and pressing his forehead into Izuku's shoulder. You have nothing to be sorry for, so stop effing saying it. Izuku swallowed back more thick tears, his breath shaky and catching in his throat. Katsuki's hair tickled his cheek and he leaned into it, smiling despite everything. The smell of Katsuki mixed with the cool early evening air washed over him. It would be okay. Katsuki would stay, so he should at least try. I'll do it. Katsuki straightened up. Do what? Izuku gave him a small smile. If Ifuri-chan can help me, I'll let her. I'll try. You want that? Because I want to, Izuku assured him. He wanted to know who these people were to him. He wanted to stop being afraid of them. He wanted the puzzle to be fixed and the sand to be held, and he wanted it all so much it scared him. But it didn't matter that it scared him, because Katsuki was here, smiling at him. No matter what happens, I've got you, right? Yeah, nerd, you've got me. The look Katsuki gave him warmed him from the inside out, and he couldn't stop himself from moving closer. Then it can't get too bad. A few days later, Izuku, Katsuki, and Uraraka were called into teachers long after school. When they arrived, All Might, Aizawa, Present Mike, and Midnight were waiting for them. Young Midoriya, young Bakugo, young Uraraka, thank you for joining us, All Might said, sounding wearier than usual. Yes, thank you, said Aizawa's scarf loudly. And suddenly a white mouse popped out of it. Izuku's heart rate shot up as he screeched, activating his quirk and tensing for a fight. Some random creature was here. A stranger. He was hiding. Why had he been hiding? Was this an attack? Did the Deku? A heavy hand landed on his shoulder and squeezed tightly, Katsuki's attempt at grounding him. Izuku relaxed slightly but didn't take his eyes off the mouse man. Oh dear, the mouse man said. Apologies for frightening you, Midoriya. Deku, that's Principal Nenzu, Uraraka said softly. Izuku was not calmed. I don't know who the hell that is. I told you not to do that, Aizawa told Nenzu, frowning. Apologies, again, was all the mouse man responded with. Izuku shuffled closer to Katsuki's side, eyeing Nenzu warily. Katsuki squeezed his shoulder again. Nenzu's the principal at UA, and he loves to make a effing entrance, for some reason. Izuku's heart was still racing. He had about as much reason to trust this mouse man than he had not to, and he was sticking on the safe side. Katsuki came in front of him, forcing Izuku to look into his eyes. Hey, Deku, chill. He's safe. I trust him. I promise. Now turn the quirk off. Izuku's muscles relaxed, the rush of his quirk and panic dissipating like Katsuki's voice and words were cool water washing over him. He exhaled softly. It was fine. He was fine. Katsuki and Uraraka were fine. No threats. Okay. Katsuki nodded at him then moved back to his side. Izuku caught Uraraka shoot him a nervous glance and tried for a smile back at her. He'd been becoming more comfortable around Uraraka. She'd been given many opportunities to hurt him and never took them. And she always went out of her way to be kind. Out of all the other classmates to be here with him now, he was glad it was her. I'm sorry for the scare, students, Nenzu said, drawing Izuku's attention away from his friends and back to the matter at hand. Nenzu hopped off Aizawa's shoulder down onto the coffee table, and Izuku quickly shifted away from him, not wanting to get too close. Nenzu stopped and backed up, and Izuku relaxed again. Why are we here? Katsuki snapped. Not one for patience. All in due time, Bakugo. Please, sit, Nenzu offered, putting a paw out towards the couch behind them. The three teenagers sat, Izuku in between Uraraka and Katsuki. He felt safer flanked by the people he trusted. I'm sure you've already guessed why we've called you here. You three were the students on that mission, and Midoriya has been inside the Silver Fangs hideout. The what? Izuku asked, confused. Who are the Silver Fangs? The aholes who captured you, Katsuki growled before a teacher could answer. The Silver Fangs, Izuku repeated. That's a dumb name. Katsuki snorted and Uraraka let out a tiny giggle. The sounds made Izuku smile and relax even more. He shrugged. I mean, it applies because of their leader, but still, Silver Fangs doesn't exactly make me cower in fear. Dumb name for some dumb villains, I guess. His friends laughed again, and Izuku thought he caught a tiny smile from Aizawa. Whatever the case with the name, Nenzu said, we need whatever information you students can give. Especially you, Midoriya. We understand if you need time, but they could have run by now. Izuku finished, sitting up straighter in his seat. This was fine. He could do this. He could be helpful. Okay. He stood from the couch, waving a hand at Katsuki to let him know he could stay, then went to his backpack by the door to grab his notebook and pen. He sat back down, opening the notebook and flicking through the messy pages until he found the ones he was searching for. He spread the notebook flat on the coffee table. I've been trying to write everything I remember before I forget, but it's difficult. He took a shaky breath, remembering the amount of pages he'd ripped out of the book and thrown away after covering his words in dark, angry scribbles. I was unconscious or barely conscious most of the time I was there outside of 3 rooms. I've tried to draw a map, but it's pretty shitty. What I can tell you a lot about is the villains themselves. He turned to his friends. How many were on the mission thing? How many did we fight? Uraraka asked. Izuku nodded, and Katsuki and Uraraka shot each other a look. I think there were about 6. Izuku ran back through the list of villains in his head. I can remember about 20 that really did anything, as well as a few henchmen or something here and there. I have the most information on the main 5. Any information is helpful, Netsu said, looking between him and the notebook. Izuku nodded and turned the notebook to a different page with an extremely messy, dark sketch of a shadowy figure on one side. Looking at it again, it creeped him out quite a bit. Not more than the real person did, though. This, he said, tapping his pen on the drawing, is Venom. I call her that because of her quirk, which, from what I gathered, is some sort of venomous liquid that she has in her nails. He reached up to rub his still bandaged bicep, feeling the ghost of claws ripping into his skin and shivering. Crap, he had to focus. He looked back at his notes. It means she's not good at long-distance attacks, because she has to get close to scratch you. Avoiding her is best, but hits to her legs and head are good too, as long as you get out of there fast. Overwhelming her with repeated, quick attacks got me to last the longest. He almost got Venom once, before the villains cheated and sent another in to help her. Her nails are very sharp, and her venom might be deadly. They didn't exactly let me die, so I never found out. But it definitely hurts like hell, and it'll knock you out right away if she gets deep enough. Not deep enough, and I've lasted a minute or 2. He glared at the drawing. Her claws did seem to get caught in my clothes a bit, though, so maybe a thick fabric could offer protection. He looked up at the teachers. That good? Yes, but... All Might trailed off, then sat down on the opposite couch. What do you mean they didn't let you die? Ah, Izuku said, flipping to a different page. This one only had drawing of hands and horns, not a full person. They had a healer I called Red Horns. His hands and horns glow red when he uses his quirk, and he was able to heal my wounds enough for me to survive whatever happened that day. I'd say he's pretty powerful, but I have no idea how he fights or if he does at all. No weaknesses, either. I only saw him when I was half dead or focused on something else. Something else being overwhelming fear of what was coming next. He tried to swallow the knot in his throat. So, I don't have a lot on him. That's okay, Midoriya, Present Mike said, smiling at him. Who are the other 3? Katsuki asked, leaning forward to get a closer look at Izuku's notebook. Izuku turned to a new page with a cloaked man drawn on the side. Ah, him. Yup, Izuku said, staring down at the drawing. Drunkard, constantly drunk and or high and mumbling about violence. His quirk is some kind of gas he releases from his body at almost all times. If you breathe it and you start giggling uncontrollably and your mind gets foggy and weird. Hard to think, hard to move. Then you pass out. Kind of like laughing gas, Uraraka mused. Izuku nodded. He hadn't thought of that comparison, but it was pretty accurate. Or like my quirk, Midnight said, frowning. I guess. Izuku looked down at the rest of his notes. Drunkard isn't too hard of an opponent once you get close to him, though. Hold your breath through the gas as long as you can and take him down in a hand-to-hand fight. I think he's always high on his own gas as a quirk side effect, so he's not a good fighter at all. Very slow and a terrible aim. The only challenge is holding your breath that long. Izuku had almost managed to beat Drunkard once, but then he passed out from lack of oxygen, not the quirk. Though, if you come prepared with gas masks, you should be all good. I remember him, Uraraka said. His gas doesn't go that far, does it? No, it doesn't, Izuku agreed. It mostly pools around him, though it will spread slowly. The further it gets from him, the thinner and closer to the ground it is. It's possible he could create some kind of fog to block out vision, but I don't think he's that powerful. He can be. Izuku turned to give Katsuki a questioning look. What? Katsuki huffed aggressively, glaring down at the paper. That's ... that's how they effing got you. Uraraka and I were busy with other villains. But you were obviously a target, out of nowhere. This a hole creates a wall of white smoke shit, and you got shoved through it. I looked away for 1 second and you were effing ... gone. Uraraka continued. We tried to find you, but they retreated really fast as soon as you disappeared. We were pretty beat up already, so I should have effing done something, Katsuki said, slumping forwards and raking his hands through his hair. Should have followed them. Bakugo, you were bleeding out. Uraraka had tears in her eyes and Izuku's heart twisted. You were what? He choked out, looking over to his friend. Katsuki was bleeding out. Katsuki had nearly died. He hadn't been there. I still should have done something. Katsuki snapped, sitting up. You were dying. What could you have done? Izuku felt like he was going to pass out. Katsuki was dying. Anything, Katsuki yelled, standing from the couch and glaring down at Uraraka. I could have effing helped him. That's enough. Aizawa snapped, stepping forward. Bakugo, sit down. You were dying. The words were like knives in his heart. It didn't matter. It was. It matters to me. Izuku yelled back, standing up to face Katsuki, tears bubbling out. You're the idiot here if you think that wouldn't matter. Students, please calm down. Nedzu's plea went ignored as Katsuki and Izuku stood, glaring at each other. Izuku was in shock. How could Katsuki think that wouldn't matter? Without Katsuki, where would he be? He'd be lost, scared, and broken still. Katsuki's voice cracked with heavy emotion. I'm the one who's supposed to protect you. And how are you planning to do that if you're dead? Katsuki stepped closer to him, opening his mouth to speak. I'm so sorry, Kaken. I quote him sorry, I quote him sorry, I quote him sorry, I quote him. He felt like his skull was being split in two. There was a voice screaming something. Words, name, screaming. What did he think? What did it say? Only when his vision returned did Izuku realize he'd blacked out and fallen to the ground. He was panting heavily, his heart pounding in his chest and head screaming in pain. He'd lost the sand again. But it had never hurt like that before. Shit, he breathed, collapsing over himself and pressing his forehead into the coffee table. Deku, what the hell was that? Katsuki said, laying a hand on his back. Sand, was all he could manage to say. That seemed worse than some effing sand. Yes, I don't know. Another slice of pain shot through his head, making him wince and groan. Hurts. He felt around the table until his hand closed around his pen, then forced himself to sit up and pull his notebook close. He'd been trying to track the sand moments that he could remember and see if there were any common factors. He flipped to the page where he'd been writing them down and wrote, sand moment with pain, new thing, feeling angry and sad, talking with Katsuki. Almost every sand moment he'd recorded had something to do with strong emotions. Fear, anger, and sadness seemed to be the top three. His head hurt too much to make any sense of it now, though, so he closed the notebook and slumped back into the couch, still sitting on the floor. Uraraka and Katsuki sat next to him. Are you all right, Deku? Uraraka asked quietly. Izuku nodded, leaning into Katsuki's side and letting the familiar warmth calm him further. He tilted his head up to meet the crimson eyes. I'm glad you're not dead, he said, his voice scratchy. Please stay that way. As long as you do. Izuku breathed a tiny laugh, resting his head on Katsuki's shoulder. Deal, Katsuki repeated. Izuku sat up a bit to look at Uraraka. You too. Uraraka gave him a tiny smile. Deal, Deku. Izuku exhaled, returning fully to his calm. His friends would be okay. He would protect them, and they would protect him. He sat up all the way, flicking through the pages of his notebooks to get to the villains again. Young Midoriya, we don't have to continue. Izuku glared up at All Might. Those aholes nearly killed Katsuki. We're continuing. He was going to tear those villains to shreds. All Might looked at him for a second, then nodded. He was doing this. For the next hour or so, Izuku read over every bit of information he had on the villains and their hideout, Katsuki and Uraraka cutting in every once in a while to add their input. Izuku didn't know where the warehouses were because he blacked out during his escape, but he described it to them the best he could, and the teachers said they had some ideas of where it could be. We'll have to send out a few scouting missions before launching an actual attack. But this information will no doubt be extremely helpful, Nedzu said when he finally read through all his notes. Thank you, students. Yes, thank you, All Might echoed. You may return to your dorms now. Wait, what? Uraraka said. Katsuki snapped. Go back to the dorms. You gonna call us back tomorrow or something? Izuku caught Aizawa and All Might give each other a sideways glance before Aizawa said, a few teachers or pros can do the scouting. We'll keep you updated. Katsuki glared at the teachers. Great, he deadpanned, obviously just as suspicious as Izuku and Uraraka. Were the teachers not going to let them help with this? Izuku had gone through 3 months of torture thanks to these villains. He wasn't going to just sit by and do nothing while other people took them down. He'd dealt with them before. He could deal with them again better than anyone. The 3 teenagers left to return to their dorm, reluctance obvious on their faces and the silence that fell between them as they walked across campus. Izuku could tell Katsuki was mad, as his jaw was clenched and he was glaring at the path. Uraraka just seemed nervous. Izuku couldn't stop thinking Katsuki almost died, Katsuki almost died, Katsuki almost died. And with no one talking to keep his mind off of it, the words slowly dissolved into images. Images of Katsuki dying, and him not being there. Uraraka dying, his mother dying. Awry, his classmates, and then Katsuki again and again and again. And he still wasn't there. He left them. He forgot them. They could have died and he couldn't save them. He didn't save them. Deku. He doesn't know which friend said it, but it makes him jolt and realize he was hyperventilating. His heart was beating against his ribcage like it was trying to escape. He tried to swallow, but his mouth was completely dry. A heavy hand squeezed his shoulder, and he stopped walking, his two friends stopping beside him. He brought his own hand onto Katsuki's on his shoulder, squeezing his eyes shut and letting the contact point ground him. Katsuki wasn't dead. He was right here. Suddenly, Izuku snapped his eyes open and shot a hand out towards Uraraka, obviously surprising her. She slowly held her own hand up, allowing him to take it and squeeze it in his own. She was alive, too. Are you okay, Deku? Uraraka asked softly, and Izuku looked up to find she seemed on the verge of tears. Yeah, Izuku sniffled, trying to hold back his own tears. I'm glad you're both here, even though I wasn't. Uraraka stared at him for a second, looking sad, and Katsuki did the same. Finally, Uraraka said, we feel the same about you. They were both crying now, and Izuku heard Katsuki huff and slide his hand off Izuku's shoulder. Got him crybabies, he mumbled, but he still wrapped an arm around their shoulders and pulled them in for an almost hug. This is new, Uraraka whispered after a moment. Shut up, Katsuki growled quietly. Izuku stifled a tiny giggle, wiping his tears with his hand and pulling away. Katsuki quickly let the both of them go and shove his hands deep into his pockets, not meeting their eyes. Wait, no, I like the Bakugo hug, Uraraka teased, a smile starting on her face. Izuku giggled again, feeling lighter than he had before. F off, Katsuki snapped. It's just because of Deku. Because of Deku, Uraraka echoed, raising an eyebrow and smiling wider. Izuku felt himself start to blush and even Katsuki looked a tiny bit flustered. Whu, it's not. Whatever, Katsuki spluttered, glaring. See if I ever be nice to you again, round face. Uraraka started laughing. And Izuku was laughing too, and Katsuki was glaring at them, and Izuku was able to forget all about everything for a second and just focus on this wonderful moment, in the spirit of teasing. And also because he wanted to, he grabbed Katsuki's hand and interlaced their fingers like he'd done a few times before. Katsuki jolted and looked down at their hands, then back up at Izuku with a huff, but didn't make him let go. I miss this, Izuku said, then blinked in surprise at the words. Damn it. He shook his head like maybe the thought would come back, but of course came up empty. Of all the times. That was ... crap. Uraraka had stopped laughing, and Katsuki was looking at him with concern. No, he wasn't doing this right now. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes and letting himself smile again. I don't know why I said that, but there's no point in missing it if I have it right here, he tried, squeezing Katsuki's hand in his own. When he opened his eyes again, Katsuki was smiling at him with his small, soft smile and sunset eyes. So, Uraraka said slowly, does that mean Bakugo can hold my hand too? Katsuki snapped his eyes up to glare at her menacingly as Izuku felt his cheeks warm and the giggles start up again. In your effing dreams, hamster cheeks, Katsuki snapped, then started to drag Izuku down the path again. A week passed, and Izuku didn't hear a word from the teachers about further moves on the Silver Fangs. His suspicions were confirmed on Saturday evening when, upon entering the teachers' dorms to visit his mother, Aizawa-sensei and Present Mike were in their hero costumes and heading out. Katsuki stepped in front of them, blocking their way to the door. Aizawa gave him an intimidating glare, but Katsuki just met it with equal ferocity. Where are you going? He growled. Yeah, Izuku said, stepping up beside Katsuki. Hey now, listeners, Present Mike said. No need to be like that. We're just going out on patrol. It's our job, after all. You're going to the Silver Fang's hideout, aren't you? Katsuki snapped. You found it. Look, kids, Present Mike started. Yes, Aizawa-sensei interrupted. Izuku stood straighter. What? He squeaked. And if any students do something stupid like try to tag along, Aizawa-sensei said, low and threatening, they will be expelled immediately. No exceptions. What? Katsuki and Izuku yelled at the same time, though Katsuki was much louder. You've got to be effing kiddi. You have to take us with you. Those effers. I'm the one. He's the one that got captured by them in the first place. You can't. Enough. Present Mike yelled, so loudly it made Izuku and Katsuki slap their hands over their ears and cringe in pain. You are not coming with, Aizawa-sensei growled, and that's final. Get out of here before I expel you right now. Izuku felt like he was going to cry or freak out at any second because people were going back there and he couldn't protect them, but he could feel Katsuki fuming with rage next to him and didn't want him to be expelled. So he just shut his mouth and grabbed Katsuki's arm, pulling him out of the way as he glowered at the teachers. The second the door shut behind the pro-heroes, Izuku's tears started to fall. This is such bullshit. Those, Deku. Izuku sniffled and wiped his tears aggressively, forcing himself to stand straighter. People were going into that place, and he had no control over what happened to them. He couldn't protect anyone. And, if he were being honest with himself, a tiny part of him, a dark, angry part, wanted some semblance of personal justice for what he'd gone through. He wanted to be there. He wanted to help. But he couldn't. Let's just go talk to my mom, he managed. What? Katsuki said. Deku, there. Aizawa-sensei said he'd expel us. Katsuki. There's nothing we can do. Are you kidding me? Katsuki almost yells. You can't seriously be letting them do this without us. It's not like I want to. Izuku shouted back. You think I want to let people get hurt for my sake? You think I don't want justice too? We can't. Yes, we can. Not if you want to be a hero, Katsuki. They were standing inches apart now, glaring at each other as tears ran down Izuku's cheeks. The teachers will handle it, he said, as much to himself as to Katsuki. They'll be okay. I can handle it too. Katsuki snapped. I never said you couldn't. Izuku yelled, voice wet with tears. He could feel all the anger and sadness and helplessness crashing into him and overwhelming everything. So he reached out and grabbed his one lifeline, pulling Katsuki closer and resting his forehead on a broad shoulder. I just want to move on from them, he whispered, hiccuping on another near sob. I want that future you promised, Katsuki. At least, if they're gone, I can have a chance at that. He wanted to forget. And he wanted to remember. He just wanted it all to be different. After a moment, he felt Katsuki soften and wrap his arms around Izuku's back. Okay, thank you, Izuku whispered. An hour or two later, they left the teachers' dorms to return back to their rooms. Izuku liked these walks, the stretches of time where it was just him and Katsuki and the evening sky above. It was some of the few times he felt truly peaceful. No fear, no anxiety, no sadness, just the cool fresh air, a soft warmth in his chest, and Katsuki by his side. It was trivial and simple and beautiful all at the same time. The silence that had fallen between them was almost heavy, but it was comfortable. Izuku tried to quell his worries about his teachers and by focusing on one thing at a time. The sound of their footsteps, almost exactly in sync but not quite. The way Katsuki's hair ruffled in the slight breeze. Their arms brushing together because they were standing so close. The faint scraping noise in the distance. Wait, no. Izuku's heart rate rocketed as his stomach dropped and eyes shot wide. That noise. That was her. It had to be her. No. He quickly grabbed Katsuki's arm and yanked him off the path and behind a tree, shoving both of them up against the trunk and clamping his hand over Katsuki's mouth to stop him from yelling. He could taste bile rising in his throat. His breathing was quick and short. The scraping noise got louder. It was her. It had to be her. It couldn't be her. Not here. She couldn't be here. He was supposed to be safe here. Katsuki was supposed to be safe here. Katsuki grabbed Izuku's hand and yanked it off his mouth, glaring. What are you doing? He hissed. Izuku's eyes went wider with fear and he shook his head aggressively. Don't talk. Don't say anything. Don't move. She was here. She was coming. She found you, Brett. Before Izuku could register anything but the smooth, sharp voice, Katsuki's hand was on his chest and he was pushed to the side and to the ground. He heard a yell, then an explosion and Katsuki was blasting forward towards the woman and no. Izuku tried to move, but suddenly there was a flash of silver and blade embedded itself in the tree bark next to him. Shit, another yell. And Katsuki had propelled himself into the air to avoid the tangled mess of sharp metal shooting towards him from the woman. He was dodging in the air, but there were too many knives from too many directions for him to do anything but avoid. Izuku felt like his body was trying to escape his own skin. He had to move. He had to help. He had to. A scream. Katsuki's scream. Blood. Red knives. Through the silver, a sharp grin and empty eyes. Katsuki screaming. More screeches of metal on metal, descending onto him. Katsuki. No, not him. Kicchan. Izuku had never felt anything like this before. A pure, unbridled fear and rage and power. Everything moved in flashes. Black whips wrapping around the body, getting it away, anywhere but here. Screams. A burning in his chest. Cutting into him. Grabbing the blades, shattering them, shattering him. Dodge. Kick. Break. Deflect. Above. Opening. Pain. And then nothing. For the first time in weeks, Katsuki woke up alone. No warmth next to him. No subtle breathing to match with his own. No sun creeping in through cracks in curtains to illuminate soft green hair. Instead, he got a stiff pillow, way too bright, way too artificial lights above him, and a strange chill at the absence of someone hugged to his side. And then the tsunami wave of memories crashed into him and sent his confusion careening into all-out panic. Where was Deku? The last thing he remembered was a blade slicing through his arm, Deku screaming something, and then black whip wrapped around him and sent him flying halfway across the campus. He'd blacked out the second he hit the ground. That effing idiot. What was he thinking? For the second time in his life, Katsuki forced himself upright in a hospital bed, wincing with pain, then scrambling out of it to go yell at Deku for being so stupid. He threw Katsuki out of the fight. He threw him out of the fight. What the F? Ignoring the intense ache through his whole body and screaming pain in his arm, Katsuki moved for the door to his room, only to be yanked back by something tied around his wrist. The hell? He turned around to find that he was tied to his hospital bed. By who? He had no idea, but they were an idiot, because he could easily use his quirk to burn the restraint, which he promptly did. If Deku wasn't already dead, Katsuki was going to kill him. And, he thought again, if he is dead, he'll kill him anyways. He ripped open the heavy door, ignoring the flare of pain and stomping out into the hallway, his bare feet slapping against the cold tile. I don't think he's awake yet, but Aizawa Kirishima cut himself off with an eep as Katsuki caught him coming around the corner and grabbed him by the collar of his shirt. Perfect timing, shitty hair. Where is he? Katsuki snapped. He didn't even bother to mention who he was talking about. They knew. Kirishima smiled at him. Becca bro, where is he? Katsuki growled, gripping Kirishima's shirt tighter in his fist, brushing off the pain the movement caused. Mina appeared beside Kirishima. Bakugo, I think you should tell me where he effing is or I am running to every room in this hospital until I bleed out or find him, Katsuki threatened. He could already feel his skin becoming wet under the bandages. He's in 301, down the hall, Kirishima relented. He'd barely finished the sentence before Katsuki released him and took off towards the room. He was intent on not being stopped this time, shoving a shocked nurse out of his way before entering 301 and slamming the door shut behind him. For the 100th effing time, he was faced with Deku in a hospital bed, surrounded by beeping machines and covered in bandages, because Katsuki had failed, and because Deku was an idiot. But this time, thankfully, was one of the times where Deku groaned and shifted in the bed, squeezing his eyes shut tighter. Not in a coma. Good. Deku, Katsuki yelled. Deku's eyes shot open and he jolted up on the bed before wincing in pain and collapsing back into the pillows. There was a large bandage over one of his cheeks. What in the hell were you thinking, dumbass? Katsuki screamed, stomping up to the edge of the bed as Deku stared at him with wide green eyes. You're lucky you're not dead for doing that, though I might just kill you myself cause. Katsuki froze. His yells died in his throat. What? Deku's green eyes were brimmed with tears and he slowly sat up partway. Kaken, he said again, a shaky breath. All of Katsuki's anger had been forgotten. Are you? He started, then swallowed thickly. Is this ... what do you know? If this was sand, he might just break right then and there. I know that you're Kaken, Deku said quietly, almost smiling. You're amazing and special and talented and you've been my hero since we were kids. The spark of hope was a bonfire now, burning bright in Katsuki's chest. Each soft word was kindling to the flame. I know that you know all my secrets and now I know them too, Deku continued, smiling wider. I know that your favorite food is spicy curry and mine is katsudon. I know we both love All Might and I know we're a team and I know you're my rival and I know. Katsuki cut off the rest of Deku's rambled list by leaning down and pressing their lips together in a gentle kiss. Because Izuku was here. Izuku remembered. And Katsuki couldn't hold the feeling inside him anymore. The dam broke and the train pulled into the station and Katsuki didn't even try to stop himself from reaching the conclusion he'd known for a long time. Do you have any effing idea what it's like to love you? He whispered after he pulled away, looking up to meet Deku's emerald eyes as they fluttered open. He reached up to brush a tear off Deku's cheek with his thumb. Their faces so close he could feel warm exhales on his lips. You threw me out of the effing fight. How are we supposed to have each other's backs if you do that shit? I didn't mean to, Deku murmured, his eyes locked on Katsuki's. Katsuki scoffed quietly, more a breath than anything. Idiot. Deku smiled softly. That's me. Katsuki couldn't help his own tiny smile as he reached out to gently push Deku to the side of the bed. Move, he mumbled, climbing in beside him, then wrapping an aching arm around Deku's waist to pull him down. Deku responded by curling into Katsuki's side, pressing his cold nose against Katsuki's cheek. I love you too, Kaken. Katsuki fell back into deep sleep, smiling. This time, when Katsuki woke up, it was to the familiar warmth and the sound of people conversing quietly beside him. It was still far too bright, and every muscle in his body was tired and aching, so he refused to open his eyes and instead groaned and turned his head away from the light. This ended up burying his nose in Deku's hair, which made him smile despite himself. It smelled faintly of green apple shampoo. Katsuki, a voice said, is Mom. He ignored her. Are you awake? Another, gentler voice said, Auntie and Co. Katsuki grumbled and nodded slightly to answer her, turning over all the way to cuddle further into Deku. Gross. Cuddling. He was too tired not to, though. He heard Auntie and Co. chuckle quietly and murmur, I don't think he wants to move. He did not. But suddenly, he felt Deku shift beside him and the warmth was taken away as Deku yelped and shot upright. Katsuki startled, shooting upright beside him and pressing Deku back down. Don't effing do that. He snapped, glaring. But Deku wasn't looking at him. Mom, oh, Auntie and Co. came around to Deku's side of the bed. tears in her eyes. Izuku. Katsuki kept his hand on Deku's chest to keep him laying back. You can't sit up, dummy. Here, Auntie said, leaning down to hug Deku. Katsuki pulled his hand away to let Deku hug her back. A hand ruffled his hair, and he turned his head to glare at his mother as she smiled. Hey there, brat. Hag, he shot back. Glad you're okay. You had me worried. Katsuki just huffed. Where's Dad? Am I not enough for you? His mother said, frowning. Katsuki glared harder, and she rolled her eyes. He's getting coffee from the cafeteria. Katsuki glanced to his side to find Deku and Auntie and Co holding each other, both crying and having a quiet conversation he did his best not to listen to. Not his business. For the moment, he was content to feel Deku's leg pressed against his under the hospital blankets, allowing the warmth to seep in and through his body from his chest. Yeah, he was in love with Deku. The full realization hadn't been as earth-shattering as he would have expected. He knew he'd die for Deku already, and he almost had. Loving him was a natural explanation. What was more surprising was that Deku loved him back. He shifted his hand on the bed, bringing it closer to Deku's so he could link their pinkies together. He swore on everything that he'd worked to deserve that love. Auntie and Co leaned down to kiss Deku's forehead, then stood up again, smiling and wiping the tears from her eyes. Deku moved his hand so it was under Katsuki's. Their fingers slotted together. Katsuki's chest went warmer, and then Auntie and Co glanced down at their hands and his cheeks warmed too. He was holding hands with Deku in front of his mom, and his own mom. I'm sure you boys are hungry, Auntie and Co said, looking back up and moving around the bed towards the door. Mitsuki and I can go get some food. Katsuki's mother frowned at her friend. Then her eyes widened slightly. Oh, yes, we'll be back soon. The two mothers left quickly and Katsuki suppressed an eye roll. That was hardly a sneaky exit, but he was grateful anyways. Hey, Kaken, Deku murmured, looking up at Katsuki through his long lashes and smiling softly. Katsuki's heart fluttered in his chest. Hey, he breathed. Did you mean it? Deku said, still quiet, like if either of them raised their voices above a murmur it would break this weird spell. Mean what? That you love me? Katsuki almost laughed, moving his hands to the sides of Deku's head to cage him between his arms. Yeah, did you? Yeah, Deku whispered, looking up at Katsuki with his leaf-green eyes. The warmth exploded in Katsuki's chest and he flipped himself over all the way on the bed so he could lean down and kiss Deku again. Deku's lips were chapped but soft and his calloused hands were light and gentle on the back of Katsuki's neck and in his hair. Every slight touch felt like sparkling electricity. He kissed Deku like it was the very air he breathed. He didn't know how he could want anything more than this. Eventually, he was forced to pull away by the human body's need for real oxygen and the pain in his arm from holding himself up. He rolled over and dropped to his side on the bed, still pressed as close to Deku as he could get. Deku shifted slightly to his side and tilted his head to meet Katsuki's eyes. I've decided, Deku murmured with a smile so soft and intimate Katsuki's chest ached. On what? Sunsets or sunrises? Katsuki had no idea why he'd bring this up now, but he raised his eyebrows in a question so Deku would keep talking. Neither, Deku said, reaching over to cup Katsuki's cheek in his scarred palm. I prefer you. Katsuki's heart felt like melted butter, and he couldn't help a laugh in the back of his throat. Lame. Deku narrowed his eyes, still smiling. But you're so much prettier. I can do better, Katsuki said. Deku raised an eyebrow and turned all the way on his side, wincing slightly at the movement before settling. Though, Katsuki grabbed Deku's hand off his cheek and interlaced their fingers, clearing his throat quietly. God, this was going to be so mushy and gross. But it was Deku, so he just let himself think out loud. I may be prettier than the sun, he started, electing to ignore Deku's tiny giggle, but you are the sun. And all the other stars, too. You're the forests, and all those pretty plants that grow in the wild, and all those colorful flowers old people grow in their garden. He wondered what his 14-year-old self would think if could see this. Katsuki laying in a hospital bed, waxing poetic about how much he loved Deku. Didn't matter, his 14-year-old self was in a hole. Deku deserved this. Your scars, Katsuki continued softly, running his thumb over the thin scars on Deku's hand that he was holding, are the mountain ranges and canyons. And all your crybaby tears, he added, noting that Deku had started crying again, are the rivers. You're the entire world. He cleared his throat again, willing himself not to cry too. And a whole lot more. And you better remember that because I ain't saying it again. Deku let out a tiny, wet laugh and closed the short distance between them, bringing their lips together again. He tasted like salt and tears. You're right, Deku said as he pulled away. My thing was pretty lame compared to that. Huh. Deku giggled softly. Guess I'll just have to come up with something better. You can try. Katsuki smirked, but it probably looked more like a wobbly smile. But I'll just beat you again. He had better source material. No way. I'll knock your socks off. Katsuki snorted a laugh. I'm not wearing socks. Well, go put him on so I can knock them off, Deku said, giggling more. Dork. Sap. How dare you? Deku laughed again, making Katsuki's heart flutter. Before he could come up with another retort, though, there was a knock on the door and it cracked open. He narrowed his eyes and glanced behind him, then back at Deku. "This isn't over," he whispered, making Deku smile wider and snicker. "Cute." He forced himself to sit up and turn towards the door. "What?" he snapped. The door swung open all the way to reveal a disgruntled Aizawa-sensei with his left arm in a cast and present Mike with his hair in a messy bun, both in civilian clothes. The teachers stepped inside and closed the door behind them. "Well," Aizawa-sensei said with the tone that let Katsuki know he'd be crossing his arms if one wasn't broken. "I don't know why I expected any different from you two." Katsuki glared at him. "We didn't follow you, if that's what you're thinking," he growled. "I know you didn't," Aizawa-sensei sighed wearily. "And I also wanted to apologize for that." "Me as well," present Mike said, making Katsuki blink in surprise. Then, as another shock, both teachers bowed their heads. "What the F?" He glanced back at Deku, who looked just as confused. Thankfully, the bowing didn't last long, and the teachers straightened up. "We allowed the villain to escape us, and it nearly cost you two your lives," Aizawa-sensei continued somberly. "I failed you as a teacher and as a hero." "Please don't say that," Deku said, shifting upright slowly on the bed. Katsuki moved to place his hand on Deku's back as a support. "Everything turned out okay in the end," Deku said, smiling over at Katsuki before turning back to the teachers. "I've recently learned from someone very smart and amazing that dwelling on the past does very little good for our futures." Katsuki scoffed quietly under his breath and rolled his eyes. "I'm pretty sure that smart and amazing person also told you to stop moving around so much." "Stupid." "I feel fine." Deku pouted. "You should listen to Bakugo," Aizawa-sensei said. "What kind of timeline was this? It was only thanks to the combination of Recovery Girl and Iri's quirks that you aren't in a coma right now, midoriya." "Iri-chan?" Deku asked, eyes widening. "Is that why I can remember again?" Aizawa-sensei blinked at him. "You can remember." Deku beamed and nodded. "Yep." Both teachers smiled. "She did it," present Mike said, wrapping an arm around Aizawa-sensei's shoulder. "She did," Aizawa-sensei repeated. "It's good to have you back, problem child." Somehow all in one piece. "What happened to the villains?" Katsuki asked. "The pros were able to capture all but their leader, a woman by the name of Kishimogen," Aizawa-sensei answered. "Sharp lady," Deku murmured at the same time Katsuki thought it. "F her. By the time I managed to follow her and track her down, she had already made it to the school and inside the grounds. I only caught the end of whatever fight you two were in with her." "Midoriya here," Aizawa-sensei said, looking at Deku with an unreadable expression, "used his quirk to get to her and knocked her out. I didn't quite see how, but when I got to them, both were unconscious. Kishimogen is in custody now." "What about Kaken?" "I found him," present Mike said, "a few 100 feet away from the fight, also unconscious." Katsuki turned to glare at Deku, who shrunk back sheepishly. "That was his fault. Dumbass threw me. I said it was an accident." Deku protested. Katsuki huffed at him. "Nerd was lucky he was in love with him or else he'd be toast." "However it happened," said Aizawa-sensei. "I'm just glad you both are safe. Though I wish you would stop running around hospitals while injured, Bakugo." Katsuki turned back to his teacher, narrowing his eyes. "So you tried to tie me to the bed," he snapped, holding up his wrist that still had the singed restraint wrapped around it. Aizawa-sensei's flat expression didn't change. "That was Recovery Girl's idea." Deku snickered. "They tied you to your bed." "They effing tried," Katsuki said, turning back to see Deku smiling. Deku reached up to fiddle with the end of the restraint, giggling again. "Nice bracelet, Kaken. Did you burn it off just to come yell at me?" Among other things, Deku's cheeks went pink, and Katsuki really wished their teachers would go away. Of course, because the universe had already given him far too many blessings today, it decided to not give a shit about what he wanted and send his mother, father, and Auntie and Co back into the room. "Oh," Auntie and Co said, smiling. "Mr. Aizawa, Mr. Yamada. Good to see you again." "You too, Ms. Midoriya." All the adults started chatting and Katsuki groaned, wrapping his arms around Deku and pulling them both back into the bed. Deku giggled and he grumbled in response, putting a hand over his face. Deku shifted in his hold, turning on his side so they're face to face again, and Katsuki could hear his small hiss of pain. "Stop moving so much," he whispered. His hand was on Deku's non-bandaged cheek now, and he couldn't help but slide it up to comb his fingers through the curly green hair. "But I want to look at you," Deku whispered back. He could still hear the parents and teachers talking behind them, but being so close to Deku, he didn't care. He felt like they were back to kids again, having whispered conversations under tables at dinner parties where they thought the adults couldn't see them. "Besides," Deku continued, "you're one to talk, Mr. Running through a hospital while injured." I'm fine, Deku echoed. "No, you're not. No, you're not," Deku shot back. "Effing nerd," Katsuki grumbled. "Effing nerd," Deku repeated, lowering his voice in a mock version of Katsuki's. Katsuki narrowed his eyes at him, huffing. "I'm breaking up with you. We're not even dating," Deku whispered, leaning in closer, almost conspiratorially. I'm just in love with you. Katsuki's heart fluttered in his chest and he couldn't help a small smile. Fine, then, he whispered back, so close to Deku now their noses were almost touching. Go on a date with me so I can break up with you after. Bold of you to assume you'd be able to leave me after a date, Deku said quietly, smirking. I'll make you fall madly in love with me back. Too late, Katsuki huffed, his face warm. He could tell Deku was grinning just from the way his emerald eyes sparkled. Kaken, he whispered, and Katsuki loved how he said that word, like it was the most important word in the world. Katsuki was so close to just forgetting about their parents and their teachers and kissing Deku right then and there, but was brought out of his peaceful little world by the cheesy sound of a phone camera. Oh, shoot, he heard his mother say under her breath, thought I was unsilent. Katsuki shot up and whirled around to glare at his mother. What the F? His mother ignored him completely, instead smiling down at her phone and holding it out to show Auntie and Co. and his dad. Aizawa-sensei and present Mike must have already left. Look how cute they are, she cooed. Did you take a effing picture? Katsuki yelled. Can you send it to me? Deku chirped from the bed. Katsuki glared down at him instead. Don't encourage her. Come on, Katsuki, his mother said, grinning in a way he hated. Look. She held her phone out to him, and he reluctantly snatched it out of her hands. The photo was slightly blurry, and obviously taken by someone trying not be noticed. But Katsuki had to admit, it made his chest warm to look at, seeing Deku's soft expression under his hand, the two of them close on the bed. He could barely see his own face, but he could tell he was smiling. Let me see, Deku said, making grabby hands. At least he wasn't sitting up. Katsuki handed him the phone, and Deku beamed at it. Oh, Kaken. Katsuki felt his cheeks heat. Shut up, Deku giggled, handing the phone back to him so he could give it back to his stupid grinning mother. His mom took her phone back, then ruffled his hair. We brought you some food, lover boy. The hell did you just call me? Katsuki snapped, his face even warmer. Before he could even think about lover boy, his father pulled him into a hug. Hey, Katsuki. Katsuki grumbled under his breath but patted his dad on the back before he pulled away. Hi, Dad. The parents gave them a tray of food they both ate off of, comfortably hip to hip on the bed. Katsuki's leg over Deku's under the blanket. He's pretty sure his mother took more pictures. Whatever. Katsuki spent the rest of the day with Deku, reading the books his dad brought them, talking, or kissing whenever they were alone. A nurse came in a few times to check on them or change bandages, having obviously given up on getting Katsuki back to his own room. Some point in the afternoon, the nurse came in with a card that had been signed by all of their classmates and even a few teachers, along with little notes wishing them well. Katsuki thought it was silly, but it made Deku cry. Of course, Katsuki thought he could be content like this forever, just being with Deku in every sense of the word. He really was the whole world. They got their first visitor the next day. Eri came in holding her dad's hand and gripping a small plush bunny with floppy ears to her chest. Deku immediately broke into a sunny smile when he saw her. Eri-chan. Eri looked up at him, seeming nervous. Izunai. Daddy says you remember now. Is that true? Yes, Eri-chan, I remember now. Thanks to you. Eri's red eyes went wide. Really? You saved me, Eri-chan, Deku said softly, with a smile that made Katsuki's heart warm. In a flash on motion, Eri let go of Aizawa-sensei's hand and clambered up onto the hospital bed, stepping on Katsuki as she scrambled over to wrap her small arms around Deku's neck. Deku moved to hug her back, but suddenly Eri let him go and stepped back, staring at him. She started, I want you to prove it. Okay, Deku said, I remember that bunny. Eri's eyes widened again and she hugged the stuffed rabbit closer to her chest. I gave that to you at your very first birthday party. His name is Deku Jr. Katsuki bit back a laugh as Eri shot towards Deku again and slammed him against the pillows with another hug. Deku Jr. Izunai, she cried. After a moment, Eri pulled away from the hug, holding the rabbit up and pressing it against Deku's nose. Deku Jr. missed you. Deku snickered quietly, the stuffed bunny on his face muffling his words. I missed you too, Jr. Katsuki felt like he was melting from how cute this was. Deku was right, he was such a sap. And you? Katsuki startled a bit, realizing that the little girl had taken the rabbit off Deku's face and was now holding it out towards him, staring at him with an expression that might have been her trying to glare. It was more of an angry pout. I heard my daddy tell my papa that you and Izunai maybe finally worked out feelings, Eri continued, crinkling up her nose and narrowing her eyes at him. He had no idea what he was supposed to do here, or why the Aizawa-sensei would say something like that. And I know from TV that means you love him, right? Katsuki's eyes went wide as Eri leaned in closer towards him and shoved the bunny into his face. Aizawa-sensei was still in the room, but he felt like he was being threatened by this child and he didn't want to lie to her. Nor did he ever want to lie about this. Yeah, HMPHF, Eri said, crossing her arms like a mini version of her father. Oh my god, you better be nice to him and love him a whole lot. Or else, Eri-chan, Deku squeaked. It was all Katsuki could do not to burst out laughing. Yes, ma'am, he managed. He glanced over at Aizawa-sensei to find his teacher looking thoroughly amused. Oh, F him. Yuri HMPHF again. Then held out Deku Jr. and used its paw to pat Katsuki's forehead a few times. Good. Katsuki was literally holding his breath to keep the laughter in now. Yuri, Aizawa-sensei said, let's go get your stuff from the hall, then you can come spend more time with Midoriya and Bakugo. Okay, Yuri said brightly, beaming as her father lifted her off the bed and outside. The second the door closed, Katsuki burst into loud, uncontrollable laughter, doubling over and falling into Deku, who was also giggling. Oh my god, Katsuki practically squealed, sucking in a breath before dissolving into another bout of laughter. I was just given the shovel talk by a 7-year-old. That was the cutest thing ever, Deku giggled. Easy for you to say, Katsuki said, bringing his face close to Deku's. You weren't being threatened by Deku Jr. Deku giggled again and Katsuki leaned in to kiss him, smiling at the sound. You heard her, Kaken, Deku said when he pulled away. You have to be nice to me. And love you a whole lot, Katsuki continued. Or else, Deku finished, raising his eyebrows and smushing their noses together. He was too cute. Katsuki couldn't help but kiss him again quickly before Eri and Aizawa-sensei came back in. They spent the next few hours with Eri, drawing and listening to her talk about anything and everything that was of interest to her as Aizawa-sensei worked on his computer off to the side. She rambled almost as much as Deku did. By the end of it, Katsuki knew way too much about some TV show with magic cats and found out that apparently Mirio-senpai and Tamaki-senpai were dating. Eri was a very perceptive little girl, though not very good at keeping secrets. Eri gave them a present before she left, a drawing she'd made with the crayons they'd brought. It showed 2 figures, one with spiky yellow hair and angry eyebrows, one with scribbled curls of green hair and a big smile. They were holding hands with a big pink heart above their heads. Deku started crying the moment Eri and Aizawa-sensei left. Does this mean I passed the little sister test? Katsuki asked, smirking down at the drawing. I'm gonna frame it. Deku blubbered through tears, pressing the paper into his chest. Dork, Katsuki scoffed, leaning over to kiss his cheek, just above the bandage. This is the most precious gift I've ever been given, Deku cried, holding the drawing out in front of him again. There's a heart. A heart, Kaken. Oh my god, Deku. And they're holding hands, Deku said, tilting his head and sniffling. Katsuki can't handle this anymore. How about they do this now, he said, plucking the drawing out of Deku's hands and sliding it onto the table behind him before maneuvering on top of Deku and pulling him into another kiss. Stupid adorable nerd. Their second visitor came the next day. Deku had asked to see Uraraka the second. Aizawa-sensei said he was allowed a visitor. In all honesty, a small part of Katsuki wanted to see her too. She'd been a part of all this, just like he had, but she hadn't gotten Deku's trust. He couldn't imagine what that would have felt like. The soft knock on the door sent Deku shooting upright and almost starting to clamber out of the bed, so Katsuki grabbed him and pulled him back down. Deku, chill. He got out of the bed, stretching out his aching legs and moving to open the door, knowing it was very likely that Uraraka would jump into bed with Deku and not wanting to be squished next to them. He swung the door open and leaned on it, sweeping a hand out behind him over dramatically. Come on in, floaty, he grumbled as Uraraka smiled up at him and stepped inside. He closed the door and turned to lean his back against it and watch. Deku's eyes were wide and teary, per usual. Achako, Deku. As expected, Deku opened his arms for a hug and Uraraka climbed onto the bed to comply. Katsuki knew both of them were crying immediately and tuned out their conversation, slumping into a seat by the side table. The drawing was still there. Seeing it again made him smile. Little sister approved. F yeah. He wondered if Deku was actually going to frame it. He wouldn't be surprised. He looked up to find Uraraka and Deku sitting on the bed talking quietly. He should give them a minute alone. He could deal without Deku for a few minutes, for FS sake. He stood from his chair and tapped Deku on the shoulder. Hey, I'm gonna go get some food, be back in a bit. Deku smiled, and, to his surprise, leaned in to press a quick kiss to his lips. Well, okay, then. Alright, Kaken. Katsuki's didn't miss Uraraka's wide brown eyes or slowly growing smile as he left. Yeah, he was not sticking around for that. Izuku's heart was full to bursting. Kaken loved him. Kaken kissed him, and teased him, and hugged him, and loved him. And he could remember everything. He was blessed beyond belief. But now, his best friend was sitting on the bed across from him, smiling with questioning wide eyes, and he knew he had some explaining to do. He hadn't totally meant to kiss Kaken in front of Achako. It just happened before he could stop himself. He felt his cheeks grow very warm. He started, clearing his throat nervously. Deku, Achako said, wiggling her eyebrows, you just kissed Bakugo. Since when does that happen? 2 or 3 days ago. Spill, Achako ordered, pulling herself closer across the bed and crossing her legs. He felt his heart warm, glad to have his best friend back and acting so normal. Well, we got we got attacked and fought off this villain. Ochako nodded, signaling she'd heard of the fight, and I freaked out and used my quirk to throw Kaken out of the fight. Yeah, he said, noticing Ochako's shocked and nervous expression. He did not like that. So then he came into this room after I woke up and started yelling at me. He trailed off, smiling. When he woke up and saw Kaken standing at the edge of his bed and yelling at for being stupid, he couldn't name the feeling in his chest. But he knew instantly that his puzzle pieces were all in place again. He knew the name. Everything felt right again. Eri-chan had healed me before then, so I remembered him. I don't think he expected me to. And then Izuku felt his cheeks flush and brought his hands up to his face, smiling wider. He kissed me and said he loved me and that I was an idiot for throwing him. Ochako snorted. He said he loved you, then called you an idiot. Yeah, Izuku sighed, almost dreamily. That's very Bakugo, Ochako said with a chuckle. He's actually super mushy, Izuku whispered, thinking of all the beautiful things Kaken said about him, feeling his heart melt again. But don't tell him I told you that. Ochako smiled and mimed zipping her mouth closed. Your secret's safe with me, Deku. And Bakugo's secret too, I guess. Izuku smiled back at her, then giggled. Eri-chan visited yesterday, and she somehow figured out what was going on, so guess what she did? What? Izuku giggled again. She she said Kaken had to be nice to me and love me a lot or else. She actually said, or else. Ochako laughed with him. And what did Bakugo do? He said, yes ma'am, then started laughing really hard the second she left. Izuku couldn't believe this was all real. Saying these events out loud made it feel less like a dream. After the hell he'd been through, he'd come out to something better than heaven. He'd come out to home, to Kaken, and Eri and Ochako and mom and auntie and uncle and everyone. Even Deku Jr. Yes ma'am, Ochako repeated, grinning. Who knew Bakugo could be so respectful? It worked, Izuku said, leaning past her to grab the paper from the side table. Look what she drew for us. He showed Ochako the drawing, and she gasped and put her hands over her mouth. Oh my gosh, that is the cutest thing I've ever seen. I know, Izuku said, feeling the tears well up again. I love it. He carefully placed the paper back on the table, then turned to smile at his friend. But anyways, enough about Kaken. I've missed you. Uraraka smiled softly, sighing. I've missed you too, Deku. A lot. I'm sorry for not trusting you, Ochako, he said quietly. I promise I tried. Oh, Deku, Ochako said, leaning in to hug him. It wasn't your fault at all. And I know you were trying. And I'm sorry I couldn't help you more on that mission, he whispered, hugging his friend tighter. His memories of the fight were still hazy, but they were heavy with guilt and fear. Thank you for saving Kaken. I'm sorry I couldn't save you too. You don't need to be, Ochako. Ochako sniffled. I'm so glad you're okay. I wish I could have been there to help you. Well, I'm glad you didn't get hurt. Ochako pulled out of the hug, patting his knee and smiling again. It's all behind us now, though. How's your healing going? Izuku shrugged. Pretty good. It definitely doesn't hurt as much as it did a few days ago, but Kaken still yells at me when I move too much cause I'm not supposed to. I'm siding with Bakugo on that one. You and everyone else, Izuku grumbled with a smile. How's Tsuyu, and Ada and Todoroki, and Shinzo, and well, everyone. They're good. We were all really worried about you. Tell them thank you for the card, Izuku said, glancing over at the card propped up on the side table next to the drawing. It was a cheesy card someone probably bought from the grocery store, with a cartoony All Might head on the front that said I am here to wish you well. Izuku thought it was adorable. Kaken thought it was hilariously stupid. The inside was covered in little notes and doodles from their classmates. He wanted to keep it forever. I'll be sure to pass that on. He and Ochako talked for a little while longer, mostly about the things his friends had been up to. After a bit, Kaken came back, tossing a pack of matcha from the vending machine onto the bed with hardly a word. Before he could sit in the chair, Izuku grabbed the end of the restraint he hadn't gotten off his wrist and pulled him into the bed. No need to yank me around, nerd, Kaken grumbled, climbing into the bed and crossing his legs like Ochako before laying an arm around Izuku's shoulders. Ochako smiled at him, making a point to look at the arm, and Kaken glared as Izuku blushed. What's with the bracelet? Recovery girl tried to effing tie me to the bed. Kaken answered, guess they thought it would stop me from leaving. Ochako laughed. You came right in here, didn't you? Stupid effing bracelet can't stop me, Kaken grumbled. Ochako laughed again and Izuku leaned over to press his head against Kaken's, breathing in the familiar smell of soap and burnt sugar. You know, Ochako said, looking between the two of them, the class is gonna flip when they hear about this. I'm pretty sure a few people have a betting pool going. A effing what? Kaken yelled, sitting up straighter. Betting pool on what? Izuku asked, frowning. On when and if you two were gonna finally get your shit together. What? Kaken yelled again. Who? I'll effing kill them. I still have no idea what you're talking about. Izuku whined. They had one more day in the hospital, and one more person came to visit, All Might. Izuku's mentor looked wearier than usual, but he smiled when he came in. young Midoriya, young Bakugo. I'm glad to see you both in good health. Kaken just glanced over at All Might and grunted in acknowledgement, but Izuku immediately put his arms out and motioned for All Might to come around the bed. He hugged his mentor tightly, smiling at the familiar feeling. I missed you, All Might, he said when they pulled away from the hug. I missed you too, young Midoriya. All Might took a seat at a chair next to the bed. Izuku smiled at him, leaning into Kaken's warmth at his side. But there was something he'd been thinking about for a while that he wanted to get off his chest before he could put this whole thing behind him. So ... the silver fangs. He started, making both Kaken and All Might sit up a little straighter. They took me for my quirk, didn't they? All Might nodded slowly, pursing his lips. I've listened in on some of the interrogations. Apparently, they noticed the similarities between your quirk and mine which ... well, they're the same, of course. Then, somehow, they got a hold of records that labeled you as quirkless. Izuku's ear fluttered with panic, and he felt Kaken's hand over his own, a warm comfort. But, All Might continued, thankfully for us, the conclusion they came to was that you were some sort of powerful Namu, like those that the League used to have. They thought someone had made a copy of my power and given it to you, and wanted to know how. Effin' idiots, Kaken grumbled. Izuku laughed under his breath. So, we're okay, Izuku said. All Might nodded again. Yes, young Midoriya, we're okay. You two are shitty at keeping secrets. Izuku laughed a little louder and rested his head on Kaken's shoulder. Good thing we have you to help, Kaken. I have better things to do than cover your asses, Kaken snapped without venom. Izuku even felt him press a kiss to the top of his head. His heart fluttered and warmed, and then he remembered All Might was still there. He shifted his head, still resting on Kaken's shoulder, to look at All Might, and found his mentor squinting at them with a tiny frown. He almost looked confused. Izuku started, clearing his throat nervously. Kaken snaked an arm around his waist, and Izuku's eyes went wider and he flushed pink. All Might's confused look turned to a raised eyebrow and a smile. Is it too far for me to assume the nature of your relationship has changed, young Midoriya and young Bakugo? Kaken snorted as Izuku squeaked quietly and flushed brighter. There's been some improvements, Kaken said, almost nonchalant, but Izuku could hear a smirk in his voice. And you're both happy about this, All Might said, tilting his head. Izuku couldn't help a soft smile. Very. Hell yeah, Kaken mumbled, making Izuku giggle. All Might smiled back at him. And my congratulations. They were released from the hospital on a Friday evening, and given permission from the teachers to spend the weekend at home. Izuku in partial bed rest and Kaken just resting in general. Their mothers came to the hospital to drive them home in one car, and Izuku curled up against Kaken in the back seat. It was a relatively long drive. Kaken was so warm, and Izuku was so tired he was half asleep by the time the gentle rumbling off the car shut off and he realized they'd pulled up in front of Kaken's house. He groaned slightly and tried to sit up, only to be stopped by Kaken's arm around his waist. He turned to find Kaken with his head against the window, also peacefully asleep. Kaken, he murmured, poking him lightly in the cheek, wake up. Kaken crinkled up his nose and curled his lip in a slight snarl, making Izuku's heart squeeze. He poked his cheek again, and Kaken opened his crimson eyes to give him a side glare. Kaken, we're at your house. Kaken sat up slightly, his arm still looped around Izuku's waist, and glanced out the window. Ugh, come on, brat, Auntie Mitsuki said, getting out of the car. You can see your boyfriend later. Izuku felt himself blush at boyfriend, but Kaken didn't react to that, instead glaring at his mother and opening his car door. His arm slid off Izuku's waist as he got out, and Izuku moved to get out after him without thinking. The evening air outside was cool and soft on his skin, and the sun-seeped sky left a feeling in his chest he couldn't quite name. It was something like a sad nostalgia, a bittersweet memory the sunset left him with, but still happy because it was all so much better than he could have hoped now. He smiled at the sun that was dipping under the horizon, then ducked back into the car to talk to his mother. Hey, Mom, can you wait for a minute? What for? I want to watch the sunset with Kaken. His mother smiled at him. Okay, honey, just don't go too far. Thanks, Mom. I won't be too long. Izuku ducked back out the car and went to grab Kaken's hand before he started towards his house, pulling off to the side path he remembered from when they were kids. Deku, where the hell are we going? Kaken asked, squeezing his hand and coming up beside Izuku. Sunset, Izuku answered, swinging their interlocked hands back and forth a bit. They reached the end of the side path, coming out behind Kaken's house into a small grassy clearing. The view of the sunset wasn't the same as up on the hill at school, but, Izuku thought, looking to Kaken beside him, it was still pretty breathtaking. He sat down on the grass, pulling Kaken down beside him. He was still looking at Kaken, the sunset merely the lighting that outlined his features and glinted in his crimson eyes. After a moment, Kaken turned his head and their eyes met, and Izuku forgot the sun altogether. Kaken didn't look away. Izuku didn't think he could even if he tried. I thought we were watching the sunset, Kaken murmured. I already said I prefer you, Izuku whispered back. Kaken smiled, small and soft. Still lame. I love you, Izuku said, for the second time but nervous all the same. Kaken exhaled softly and leaned towards him. I love you too, dummy, he murmured into Izuku's lips before they met. Midoriya Izuku may know more than a few things now, but there was one thing at the top of the list. You can probably guess what it is. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.